I turned my horse around and rode back into the massacre to kill a baby. Let me back up, because that sentence deserves a little context, and I deserve a little grace. The baby's name was Liu Shan. He was maybe a year old, fat, drooling, and completely useless. And he was the only thing standing between me and everything. And right then, everything was on fire. Picture the worst day of your life and then set it in a river of running people. Dangyang Road, 10 miles of it, packed shoulder to shoulder with refugees who hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and hadn't stopped moving in 3 days. Because 10 miles behind them was a black tide of iron armor that turned strong men into forced labor and weak men into jerky, military rations. That's not me being dramatic. That was the going rate for getting caught by Cao Cao's army. And somewhere in that screaming, trampling chaos was my father's family, cut off from the main column. My father being Liu Bei, the Imperial Uncle, the man with the reputation, the sighing, the crying, the benevolence you could spread on bread. My father having exactly one problem in life, which was that after 20 years of wandering, he still didn't have a real heir. He had me, Liu Feng, the adopted one, picked up, groomed, surname swapped, written into the family book, the whole ceremony. For about a year, I was the future. Then the same year he adopted me, his actual son popped out, Liu Shan. And nobody said anything out loud, because in polite company, you never do. But everybody knew the math instantly. From the moment that baby drew breath, I was furniture. Nice furniture. Furniture with a sword, but furniture. The only way I ever got the seat back was if the baby had an accident. And here I was, riding straight toward the baby, in the middle of an accident-rich environment. So back at camp, 3 different generals had already run to my father, tripping over each other to tell him the news. Your adopted son turned around. Your adopted son rode toward the Cao army. Your adopted son went in the exact direction your baby son is. You can see the shape they were drawing. The adopted heir, dispossessed, riding back into the smoke where the real heir is helpless and unwatched. One of them literally drew his sword and volunteered to go kill me and bring the baby home. My father stopped him, pondered. And then, this is the part that tells you everything about Liu Bei. He gave the order to organize the retreat, mark the road, get 100,000 people onto the boats, don't let a single one fall behind. Liu Shan and Liu Feng, his 2 sons, he didn't mention at all. Cold, beautifully, professionally cold. Ask me sometime how that feels from the receiving end. Meanwhile, upriver, I was doing exactly what everyone feared. I broke through the Wei soldiers, I killed the ones who got in my way, and I found her, Lady Mi, one of my father's wives, hiding behind a broken stone wall with the baby clutched to her chest. And when she saw me, she was more scared than she'd been of the entire enemy army. She hugged Liu Shan tighter and shook her head, over and over, begging me with her eyes to spare him, because she knew the math too. Here's what she didn't know. 10 minutes earlier, she'd have been reading me exactly right. My plan when I set out was very simple and very ugly. Get to Liu Shan before Zhou Yun does, and end this. Kill the trash before the loyal general finds him. Come home the grieving big brother. Keep my seat. That was the plan. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend I'm a nice person. I rode back to do murder. And then somewhere between the 4th dead soldier and the 5th, my brain, the one thing I actually brought with me into this world, but we'll get to that, did some arithmetic. Kill Liu Shan. Do I get to be crown prince? Not necessarily. Liu Shan's dead, sure, but my father has other sons floating around out there. And even if I clear the whole board, does anyone honestly believe Liu Bei wouldn't know exactly what I'd done? And even if my father somehow didn't figure it out, do you really think Zhuge Liang wouldn't? The sleeping dragon himself, smartest man in 3 kingdoms, is he going to look at a dead baby and a suddenly promoted adopted son and go, huh, weird coincidence? The title of crown prince is a chair you can be pushed out of. What I actually wanted wasn't the chair, it was real power that nobody could take back. And for an adopted son with a foreign surname, the fastest road to that wasn't a dead brother. It was complete, unquestionable, load-bearing trust. So I changed the plan mid-gallop. I got off my horse in front of the terrified woman. I put my fists together and I bowed. My lady, take Liu Shan and ride. I'll cover you. She thought she'd misheard. Why would you save us? 2 Wei soldiers charged in. I cut them both down without breaking eye contact and said the truest thing I'd say all day. Shouldn't I? Then it all went sideways in the practical way things do. She tried to climb onto the horse and her legs wouldn't hold her. I tried to shove her up and, I'm going to be diplomatic, Lady Mi lived a comfortable palace life and the horse and I simply could not achieve liftoff. We both went down in the mud. So she made the call for both of us. She pressed Liu Shan into my arms. Liu Feng, I believe you. Get him to Liu Bei. And she turned and ran for the well. Now, the version of me from 10 minutes ago would have let her, but I grabbed her, and for a reason I genuinely can't explain to this day, I decided I wasn't going to let this woman drown herself in a hole in the ground. I threw her into a corner. I pried the clothes off a dead refugee. I dumped them over her. I smeared a fistful of mud across her face, and I told her, the Cao army only cares about my father's family. Nobody hunts a filthy, nameless refugee. Walk east with the crowd. Live for his sake. She wiped her dirty face, pressed her lips together, and nodded like she'd swallowed a spine. Then I tucked the baby into my cloak, got back on the horse, and started the fun part, which was riding out of a battlefield with a 1-year-old strapped to my chest while archers who spotted a young officer named Liu Shan started using me for target practice. I took an arrow in the shoulder to keep from taking it in the swaddling clothes. Off in the distance, Zhao Yun, the actual legendary Zhao Yun, the man history wrote this whole scene about, was tearing through the Cao lines still looking for a baby I already had, which, honestly, took a lot of heat off me. Thanks, Zhao Yun, I owe you. I didn't stop. I bent low, let the arrows go by, and I did not let that horse slow down for a single breath until I saw my father's banners. Which brings us back around to the opening scene of my life. I came in on the white horse, 3 arrows in my back, covered in so much blood the horse looked painted. My helmet was gone, my hair was down over my face, and the whole camp had already heard the rumor, so they were all standing there watching the traitor arrive. My father rushed forward, brushed the hair off my face, and froze, and his hand drifted to his sword, because for 1 second, he genuinely didn't know if he was looking at his rescuer or his assassin. I looked up at him and smiled, and I meant it, which surprised me most of all. "Father," I said, and with a shaking, bloody hand, I pulled a swaddled bundle out of my cloak, a baby, fast asleep. Slightly annoyed at being jostled, pursed his little lips, shifted, and went right back to sleep because Liu Shan had exactly zero idea that his entire future had just been decided by a guy who'd shown up to kill him. "Your son," I said. "Your son saves Liu Shan." Then I passed out and hit the dirt. And I want you to understand what happened in the silence after that, because it's the whole trick of my life in one moment. Every soldier, every scholar, every general standing in that camp had spent the last hour building a story in their heads. The jealous adopted son murders the true heir. It was clean. It was logical. It was exactly what they'd have done. Some of them had already decided to hate me. A few had started sharpening things. And then the traitor turned out to have ridden into hell to bring the baby home. In a dynasty that ran entirely on the words benevolence, righteousness, filial duty, and brotherly love, I had just performed all 4 at once, publicly, while bleeding. Their whole opinion of me flipped in a single heartbeat. Eldest, young master's kindness is as steadfast as Mount Tai. Somebody breathed. Somebody else was crying. My father grabbed my hand with tears running into his beard and started calling me his good son. And I love this part. In his excitement, he actually tossed Liu Shan aside like a sack of laundry. The baby hit the ground and started screaming. And I, who was supposed to be unconscious, cracked one eye and mumbled, Liu Shan, don't cry. Big brother's here." My father wept with joy. "Liu Feng, it's good you're alive. Why bother about him?" And I gripped his arm, and with cracked lips, I gave him the line I'd loaded before I ever got on the horse. "Liu Shan is my brother. How could I abandon him?" I felt him go still. I felt the whole thing land. The biological son took everything that belonged to the adopted son, and the adopted son rode into fire to hand it back. He didn't wipe his tears. He lifted his head and roared an order. "Once we cross the river, find me the finest physician in the land, and no matter what it costs, save Liu Feng." I let my eyes close, and under all that blood I smiled, because I understood something the whole weeping camp did not. I hadn't saved my brother. I'd bought the trust. And I'd gotten it at a discount, in the one currency my father could never say no to. So, that's how it starts. Adopted son, foreign surname, bottom of the family, one shoulder full of arrows, and a plan so quiet nobody in the entire world had noticed it yet. Well, almost nobody. There was one man on that riverbank who wasn't crying. The man who wasn't crying was Zhou Liang. But before I introduce you to the smartest person who's going to spend the next year failing to figure me out, I owe you the one piece of information that makes all of this make sense. I'm not from here. Somewhere, sometime, in a life I don't talk about, I was a guy who read the 3 kingdoms the way other people memorize sports statistics. Every battle, every betrayal, every clever man who dies young of an illness he never sees coming. I knew all of it cold. And then the universe, which as far as I can tell runs entirely on cruelty and irony, dropped me into the body of Liu Feng, Liu Bei's adopted son. The one guy in the whole saga whose ending I remembered a little too well. Because I remembered how his story finishes. He stays loyal his entire life. He wins battle after battle. And at the very end, a single sentence gets whispered into my father's ear. This one, ultimately, will be hard to control. And my benevolent, weeping, world-loving father hands his loyal adopted son a 3-foot length of white silk and an instruction to hang himself. That's the reward for a lifetime of loyalty. That's the script. And I decided on Dangyang Road that I was going to burn the script and write a better one. I didn't come in with cheat codes, by the way. I want to manage expectations. No magic sword, no dragon, no 1,000 years of cultivation. What I've got is a glitchy little daily sign-in system that hands me random junk, plus about 30% of a divine general's strength, which in practice means I'm a solid second-rate fighter who can just barely go toe-to-toe with my best friend when he isn't trying. That's it. That's the whole toolkit. No superpower is going to save me here, only the script, and a face people trust. So, the boat. Once we crossed the river, the mood turned to relief and wine, and everyone taking turns praising my noble character, which is delightful right up until the moment the actual dangerous man in the room clears his throat. I was lying on a cot with my shoulder wrapped, half a bowl of meat porridge in me, when my father came into the boat awning with Zhuge Liang trailing behind, waving that feather fan he waves. My father pressed me back down before I could rise, asked how I felt. I told him I could eat and sleep and I'd heal fast, and then I asked about Liu Shan first, before anything else, because I never miss a beat, and I watched it warm my father right through. Then the fan stopped moving. "Eldest young master," Zhuge Liang said, pleasant as spring, "your noble conduct today truly moved me. I have one question." And I smiled a calm smile while my heart tried to climb out of my chest, because everyone else in that boat was a mark, but this was Zhuge Liang. When two experts fence, a single careless word ends you, and I could not dodge this one. "As far as I know," he said, "you and the young master rarely meet. Your bond isn't deep. Why would you risk your life for him today?" There it was, the whole trap in one soft sentence. Explain, out loud, in front of your father, exactly what was in your heart when you rode back toward that baby. So I laughed gently, and I threw the blade back at him. "Strategist, you're mistaken. Few meetings don't mean shallow feeling. If I hadn't seen Liu Shan in 30 years, and I heard my brother was in danger, I'd cross 1,000 miles to save him. That's affection. And it's my duty as the elder brother. Reasonable. Touching, and it quietly relocated the suspicion onto him. Yeah, why did you come up with such an ugly question about two brothers who love each other? What's it to you?" Zhuge Liang gave a wry little smile and folded, gracefully, the way strong men fold when they've decided the fight isn't worth the cup. "It seems my own brother in Eastern Wu knows I'm in trouble and won't lift a finger. The difference is heaven and earth. I envy the bond between you two." Turned his own defeat into a compliment and walked it out the door. I filed that away. This man loses like a professional. But my father's heart had stirred, and now he wanted more. "Liu Feng, I only learned today that you two rarely meet. I never imagined you'd feel so deeply for each other." Which sounds like praise and is actually the exact same knife, resharpened. "Explain yourself, son. Say the real reason." So I gave the room the speech. Because here's a thing I've learned. The best lie is a true thing aimed at the right audience. "I've heard," I said, "that Cao Cao is treacherous, but he rose in the north on the strength of his clan brothers standing with him." The Sun family kept Yangdong because a dying brother handed the seat to his brother without a flicker of jealousy. My own father, short on soldiers and generals, survived every disaster because his brothers, my second and third uncles, shielded him with their bodies. And look at Yuan Shao and Yuan Shu, who owned the richest land under heaven and spent it suspecting and slandering each other into the grave. When brothers unite, the great cause prospers. When brothers split, the great cause dies. And I want you to know I did not have to work for the next part because a young man in green robes off to the side burst into tears on cue. Liu Qi, Liu Biao's eldest son, the sad, decent, dying heir of Jingzhou, who had just watched his own brother get his birthright plundered by Cao Cao. "Well said," he sobbed. "If my brother and I had held Jingxiang together, how could Cao Cao have taken 8 counties from us? I failed my father." Perfect. My argument now had a live demonstration weeping in the corner. "When brothers unite," I finished, "the great cause prospers. When brothers separate, it perishes. For public and private, for feeling and reason both. That is why I risked my life for Liu Shan today." It went off like a bell in that room. It landed hardest exactly where I aimed it, in Liu Bei, in Guan Yu, in Zhang Fei. 3 men who once swore an oath in a peach garden and would die for the word brother. My father nodded and nodded, tears in his eyes, looking at his long-neglected adopted son like he was seeing him new. Even Guan Yu, who had spent years looking at me the way you look at something the cat brought in, stroked that magnificent beard and gave the smallest nod, his narrow eyes holding something that looked a lot like reconsideration. Because in a time like this, he was thinking, loyalty and brotherhood are the best calling cards a man can carry. Buddy, you have no idea. They're my only product. Late that night, on the bank at Shako, another boat came in with a torn Zhou banner, and a white-robed general covered head to foot in blood led his horse down the ramp, and behind him came a filthy, exhausted, extremely alive Lady Mi, Zhao Yun, who'd never found the baby because I had the baby, who'd found the wife instead, and heard from her own mouth that Liu Feng had taken Liu Shan away. He had every reason to assume the worst. And then he thought it through, the way loyal, careful men do, and landed on the only kind conclusion left. If Liu Feng meant harm, Lady Mi wouldn't be alive to tell him anything. He wasn't wrong. She was my alibi and my insurance, and I'd made her both without her ever knowing it. He knelt to my father, delighted the young master was safe, and, this got me a little, I'll admit, even more delighted that the adopted son had turned out loyal after all. Zhao Yun's a genuinely good man. I'd end up wanting him on my side for reasons that had nothing to do with any of that. So, one day in, arrow in the shoulder, 100,000 people saved, a legend of my own filial heroism spreading down the river faster than any boat, and a father who'd just publicly promised to spare no cost to keep me breathing. You'd think I'd rest. You'd think I'd bank the win. Instead, the next morning, alone with my father and the baby, when he looked at me with real warmth and said the 4 words every ambitious man dreams of hearing, "Tell me what you want." I looked him dead in the eye, and asked for the single most disappointing thing a rising young hero could possibly request. "Father," I said, folding my hands, deadly serious, "your son wants a woman." For a second, he thought his ears had betrayed him. "Liu Feng, what did you say?" I'm not afraid to admit it. Facing death today, I realized I've never married, never taken a concubine, never even been near a woman, and I feel a little regretful. You have to understand the menu he was expecting me to order from. Military command, an official post, land, a chance to prove myself, a capable son he could lean on. Any of those, and he'd have been thrilled and terrified in equal measure, because any of those meant the adopted son was reaching for power with a baby heir in the cradle. And instead, I asked for a girl. He stood up so fast he nearly went through the roof, and the look on his face, I will treasure it, was pure, undiluted disappointment. He started pacing. "Liu Feng, I had such high hopes for you. A real man makes his name and doesn't fret about women. And you, how could you?" Sigh. He gathered himself, pointed a finger. "I'll give you one more chance. What do you want?" "If father asks again," I said, "I'll give the same answer, and father always keeps his word." He clutched at his own chest like I'd stabbed him, paced 3 more laps, stopped. "Fine, what kind of woman?" I pretended to consider this like a matter of state. Gentle as water, beautiful, charming, and if she could sing and dance, even better. Real thorough of me, I thought. "Humph, then you wait." And he shoved the door open and stormed out, so angry his chest hurt, before I could add specifications about the singing. "Here's the thing I need you to hold on to, because it's the entire architecture of my survival, and I built it in that one conversation. My father's problem was never that I might be useless. His problem was that I might be great. A great adopted son, brave and loyal and beloved, is a mountain that sits on the baby heir's chest for the rest of his life. That's the man Liu Bei would eventually have to kill. But a great adopted son who's also a hopeless, shameless, girl-chasing embarrassment with no ambition whatsoever? That man is a gift. That man does the work and wants nothing. That man you keep. So I wasn't asking for a woman. I was buying a mask, and I just made the down payment in front of the only audience that mattered. There was, of course, a witness who saw straight through the whole performance. It just took him until midnight to laugh about it. Late that night, my father couldn't sleep, stood on the bank staring at the black water, sighing, which is his cardio. Zhou Liang drifted up beside him, fan going. "My lord, what troubles you?" My father unloaded. All 100,000 refugees settled, 15 military camps, 138 civilian camps, provisions arranged. Zhou Liang had organized the whole flood of humanity in an afternoon, and my father praised him for it, called him a crouching dragon, and then admitted the real thing keeping him awake wasn't logistics, it was me. I wanted to reward him for saving his brother, my father said. I asked what he wanted. Guess what he said? Zhou Liang, who reads people the way I read the future, took a guess that showed exactly how dangerous he thought I was. Could the eldest young master want the position of heir apparent? If he wanted the throne, my father waved, I wouldn't be this angry. Then what the eldest young master wants is women. He asked me for women, said he's dying without a wife, never touched a woman, wants her gentle and beautiful and able to sing and dance. Look at him, what a pathetic guy. Sigh. And Zhou Liang paused, and I would give a great deal to have seen his face in that moment, because something clicked behind those eyes, and then he started to laugh. First, a shake of the shoulders, then he was stroking his fan and laughing openly. Then he was bent over, wheezing, choking, laughing like this was the single funniest joke in the entire recorded history of the world. My father stood there, completely bewildered. Zhou Liang. Why are you laughing? The strategist bowed and put his smile away, and said, calm as anything, Congratulations, my lord. What do you mean by that? If the eldest young master did everything perfectly and flawlessly, it would raise suspicion. A man that capable, that loyal, that beloved, you would have to watch him. But a man with one glaring, harmless, embarrassing weakness, that is a blessing, my lord. For you, and even more so for the young master in the cradle. I want to be clear about what happened there. Zhou Liang saw it. He looked at the whole trick, the loyalty, the heroism, the sudden ridiculous request for a girl, and he understood I was wearing a mask on purpose. He was the one man alive who caught it that very first night, and he decided it was good news. Because from his chair, a devoted, capable, unambitious Liu Feng who only wanted pretty women was the perfect asset, a mountain that had cheerfully agreed to be a hill. The perfect right hand for the baby who'd inherit everything. So the smartest man in the world looked at my act, saw straight through it, and said congratulations. He caught me. He just liked what he caught. That's the thing about wearing a good mask in front of a genius. He'll know it's a mask. The whole game is making sure he prefers you in it. My father felt the tightness leave his chest all at once. Zhou Liang, what do we do about it? Since you promised the young master a woman, Zhou Liang said, smiling at the river, we should naturally find him one, which was its own small comedy. 100,000 refugees had just been dumped on a bank with nothing to eat, and where exactly do you shop for a gentle, beautiful, singing, dancing woman under those conditions? But I didn't have to solve that. The whole clan owed me now. The whole clan had watched me bleed for the baby, and the machinery of my father's guilt was already grinding grinding toward the answer. They were going to find me a wife, and they were going to hand me on a silver plate a political alliance so valuable I'd have blushed to ask for it out loud. The wife they found me was Guan Yinping, Guan Feng for short, which is to say Guan Yu's daughter. Let me explain what that name is worth, because the woman herself is a separate and much funnier story. Guan Yu was my father's sworn brother, the god of war, the most feared blade in the empire, the man who could make a battlefield go quiet just by showing up. Marrying into his household wasn't a marriage, it was a treaty. It welded me to the innermost circle of the whole enterprise, the Peach Garden Brotherhood itself, and it happened because of a piece of meat. There was a dish, sweet pork, Jingshang style, and there's a whole legend behind it involving me, which, fine, I'll tell it, since it's the reason Guan Yu even considered handing me his daughter. Back in Xinya, an old army cook once dropped a slice of meat on the floor while serving me. Instead of scolding him, I picked it up and ate it. My father asked why. I said every grain and every scrap is somebody's sweat, and the cooks work themselves to the bone all day, so how could I bear to shout at a tired man over one mistake? That's the kind of line that gets a man adopted. It's also, and I say this with the fondness of a professional, completely load-bearing. The soldiers loved me for it. The cooks invented a dish to commemorate it. I got a reputation for treating the lowest men like they mattered, which cost me one dirty piece of pork and paid dividends for years. When another cook brought me that same sweet pork on the boat, I sent it to the wounded soldiers instead, because they needed it more than I did. And the old cook walked out weeping, and my father happened to be arriving as she left. He saw the meat leaving my room, asked if it didn't suit my taste. The cook said no, the young master loves it, he just wanted the wounded brothers to have some. My father turned to Guan Yu, who was standing right there, and said, Liu Feng is kind, generous, unmatched in filial and brotherly virtue. Guan Yu, he and your Guan Feng are about the same age. Quite a good match. Guan Yu chewed on that for a long time. In pure lineage, I was a fine catch. Imperial Han blood on my mother's side, the Imperial Uncle's adopted son on my father's. In character, I'd bled at Changban, and I ate meat off the floor for the common man, which is exactly the kind of upright nonsense Guan Yu respected. And Guan Feng and I had played together as kids in Xinye, which meant on paper we were made for each other. His one hesitation was the obvious one: adopted son. He worried, quietly, in the way a father worries, that if the succession ever turned ugly, his daughter would be caught in the crossfire before anyone could sort it out. But my father sighed the way he sighs, and pointed out he could give this loyal boy nothing else in return for Changban, and Guan Yu stroked his beard and felt his elder brother's love for the neglected adopted son, and cupped his hands and said, "Then I'll leave it to you, brother." And that was that. I got engaged to a treaty. Now, the treaty herself. When they told Guan Feng she was engaged, she was furious, right up until she heard it was me, at which point she was secretly delighted, because at the going rate of arranged marriages, a young, handsome, non-elderly, not immediately dying man was what the girls of that era called hard currency. She'd played with me as a kid. She knew I wasn't a toad. She was thrilled and hiding it, which is the most Guan Feng thing about her. And the very first day after the news, she showed up with a food box. "Brother Feng, I made you sweet pork with red bean paste. Have a taste." And she said it tilting her head, pursing her lips, looking incredibly, suspiciously obedient. Which is a lie every muscle in my body recognized instantly, because Guan Feng was, on a good day, a small typhoon in girl form. She never cooked, and the last time she looked this sweet, I ended up with a frog in my boot. I opened the box. Inside were several black rectangular objects that resembled chunks of coal and smelled like a house fire. "Try it!" Her eyes were shining with hope. In 2 years, I'll be your wife. As a wife, it's only right I take care of my husband. I learned it from the army cook." She said it dead serious. This was not a prank. This was a war crime committed out of love. If meat that falls on the floor tastes like dirt, this meat tasted like it had been rolled in mud, then dragged through cold furnace ash 7 or 8 times, for luck. I put a piece in my mouth. I chewed it thoroughly. I have survived poisonings less committed than that pork. "Is it good?" she asked, radiant. Delicious." "Then I'll try some." She popped a piece in her own mouth, chewed twice, and spat it straight back out. That's disgusting. And I looked at this girl, this small, furious tornado who had assaulted a plate of good pork specifically to take care of me, and I picked up the piece she just spat onto the table and ate that one too. "In times like these," I said, "when people are starving in the roads, not a grain and not a scrap can be wasted." Her face went scarlet. "How could you eat that? I already chewed it. It's filthy." "You're going to be my wife," I said. "How could I mind anything of yours?" One sentence. She was done. Rubbing her hands, blushing, completely at a loss, the god of war's daughter defeated by a piece of ruined pork and a straight face. "Brother Feng is the best," she managed. And she grabbed the whole plate to go make it again, and I stopped her. "No need. I'll eat whatever you make, no matter how it tastes." And that was it. The poor girl fell like a city with the gates open. I'm telling you the pork story for 2 reasons. 1, it's the closest thing to a soft spot I've got, and a man wearing a mask this heavy needs one true face somewhere, and hers was it. 2, and don't lose this, A girl who genuinely didn't care whether I lived or died as long as she got to be near me was, for a man in my position, worth more than an army. Guan Feng never once asked me to explain myself. Do you understand how rare that is in my life? While she was busy poisoning me back to health, the payoff of Changban kept rolling in. Because I'd become such a spectacular example of virtue, someone put my name forward for the filial and incorruptible list, a formal recommendation to enter officialdom, the kind of honor that does not fall on just anyone. And I later learned exactly how it fell on me. My father spent 3 days personally calling on 18 of the most famous scholars in Jiangxia to get his adopted son certified as filial. 3 days, 18 scholars, for a title. He really was going to spend down the whole guilt account. And I really was going to let him. At a banquet Liu Qi invited, everyone smiling, my father announced he wanted to give me 3 things, and told me to look happy about all of them, which was no strain because I was building an empire out of gifts. First, he said, a courtesy name. You've never had one. Choose Gongzhong or the other. And I understood the trap inside the gift instantly, because Liu Shan's courtesy name was Gongxi, and both of my options came down to the same character, loyalty. It was a leash, a moral chain welding me to that baby forever, so that my very name would remind the world I existed to serve him. Everything cuts 2 ways, though. My father saw a leash. I saw a business card. Under Liu Shan's name, I could walk into any camp in Shuhan and be trusted on sight. So I smiled my most innocent smile and picked the loyalty. Thank you, father. Second, he had a guard lead over a magnificent white horse, tall as a legend. The Dilu. They say it curses its master with misfortune, but it saved my life in my darkest hour. I give it to you. And he gave it up like he was cutting off his own arm, which he sort of was, and I understood the etiquette. A horse that curses a weak master is no threat to a strong one, and refusing would be an insult. So I didn't do the polite dance. I threw myself at it with open, honest greed. Wonderful, wonderful. I've needed a fine horse forever. Thank you, father. Sometimes bare-faced greed reads as more sincere than false modesty. He beamed. Third. He turned to Liu Qi, and the sick young man grinned like this was better than his own birthday. As prefect of Jiangxia, I have a county without a magistrate, Jingling, in the west. I recommend you, brother, as magistrate of Jingling. And there it was, my first real post, a seat at the table where Jiangxia's military and politics actually got decided. On paper, I now outranked men who'd bled for the family for 20 years. I put on a troubled face and hemmed about being too young and inexperienced. Liu Qi laughed and said, everybody has a first time. This is his first time being prefect too. I glanced at my father and he gave me the smallest nod. Take it. And I cupped my hands and accepted without further hesitation, because there is a right and a wrong moment to stop being humble, and this was the moment. Magistrate of Jingling, 20 years old or close enough, a horse that curses its owner, a name that changed me to a baby, and a county to run. And I was about to do the single most outrageous thing a newly promoted, ambitious young man could possibly do with a county. Absolutely nothing. But first, I had to survive a room. Jiangxia's Provincial Hall, the day I was introduced as the new magistrate of Jingling. Black-robed civil officials on one side, red-robed generals on the other, Liu Qi lounging in the center chair, and me in my new black robe sitting among the civil men trying to look harmless. They congratulated me, politely, the way a room congratulates a growth it can't cut off yet. Because here was the real situation, under the smiles. Jiangxia was Liu Qi's, and Liu Qi had just taken in my father's 100,000 refugees, and every native official in that hall was quietly losing his mind about it. 100,000 extra mouths, in a lean year, eating the granaries, filling the streets, and, worst of all, arriving with 3 of the deadliest generals alive, and a leader more beloved than their own young master. They didn't see refugees. They saw a cuckoo settling into their nest, and they wanted it gone, and they couldn't say so to Liu Bei's face, so they said it to mine. One old official, all courtesy and no warmth, welcomed me and then wondered aloud, ever so casually, exactly how many months or years the honored magistrate of Jingling expected to grace Jiangxia. Which sounds like small talk and means, when are your 100,000 freeloaders leaving? A bearded general stood and lamented the granaries emptying too fast. Another mourned the crime, the crowded streets, the suffering people. One by one they laid the same brick, and then the old man cupped his hands and, with a face full of contempt, invited the brilliant 16-year-old to share his no doubt insightful solution. The whole hall went silent to watch the child squirm. How do you verbally break a room full of officials without insulting your host when they've just handed you the one problem nobody can touch? I thought about it for a moment, and then I gave them the most unbelievable sentence in the calmest possible voice. Drive my 100,000 out of Jiangxia, all your problems solved. You could hear the room stop breathing. Liu Qi nearly fell off his chair. Brother, what are you saying? And I let it hang, and then I raised my voice just slightly. Be honest with yourselves, isn't that what every one of you is thinking? The old man went red and chuckled that neither he nor his colleagues had said any such thing. Everyone hummed agreement. And I laughed, a small laugh with a knife in it. So the officials of Changsha no longer dare to speak one honest word. He recovered, sneered. And are you really willing to withdraw your 100,000 from Changsha? If the prefect won't have us, we'll go. Naturally. Liu Qi panicked. I never meant that. And of course he didn't. And of course I knew he didn't. He needed my father as much as my father needed him. I wasn't talking to Liu Qi. I was talking through him, to the men in the hall, and I was about to show them a nightmare. Where would you go? The old man pressed, enjoying himself. Where else? 100,000 soldiers and civilians of Xinye march back into Jingzhou. Men, women, and children, armed, every one of them, to fight Cao Cao to the last drop of blood. Calm and unhurried, and underneath it, the low iron note of people who have already decided to die. The old man laughed again. If your people are so eager to die fighting Cao Cao, why didn't Lord Xuande stand and die at Xinye instead of running here? The hall chuckled, waiting for me to trip. I lifted my head. 100,000 fled to Jiangsha because my father couldn't bear to see them slaughtered. And I know the prefect of Jiangsha is a kind man, kind enough to save their lives if he takes them in. Then I pivoted and bowed to Liu Qi and dropped the temperature 10 degrees. But if Jiangsha refuses them, then the people have no one left to rely on, and 100,000 with nowhere to go will follow Lord Xuande and fight the Cao army to the last man. So I begged the prefect, grant that I may die beside my father in Jingzhou, and spend my last blood for my uncle Liu Biao's legacy. Then I sat down and went quiet, and I watched it work. Because here's the trick I'd loaded under all that filial noise. On the surface, I was just shaming them with Liu Biao's name. But the sharp men in that room, not sweet decent Liu Qi, who missed it entirely, but the survivors heard the second sentence. 100,000 people willing to die. Do you understand what that is? That's not a threat about Cao Cao. Think about it from another angle. What if the 100,000 don't leave? What if, at my father's word, they turn their spears around and point them at you? I never once said the word Jiangsha. I never had to. I just let a room full of clever, frightened men do the arithmetic themselves. If these people can't beat Cao Cao, can't they at least beat you? And Jiangsha's real generals had all died with old Huang Zu. What was left in that hall couldn't hold a wall against a determined mob, let alone Guan Yu, Zhang Fei, and Zhao Yun leading one. The sweat came up on a dozen foreheads at once, but I wasn't done. I never leave a man only frightened when I can leave him grateful. So when the old man, softer now, asked whether Cao Cao would really attack Jiangsha if my father stayed, I told him the truth that mattered. Whether Cao Cao attacks has nothing to do with my father. If Cao Cao decides Jiangsha should burn, it burns. The question you should be asking isn't whether he'll attack, it's whether he'll slaughter. And you all remember what slaughter looks like here. Sun Quan already massacred Xiakou once, corpses in the streets, rivers running red. And Cao Cao's massacres are worse than Sun Quan's. Sun Quan took one town. Cao Cao takes provinces. The whole hall was sweating through their robes now. And when they asked where the blow would fall, I gave them the one word that turned fear into obedience. Red cliffs. Don't believe me? Take a boat downriver and count the warships Chao's army is building. A general spoke up. The scouts had reported exactly that, yesterday. And when the old man tried the last tired dodge, Red Cliffs isn't our land, so what's it to us? I closed the door for good. When the nest is overturned, how does any egg stay whole? If Red Cliffs falls, if Eastern Wu breaks, all of Jiangnan goes to Cao Cao. And you think he'll leave you your one little Jiangsha? Silence. Long silence. And then the old man, all the fight gone out of him, asked the only question left. Then, young master, how do we protect Jiangsha? Which is how a 16-year-old walked into a hostile room, threatened it, terrified it, and walked out having converted it. Concentrate Jiangsha and Xinye, ally east with Sun Quan, resist Cao Cao together. Only then is Jiangsha safe. They grumbled about the blood feud with Sun Quan, and I told them that in a house on fire, enemies huddle for warmth, and only a fool thinks the whole world is as short-sighted as he is. One sentence, and the hall flushed with shame and shut up. And Liu Qi, sweet, dying, decent Liu Qi, took out the military tally, the command seal for Jiangsha's 10,000 troops, and handed it to me. Handed it to me. Uncle should command these men against Cao Cao, he said. And when I swept my eyes across his generals, waiting for the mutiny, every one of them looked at the floor, because they knew this was Liu Qi giving Jiangsha to my father with both hands, and they knew none of them could hold the border themselves, and they had no better idea, so they said nothing. I took the tally. Yes, sir, I said, and walked out with an army I'd been in the building for one afternoon. Now here's the part I enjoyed most. My father and Zhuge Liang were, at that very moment, working up their nerve to go begging Liu Qi for exactly these troops. It was supposed to be a simple thing. My father just had to say the word. Except my father would never say the word, because saying it would dent the sacred reputation, which meant the actual asking always rolled downhill onto Zhuge Liang, who was used to it and hated it. He was literally on his way out the door to go swallow his pride and beg. And he nearly walked into me. Young master, weren't you working in Jiangsha? Why are you back? Father, strategist, I said, presenting the tally with both hands. I brought a gift. I'd persuaded Liu Qi, I told them, borrowed 10,000 troops, for the alliance, for the war, for everything they'd been about to grovel for. My father clapped his hands and crowed and called it another great achievement. Then he turned to his strategist with a grin. Zhuge Liang, oh Zhuge Liang, the tally's already here, seems you don't need to make the trip after all. And Zhuge Liang paused, and something strange crossed his eyes. Because, and he told me this himself much later, so I'm not inventing it, for the first time in his career, he had the sensation of a man about to leave his house who finds the sedan chair already waiting at the gate. About to write, and someone's already laid out paper and ink. About to march, and the provisions are already loaded. He got to stand there and simply not do the miserable thing he'd been dreading, because someone had quietly done it for him. He wasn't grateful, exactly. Zhuge Liang doesn't do grateful. He did something more dangerous. He got curious. Meanwhile, I went to Jingling to be the worst magistrate in the history of counties. I had a plan, and the plan required Sun Qian. Sun Qian was the aide my father lent me, not a genius, but careful, reliable, and genuinely experienced at the boring grind of running a place. So the two of us rode out to Jingling, and I stood on a hilltop and looked down at my new domain, and my new domain looked back at me, and it was awful. Broken walls, a handful of people, ruin as far as I could see. High ground on three sides, a swampy bowl in the middle, mudflats like a cracked mirror, no good for millet, no good for herds, no good for cities. Good for growing rice and hunting frogs, and that was about the extent of it. This is quite a challenge, I said. Eldest young master, Sun Qian asked, what do you think we should do? I already knew exactly what to do. I took the magistrate's seal of office out of my pocket and held it out to him with both hands. Liu Feng has no ideas at all. Please, Mr. Sun, take charge. Sun Qian's jaw came very close to hitting the mudflat. Young master, what do you mean by this? Honestly, sir, the thing I fear most in the world is paperwork. There's so much to figure out. I don't even know where to start. I can only rely on you. Just do it. The credit's all yours. The blame's all mine. Please, please, please. And I bowed 3 times, put the seal in his hands, turned around, and left. And I left him standing on a hill in the wind, hair everywhere, holding the entire county, wondering what had just happened to him. You have to understand why I did that, because it's the mask in action, and it cost me nothing. A capable, ambitious young magistrate who grips his county and shows off his talent. That's a man building a base. That's a man Liu Bei has to keep an eye on. But a magistrate who hands the whole thing to somebody else so he can go play, that's a lazy, harmless boy. Exactly what I'd advertised. Sun Qian, meanwhile, was competent and honest, so the county would actually run fine, and I'd get to look useless while learning how it all worked by watching over his shoulder. Everybody wins, especially the guy who wanted to look like he was losing, and playing, as it turned out, came with company. Because when I got back to my sad little mud house, Quan Feng was already there under a tree, hopping around catching butterflies, a food box at her feet. Quan Feng, what are you doing in Jingling? Hey, Brother Feng, she marched over, dead serious. I'm taking care of you. I made pastries. I tasted them myself. They're not that bad. So now I had a little tag-along, which was fine, better than fine. At least somebody cared, even if the somebody occasionally tried to kill me with baked goods. We spent days like that. I taught her to catch frogs, to fish, to make a slingshot, to shoot birds, to fight crickets. At night, a maid stayed with her in the house next to mine, all proper. During the day, we were just 2 people wasting sunlight by a lotus pond. And I'll be honest with you, take away everything else, no Cao Cao, no succession, no white silk waiting in my future, and a plain ordinary life catching frogs with Quan Feng would not have been the worst thing that could happen to a man. But this was a world on fire, and a warm bed is not a strategy. Only strength keeps you alive in the long run. So even while I taught a girl to grill frogs, half my brain was somewhere in the future, awake at night, running the numbers on how to make myself into something too useful to kill and too harmless to fear. My father, of course, checked on me, saw Jingling running smoothly, orderly, methodical, Sun Qian doing an excellent job, and asked Sun Qian how the magistrate was performing. Sun Qian looked like he'd swallowed a live fly, hesitated, sighed. Speak freely, my father said. My lord, since the eldest young master took office, he hasn't come to the government office a single day. He handed me the seal, abandoned all responsibility, and spends every hour catching frogs with Quan Feng. My father, to his credit, did not immediately combust. He nodded thoughtfully, worried aloud that if I glued myself to Sun Qian like that, an enemy could sabotage things and pin the blame on me. Talented and virtuous, he concluded, but lacking political foresight, which was the exact impression I'd spent good frog-catching hours cultivating, so I couldn't have been happier. He gave me a few more days of rope, and then he summoned me and asked how the people of Jingling were doing. And I did the thing that drives my father the most insane, which is tell the pure truth. Father, I know nothing about this. He blinked. He'd assumed I'd at least cram, do a little homework, fake competence. He did not expect me to walk in and cheerfully confess to knowing absolutely nothing about the county I governed. Honest is honest, and infuriating is infuriating, and I was managing to be both at maximum volume. As magistrate, he said, temper climbing, everything passes through your hands. How can you be completely unaware? Father, I'm not familiar with the work, so I entrusted it all to Mr. Sun. Any merit is his, any fault, punish me. His face did a thing, and I understood the bind I was putting him in, and I was doing it on purpose. He knew a son with no ambition was, strategically, a good thing, but he also could not bear to hand his precious baby heir a useless brother. Loyalty deserved opportunity. So he stiffened up and ordered me to take office the very next day, learn from Sun Qian, and actually govern. And I responded to a direct order from my father to grow up by kneeling down and begging him not to make me do it. "Father, please don't make your son the magistrate of Jingling." His chest tightened with rage. "Liu Feng, how do you not understand your father's good intentions? Tell me, what reason could you possibly have to refuse a county?" "Father, Jingling's affairs are complicated, and I've no experience, and I've been studying at home, and I'm afraid of neglecting Guan Feng." He pointed at me and could not get a word out. He squatted down, he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said the thing fathers say, "A hero wields a 3-foot sword and does deeds without equal. I meant to promote you. Why are you so unambitious?" And I nodded along, agreeing with every word, because my mind was clear as a mirror the whole time. Show even a flicker of hunger for power, and this gentle, worried man starts watching me, so I would stay exactly what I'd built, capable, but with no ambition anyone could point to. I was, believe it or not, completely calm through the entire scolding, and that's when a guard came in and reported that Lu Su had arrived. Lu Su was the famous Jiangdong scholar, and he'd come to Jiangsha to pay his respects. That's the story. Someone had died. Well, Liu Biao had died. And here was Eastern Wu's most respected gentleman, arriving with condolences and a sad face. Except Jingzhou and Jiangdong had spent decades as enemies, with the small matter of a murdered father between them. You do not send your top diplomat to weep at the funeral of a man your side has a blood feud with. So my father, who has excellent instincts, immediately smelled it and called for Zhuge Liang and the rest. And while he waited for his advisors, he made the mistake of idly asking me, the frog-catching disappointment, what I made of it. And I answered without a beat of hesitation. "They want to pull our military intelligence out of us and prepare a countermeasure." My father frowned, displeased. "Think before you speak." So I pretended to think, which is a skill in itself, and then asked Liu Qi a single question. "When Sun Ce died, did Jingzhou send anyone to Jiangdong to offer condolences?" Liu Qi shook his head. "Of course not. Blood feud. We'd never." And I nodded. "Then there's no purpose here but spying." And a moment later, Zhuge Liang swept in, and before he'd even sat, he asked Liu Qi the exact same question. "When Sun Ce died, did we send condolences?" And reached the exact same conclusion, word for word. Not condolences, intelligence. Liu Feng and Zhuge Liang, same read, back to back, one right after the other. My father kept his face still, but I caught him glance at me with something new in it, surprise. And under the surprise, that small, dangerous admiration a careful man tries not to feel. I need you to understand what I was doing there, and why it was a risk worth taking. Every time I matched Zhuge Liang, I chipped a little at my own disguise. The lecture isn't supposed to be that sharp, but I'd calculated something. My father would forgive brilliance in a boy who wanted nothing, the way you forgive a clever dog. What he'd never forgive was brilliance plus hunger. So I let the brains show, and kept the ambition buried, and prayed the ledger balanced. The upshot of Lu Su's visit was the whole Red Cliffs machine grinding into motion. Zhuge Liang would go with Lu Su to Chaisang to arrange the alliance. My father would garrison Xiakou with 20,000 men, ready to move if Eastern Wu won, march south and take Jingzhou. If Cao Cao won, drive east and take Jiangdong. Everyone thought it was a fine plan. Everyone except my father, who sat there with one brow slightly furrowed, like a man with a stone in his shoe he couldn't name. And that's when he turned to the son who'd been sitting silent the whole meeting and said, "Liu Feng, what are your thoughts?" Now I remembered something. In the version of history I'd read, one of Guan Yu's own officers eventually betrays him, and I, the original I, the loyal one, sit in my 3 commanderies at Shangyang and send no help, and get blamed for it, and get the white silk. I remembered where that road starts, and so I decided to plant a seed, gently. "The strategist just said," I began, careful, "that if Eastern Wu wins, we seize Jingzhou while they're busy chasing Cao Cao?" "Exactly," said Zhuge Liang. I nodded and let a little worry show. It's an ingenious plan, but my father has always governed by benevolence and righteousness. Profiting off Eastern Wu's back while they bleed, won't that stain his name for dishonesty? Lord Sun won't accept it quietly. The alliance may look solid on the surface, but there'll be cracks in the shadows, and those scoundrels will put a knife in our back the moment we look away. My father nodded, hard, because I'd found the stone in his shoe and named it. The man built his whole empire on the word righteous, and taking Jingzhou behind Sun Quan's back was exactly the thing his conscience hated. Zhuge Liang went quietly alarmed because, I'd bet the horse on this, it was precisely what he worried about too. He sighed. The eldest young master's concern is valid, but we live under another man's roof. To find a place to stand, we have no other choice. Not necessarily, I said, and cupped my hands. If we take the 4 commanderies of southern Jing before the Battle of Red Cliffs even ends, then it isn't profiting off anyone's back. Eastern Wu will have nothing to say. Absolutely not, Zhuge Liang shook his head. We have 20,000 men. That's already the floor of our bargain with Eastern Wu. We cannot spare a single soldier to go conquer somewhere else. I said it calmly. The strategist misunderstands. I said I would take the 4 commanderies. I never said I'd use 20,000 men. Not 20,000. Then what? I'll go myself. I was so relaxed you'd have thought I was proposing to go pick mushrooms, and of course they all thought I'd lost my mind. Liu Feng, taking Jingnan is no child's game. What makes you think you can? I thought about it and told them the truth, which was also the funniest possible answer, with my silver tongue. My father actually laughed. The whole hall laughed, and I laughed too, and I gave myself an exit. If it doesn't work, we lose nothing and follow the strategists' plan. If it does, we finally have real ground to stand on. My father, still chuckling, agreed, mostly because me being gone meant me spending less time playing frogs and more time doing something. Go, he said, and be careful. I won't blame you if you fail, but if you fail, you go back to Jingling and learn to govern a county like an adult. Yes, father, I said, and I meant to succeed for reasons my father would not understand for a long time. He insisted I take Mi Feng, a Mi family man, well-traveled, good to learn from, and one general of my own choosing as a bodyguard. Pick anyone, he said. So I looked around the room like a man choosing dessert. I asked for Guan Yu. Guan Yu turned around and muttered, nonsense, and Zhuge Liang said no, he commands the navy. I asked for Zhang Fei. Zhang Fei glared. Zhao Yun then? Also spoken for. My father sighed that all three uncles had real duties and I'd have to pick from the lesser generals. And that was the whole point of the little comedy, because while everyone was watching me get told no by the famous men, I let my eye travel to the very back of the military ranks, to a man nobody was looking at. A platoon leader from Xinye. 200 veterans under him, half of them dead or crippled in the retreat. Ordinary face, unguessable age, permanent scowl, obviously terrible at flattering his superiors. A man going absolutely nowhere. His name was Chen Dao. And I happened to know, because I'd read the script, that within about 10 years, this scowling nobody and the elite guard he'd build would shine so bright his rank would sit just under Zhao Yun's. Why let my father discover him first? Father, would you have General Chen Dao accompany me? Everyone was baffled. Of all the decorated, successful officers in the room, the boy picked the blockhead. My father shrugged. The kid's too young to play favorites anyway. At least it gives him a lieutenant, and made it so. Chen Dao stepped forward, cupped his hands, said here, and looked at me with a face carved out of a fence post. I was going to like this man enormously. Before I left, I went to see Liu Shan. In the old days, the adopted son would never have been allowed anywhere near Lady Gan and the baby heir. But after Changban, keeping the brothers apart would have looked absurd. So the door was open now, another quiet dividend. I picked up Liu Shan and swung him around until the fat little thing shrieked with laughter, and I pinched his cheek, and I told him, Big brother has to go handle something important. I might not see you for months. Be good. And then I took out a wooden doll I'd carved, the one I'd whittled by firelight in Jingling, the one that wasn't for Guan Feng, and shook it in front of him. If you miss your brother, pretend this is me, by your side, watching over you. All right? He grabbed the doll and giggled, and started whacking himself in the face with it, because he was a baby and had no sense of occasion, and Lady Gan scolded him gently, and I said, it's fine, and pinched that fat cheek one more time. You can decide for yourself how much of that was theater. I've stopped being able to tell. I'll only say that I carved the doll myself, at night, when there was no one to perform for. Then I bowed to the mothers and I walked out, and behind a screen, my father, who'd come to watch me say goodbye to his son, stroked his beard and nodded, satisfied. Everyone was satisfied. Sun Chen would run my county. The uncles were placed. My father had a loyal, harmless, girl-chasing boy heading off on a doomed errand that would either fail cheaply or, in the vanishingly unlikely event it worked, hand him a province. And I rode out of Jiangsha with 2 attendants, 1 scowling lieutenant, a horse that curses its owner, and a blood-written letter tucked against my chest. 4 commanderies, 3 men, no army. Do you believe it? Neither did anyone else. That was the whole idea. The letter came first, before I rode anywhere. I went to Liu Qi and asked him for something strange. A letter, written in his own blood, in his own voice as the eldest son of Liu Biao, calling on every county of Jingxiang that had once served his father to rise up, rejoin him, forgive old grudges, and stand together against Cao Cao. Liu Qi was confused, then moved, then heartbroken in the good way. He walked to the window with tears in his eyes and said he'd give his life to take back Jingzhou for his father, let alone a letter of blood. He cut his finger. He wrote it. He handed it to me with both hands and thanked me for the trouble. I read it 3 times, no mistakes. Brother, I said, leave the rest to me. Here is what I understood that Liu Qi did not. That letter was a key. By itself, it opened nothing. But there were men scattered across Jingzhou, old, loyal, ashamed, who had eaten Liu Biao's kindness for years and had done nothing when his house fell, and who were rotting alive on that guilt. To a man like that, a blood letter from Liu Biao's own son isn't paper. It's absolution with a price tag. It's a door out of the shame, and all they had to do to walk through it was pick up a sword. I just had to find the first door and lean on it. 3 days of wind and rain later, Mi Feng, Chen Dao, and I rode into You County in Changsha, and I sent Chen Dao to quietly find the residence of a man named Liu Pan. Liu Pan is barely a footnote in the histories. His name comes up exactly once, in something Huangzhong says, and you never actually see him, but I knew who he was, Liu Biao's nephew, Liu Qi's cousin. Once a fierce Jingzhou general who'd held You County alongside Huangzhong himself, and after Cao Cao rolled over Jingzhou and Liu Biao's younger son surrendered, Liu Pan had quit, gone home, and shut the door on the world. 3 keys hung on that one man. He was family to Liu Qi, he despised Cao Cao enough to throw away his career rather than serve him, and he and Huangzhong were closer than brothers. If I could turn Liu Pan, I could turn Huangzhong. If I could turn Huangzhong, I could take Changsha. And Changsha was the first commandery. His house was a great red-gated mansion on the city's edge, the home of a powerful family. When I knocked and gave my name, Liu Feng, son of Liu Bei, come to pay a visit, they led me to a back courtyard where a robust man in his mid-30s was standing in a training ground, casually knocking 7 or 8 servants to the ground with his bare arms like steel bars. He waved them off, drank some water, wiped the sweat, and walked up to me. "You're the young master who risked his life at Changban to save his brother?" "I am." He cupped his hands. "I've heard so much about you, Liu Pan of Changsha," and asked what brought me all this way. I didn't answer. I asked instead, "General, with skill like that, why are you rotting here at home instead of on a battlefield?" "A battlefield?" He smirked. "Fighting for whom? Cao Cao?" And his voice was pure contempt. And I was so happy I could have kissed him, because that contempt told me every guess I'd made was right. "For whom is a good question," I said, and pointed toward Jiangsha. "For Liu Biao's eldest, Liu Qi, and for the Imperial Uncle." His face closed. He snorted, his eyes gone cold. "The gap in strength is a canyon. What waves can they make? Go tell the Imperial Uncle to do what I did. Read the wind, live free, stop fighting heaven, stop ending in ruin." He wouldn't help. Now. I had the bloodletter in my robe. This was the moment a lesser man reaches for it. I didn't. First you give a man a little thrill. I shook my head with a cold laugh. Humph. If the men of Jing had any spine, why did 200,000 of them lay down their arms and hand the whole province to Cao Cao? I came here thinking you were a righteous man who'd die before he bowed. But I see now you're just another marketplace coward. A rat. Consider my trip wasted. Farewell. And I cupped my hands, turned, and walked toward the gate. Those words went into Liu Pan like an awl. Behind me, Mi Feng nearly fainted, because you do not walk into a powerful man's own house, find his deepest wound, and grind salt into it unless you're tired of breathing. Sure enough, Liu Pan's temper detonated. He snatched a sword off the rack, crossed the courtyard in 3 strides, and pressed the blade flat against my chest. "Boy, who are you calling a coward?" "Say it again, and I'll put this through you." Chen Dao's sword was at Liu Pan's throat before the echo died. One word from me, and Liu Pan loses his head with mine. And I smiled. I reached out and gently pushed Chen Dao's blade aside, and I let Liu Pan's sword stay pressed against my chest, and I looked at him the way you look at something you pity. Mi Feng made a noise like a kettle. Even Chen Dao's fence-post face cracked open with confusion. "I came here in eldest young master Liu Qi's name," I said, calm and clear and cutting, having gathered his righteous followers, having long since put life and death behind me. A pity he never got his battlefield, and instead he's fated to die at the hands of a creature like this. I let the word coward hang between us one more time and shook my head. So be it. A true man should die for righteousness. I've nothing to be ashamed of before Uncle Jing Sheng. Come, coward, put your sword through my chest, and let me show you whether Liu Bei's son and Liu Qi's brother is afraid to die. And then I stepped forward, into the blade, let the point sink through my clothes until it drew blood. And I stood there, calm eyes, steady face, while a warm line ran down my chest. Liu Pan had held that sword expecting me to flinch, and instead the boy walked onto the point, his forehead beaded with sweat, his hands started to shake, because I'd hit the exact spot I'd been aiming for since I heard his contempt for Cao Cao, the guilt. Liu Biao had shown this man immense kindness, and when Jingzhou fell, Liu Pan had contributed nothing, and the shame of it had been eating him alive in this house for years. And now Liu Qi's own man had walked to his door and offered to die on his blade, in his own courtyard. What would that make him? Ungrateful, shameless, a man who'd been a hero his whole life and could not, would not, be that. His pupils shook, and then he threw the sword down with a clang, backed away 2 steps, and stood there looking like a beaten dog. "You should go." I didn't go. I hadn't gotten what I came for. I walked forward, calmly, having achieved nothing yet, but the fire was hot and the timing was ripe, and I picked up his sword off the ground, examined it, and handed it back to him hilt first. A man should wear armor and carry a blade, and win deeds without equal. Far better than sitting in a house, chewing on the past, never able to forgive himself. I paused. What's the point of that? He lowered his head and said nothing. He was already mine, and neither of us had said it out loud yet. So I took the bloodletter out of my robe and held it out. You don't want to be unable to face Uncle Jing Sheng when you die, do you? His trembling hands took it. He read it, and rage and grief broke over him at once, and he wept through gritted teeth. Cao Cao has wronged my father and my brothers past all bearing. I will never let him be my master. I nodded. That you can say such heartfelt words, it means the general still has a spine after all. He looked up. With things as they are, is there still a chance? With your help, I said, smiling, Taking the 4 commanderies of southern Jing will be as easy as taking candy from a baby. And Liu Pan bowed, a proud man, a fierce man, a man who'd knocked 8 servants flat with his bare arms an hour ago, bowing to a 20-year-old and saying, "I am willing to serve you, young master." I let out a slow breath because nobody in that courtyard knew my palms were already soaked through with sweat. "How many men can you raise?" I asked. He sighed. "I have no command anymore. Maybe 200 household guards and 300 villagers? 500 all told." 500 militia, I said. That's enough. Mi Feng, who was still recovering from watching me walk onto a sword, could not hold it in. "Young master, attacking Changsha with 500 farmers is throwing an egg at a rock." "That's not important," I said, because I wasn't going to take Changsha with 500 farmers. I was going to take it with 1 letter, 1 old friendship, and a man's own guilt. And I'd just proven, on my own chest, exactly how I intended to do it. 2 days later, I stood before the gates of Changsha with 500 ragtag militia at my back, and the prefect on the wall laughed himself sick. Han Xuan. "A mere brat with a handful of weak soldiers dares to covet my Changsha?" I rode up under the wall with Chen Dao, drew my sword, pointed it at him, and gave him the only weapon I'd brought that mattered. "Changsha belonged to my uncle Liu Bei. You were all his subordinates, and you betrayed him and knelt to Cao Cao. How will you face his spirit in heaven?" That one landed on the wall, not on me. The generals up there dropped their eyes. One old man with a white beard went visibly red in the face. A general with a face like a jujube and a long beard cupped his hands and suggested, reasonably, that since I was Liu Bei's son, they ought to at least parley before acting. Han Xuan sneered him down. "Wei Yan, who gave you leave to speak here? Get out." And the jujube-faced general fell silent and withdrew to the very back of the group, and I filed that away too, because a proud, capable man publicly humiliated by his own boss is a door with a loose hinge. Han Xuan gave the counter-argument. "We surrendered with our lord Liu Zong. How is that betrayal? It's you, rabble, who dare call at my gates." And I shot it out from under him. "Surrendered to your lord? Don't you know Liu Zong's already been murdered by Cao Cao's own general, Yu Jin? You served him, so where's your revenge? What's your excuse now?" He had no answer, so he snarled the thing losing men snarl. "Somebody take this brat." A general named Yang Ling galloped out with his spear. Now, I could have handled Yang Ling myself. History remembers him mainly as a man Guan Yu killed in about 3 moves, which is to say, not much of a man. I turned in my saddle. "You remember what I told you?" Chen Dao cupped his hands. "Yes, sir," and rode off without another word. 5 passes. On the 6th, the 2 horses crossed and stopped, and the man behind Chen Dao had blood fountaining from his neck. He rolled off the saddle and died in the dirt. And in the back of my mind, a quiet line I've learned to expect. A subordinate has slain an enemy general, potential +1. That's my little glitchy system, the whole cheat I got dropped into this world with. Potential points, which I could pour into a skill or a stat, and which crept my 30% divine general slowly toward 31. Not a dragon, not a thunderbolt, a slow drip of getting incrementally less doomed. I banked the point and kept my face bored, because the point wasn't the plan. Han Xuan's face went a shade paler. He called for another challenger, and this time, not a single general would take the field. So he turned to the white-bearded old man, and there it was, the whole reason I'd come. "Old general, didn't you boast a sword and a bow and 1,000 would die?" Huang Zhang, the best archer of the age and a man in an impossible spot, because if he were fighting under my father's banner, he'd have leapt out for the glory. But I was fighting under Liu Qi's name, the son of his former lord, and killing for Liu Qi meant killing his own old loyalties. Still, his boss had ordered it, so he cupped his hands and rode out, an old general on a yellow horse. Chen Dao raised his spear. "Is the general Huang Zhang? Since you know my name, how dare you invade my land?" And Chen Dao, my beautiful, literal, wooden-faced Chen Dao, sheathed his spear and delivered the exact message I'd given him, deadpan. Eldest young master said, "Huang Zhang has done great service defending Changsha, and I am not to kill him. Go back now and send someone else to die." Huang Zhang just sat there, because if he fought, it looked like disrespect. If he didn't, how would he explain it to Han Xuan? Caught exactly where I wanted him, he ground his teeth. "Enough talk. 300 rounds. Now." And he charged. They fought, and it was earth-shaking, and it drew cheers from both walls. 20 rounds in, the truth came out. Chen Dao was the weaker man. He tired. He knew he'd lose if it went on. So he turned his horse and fled. And would Huang Zhang let a fleeing enemy escape? He spurred to chase, and a rider cut him off. "Young Master Pan?" "Huang Zhang, how have you been?" Old comrades meeting on a battlefield. Huang Zhang went slack with grief and shock, and his blade slowed. And in that one slack instant, Chen Dao wheeled his horse and threw a tripwire. The yellow horse lost its footing and rolled. Huang Zhang hit the ground, and before he could rise, Chen Dao's spear was at his throat. Liu Pan jumped down and threw himself in front of the point. "You mustn't kill Huang Zhang." Chen Dao, cold as a well. "I know." Huang Zhang, proud, even flat on his back with a spear at his neck, spat his chin up. "If I hadn't been distracted by an old friend, I might not have lost to you. Kill me or don't." Chen Dao just repeated the lines. The young master said Huang Zhong is the soul of Changsha, and I'm not to kill him. And you have a history with young Master Pan. Go home and send someone else to fight. Then he pulled his spear back and rode off, leaving Huang Zhong and Liu Pan standing in the field, two old friends who'd guarded a county together, staring at each other with 1,000 years of unsaid things and tears in their eyes. Back on my side, Mi Fang was baffled. What kind of situation is this? I finally let my shoulders drop and breathed. This battle, I said, has been a total victory. Because I hadn't been trying to win a duel. I'd been trying to make Han Xuan do the one thing that would break his own house, and Han Xuan obliged. Back in his hall, he looked at the returned Huang Zhong for a long, cold time. The old general offered excuses, weak warhorse, caught off guard by the enemy's harness. And Han Xuan narrowed his eyes and said the thing that doomed him. "Old general, you can hit a target 100 paces off. Why do you need a warhorse to win? Why fight so long, unless you wanted to?" He didn't say the word colluding. He didn't have to. Then he pressed harder. "Tomorrow, old general, you'll take that famous bow, and you'll shoot down Chen Dao and Liu Pan, and you'll capture Liu Feng. Kill your old friend Liu Pan, and silence the men who suspect you." Huang Zhong understood exactly what that was. It wasn't an order. It was a test of his loyalty, written in the blood of a man he loved. And he could see that Han Xuan himself had already started to suspect him. There was no way out. Why spare a man today only to shoot him dead tomorrow with a cold arrow? It wasn't fair, and he knew it, and he hesitated. The next day, Liu Pan rode into the field, lamenting, "Huang Zhong, we fought side by side once, and now we serve different masters. I serve young master Liu Feng. Enough talk, take this," and spurred forward. Up on the wall, Han Xuan's voice. "Huang Zhong, have you forgotten what you said yesterday?" Huang Zhong drew his bow, aimed the arrow straight at the forehead of the man he'd guarded Yu County with for years, his former lord's kin, his comrade of a decade. Sadness and despair flickered across the old man's eyes, and he cried out to the sky, "Heaven above, why do you torment me?" and pulled. And with a loud snap, he broke his own bow in half. And behind Liu Pan, the gong sounded, and my men pulled him back, and the fight was over before it began. Because I'd never needed to defeat Huang Zhong. I'd needed to put him in a place where his boss forced him to choose between his honor and his oath out loud in front of everyone, and let him make the choice himself. Back in the tent, Liu Pan came in furious. "My lord, I was about to engage Huang Zhong. What's the meaning of sounding the retreat?" I looked at him. "Brother, do you actually want to die?" He frowned, his face a field of question marks. I smiled, relieved right down to my boots. "Don't worry, we've done everything we needed to do. Now we just wait for the city to surrender." Liu Pan could not follow me at all. How could I possibly know someone would open the gates? Was I just guessing? "Sometimes," I told him, "war is like cooking. You add the ingredients and the seasoning, you light the fire, and when the heat is right, a delicious meal cooks itself. Just wait, there'll be results in an hour." There were results in half an hour. A commotion rose in the city, swelled, and then died down. The gates swung open, and out marched a line of officers, led by the tall general with the jujube face and the long beard, the one Han Xuan had told to get out. And he rode alone to me, dismounted, and bowed deep. "I am Wei Yan of Changsha. I greet the young master." "Why do you surrender?" I asked. Han Xuan went against the tide and tried to murder Huang Zhong. I stopped him, and then I cut him in two. He waved toward the wall, and soldiers threw down two blood-soaked corpses, dropped off the parapet like sacks of garbage. The loyalty between Lord Xuande and the eldest young master is praised by the whole city. We invite the eldest young master in to hold Changsha, exactly as I'd predicted. Liu Pan stared like a man watching a card trick. "Young master, be careful. It might be a trap." It wasn't. I knew Wei Yan wanted my father and had missed his chance twice already and would sprint at this one. My only problem now was how to take him in without letting a proud snake think he was in charge. So I took Wei Yan in the way you take in a proud dog. You let him stand tall first. "General Wei Yan," I said, cold. "You surrendered the city. That's merit. But killing your own former master is disloyalty and injustice. Do you think I couldn't have taken Changsha without you?" Which was, I'll admit to you, complete garbage. Wei Yan was the whole reason the gates opened. But he didn't know that. He dropped to one knee, humble as I'd ever see him. "Young master, I had no such intention." I sighed and painted him a future. "This is a capital crime, but you surrendered the city, so I'll spare your life. From now, you're my deputy general. Make up for your mistakes, and when the chance comes, I'll recommend you to my father." He bowed and could not have been happier. And then I gave him an order that cost me nothing and bought me the city's heart. Han Xuan was a prefect after all. His body can't be left rotting under the wall. Collect it, bury it properly, care for his family, and anyone who disturbs them dies. Because a man who honors even a dead enemy is a man everyone in that city could imagine serving. Wei Yan carried it out, and the whole city warmed to me, and even Huang Zhong, hearing of it, muttered that Liu Bei's son was a righteous man after all. Huang Zhong I saved for last, because I knew he'd sulk. He shut himself in his house and wouldn't come out, still stubborn, exactly as I'd expected. So I took Liu Pan and went to him, and when I put the blood letter in the old man's hands, Liu Qi's blood, his former lord's own son, Huang Zhang wept until he couldn't see. Liu Pan told him gently, "Your old master was my uncle Liu Biao. Now that he's gone, your masters are my brother Liu Qi and Lord Xuande. This is not treason." And Huang Zhang wiped his eyes and bowed to me and pledged himself with everything he had. One old friendship, one guilty man, one letter. And Changsha was mine, 6,000 elite troops, and the best archer alive, and a snake named Wei Yan I could point at things. I left Liu Pan to hold the city and marched the rest south. Next was Guiyang, and Guiyang wanted to surrender before I got there. I'd brought Huang Zhang, Wei Yan, Chen Dao, and 1,500 men, and Mi Feng thought that was suicidal for an important commandery, and I told him if I took Changsha with 500 farmers, Guiyang would be easier, and just listen to me, and we'd take it without a drop of blood, which turned out to be optimistic by one general. The prefect of Guiyang, Zhou Fan, had every intention of folding, but he had two hardliner officers, Chen Ying and Bao Long, loyal to Cao Cao, who wouldn't let him. So Zhou Fan, cornered, sent Chen Ying out to fight. Huang Zhang plucked him off his horse like a chicken in under 3 passes, and Zhou Fan turned to his men, more or less. "See, I told you I wanted to surrender, and you wouldn't let me. Now look." And he took his seal, opened his gates, and let me in, over Bao Long's objections. Huang Zhang was furious. "I haven't even broken a sweat, and you're already surrendering?" Zhou Fan, serene. "If you can't beat them, it's only natural to surrender," which left Huang Zhang with nothing to say, and left me quietly delighted, because a man that clear-eyed about his own weakness is a useful man to leave in charge of a commandery. But the crisis wasn't over. It just moved to that night. Zhou Fan threw me a banquet and pledged his loyalty, and explained his surrender until my ears were tired. And a woman of his household came to pour my wine, a member of the Zhou family, gracious and quiet, sorrow written faint between her brows. Zhou Fan made noises about a marriage tie between our houses to seal the alliance, the kind of thing that happens at every surrender, and I made polite noises back. I drank, and I let myself get louder and looser, and I toasted Wei Yan, and I spilled wine on him, and I stumbled and fell against him, and while I hung there, drunk as a lord, I whispered one sentence into his ear, clear, distinct, not a slur in it. He caught me, and in one instant Wei Yan understood everything, and his eyes went sober, and he nodded to me, solemn. The young master wasn't drunk at all, not remotely. He was watching every soul in that hall. "The eldest young master has had too much," Wei Yan announced. "He should rest." And the Zhou woman helped me stagger back to my room, and the moment the door shut, I straightened up, cold and clear. "You're of the Zhou household," I said. "You've been sent to make me feel safe." She'd been about to speak, some soft thing, and instead she shook her head hard and pushed the words out. "My lord, tonight, don't take off your armor, don't put down your sword. If you can, leave now." And she cracked the door to check the hall, terrified. "So," I said quietly, "someone wants me dead tonight." She bit her lip. "Yes." "Whose plan?" "General Chen Ying and General Bao Long. They want to please Cao Cao. They forced my uncle to it." "And you're the one they sent to lull me to sleep? Why warn me?" She looked up, heartsick. I couldn't bear to watch you die." And then, smaller, "My mother is their hostage. If I hadn't come, they'd have—" She couldn't finish. And I understood the whole shape of it. Zhou Fan wanted to surrender. Chen Ying and Bao Long, who couldn't beat me in the field, had decided to gut me in the dark instead, and had leaned on a frightened household and a woman's held hostage mother to do it. And the woman had been too decent to go through with it. "From now on, listen to me," I said, "and I'll keep you and your mother from harm." She nodded through her tears. And outside the window, the noise began, the clash of blades, the crackle of fire, the sound of an ambush walking into the wrong room. Because Wei Yan had understood my whisper, and Chen Dao had been waiting since sundown, and every assassin who thought he was creeping up on a sleeping drunk was creeping up on the deadliest men I had, wide awake and ready. It didn't take long. Chen Dao's voice came flat through the door. "Eldest young master, all the traitors are dead, both leaders captured." A single voice begging outside, "Spare me, spare me." I said, "Kill him." 2 sharp cracks and silence, and that quiet line in the back of my mind again. Potential gained. The divine general's share ticked up to 33%. A slow drip, always, but it was rising. Wei Yan reported the whole Zhou family taken at my disposal, and I walked out and did the thing I'd already decided to do the moment I understood Zhou Fan hadn't wanted any of this. I untied him myself. "No need to say anything," I told him, working the ropes off his wrists. How could I not know what the prefect was thinking? Zhou Fan nearly fell over. "The eldest young master isn't going to punish me?" "Punish you? Why bother? I still want you running Guiyang." Because I did. I was going to take Chen Dao and Wei Yan and Huang Zhang and keep marching, and I had no one better to hold this place than the man who'd built it. Wei Yan gawked. "You'd trust a two-faced man to keep the city?" And Zhou Fan himself looked bewildered by his own good fortune. But there was a catch, and I set it up gently. Among the freed family was a boy in fine silk, maybe 8 years old, shrinking back in fear. "Young man," I said kindly, "what's your name?" "Zhao Yong," he whispered. "And how old are you?" "8. This boy," I announced to the room, warm as sunshine, "is quick-witted, calm under pressure, and carries himself like a great general. Truly the prefect's son. My camp is short a vanguard general. I'll take him. He'll ride with me, north and south, to kill the enemy and serve the country. What do you say?" And I drew Zhao Yong to my side. Zhao Fan's mouth fell open. "Young master, he's only 8. So what? Heroes come from every walk of life, and generals aren't judged by age." I smiled. As his father, how could you not think of his future? And even the slowest man in that room understood. Zhao Yong was the hostage. His entire family's lives now sat in my hand. He had no choice, not a sliver of one, and he ground his teeth and gave me his son with a mournful face, begging me only not to let the child face an enemy blade. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll take good care of the young master. And, by the way, I'm a little short on supplies lately." "Yes, yes, yes," said Zhao Fan. "Guiyang will support you fully. Soldiers and horses? 8,000 of Guiyang's elite. At your command, young master." He didn't know it yet, but that was the kindest thing that ever happened to his family. A hostage son is a son the conquerors never dare to slaughter. Years later, he'd be grateful. I freed the woman's mother, too, out of the tower where they'd caged her, and kept my word. A courtyard of her own, safe, cared for. Not out of softness. A frightened, decent household that owes you its lives is a household that never lets you down. But I'll admit, the woman had risked everything to warn a stranger, and I found I didn't have it in me to spend her. Then it got embarrassingly easy. Wuling fell almost exactly the way the histories said it would. The prefect rode out alone. Huang Zhong beat him, and on his own retreat, one of his own officers, a man named Gongji, shot him dead and surrendered the city. I knew Gongji, one of the few men in Jingchu still genuinely loyal to Liu Biao's line. Middling talent, but I could park him in Wuling to steady the rear and swap in my own people later. And then Lingling, the last one. By then, I had 3 famous generals. I followed Zhuge Liang's old playbook straight out of the history I'd read, captured one enemy officer alive, played dead to lure out the prefect's son, took the boy for leverage, and had Lingling without spilling blood. And where the first 3 commanderies had a whiff of luck about them, this one people watched me win through pure strategy, and Huang Zhong sulked about being useless, and Wei Yan was deeply impressed, and I let them think whatever they liked. 4 commanderies, 3 men, no army worth the name. At the victory banquet in Lingling, I did the last piece of business, which was talent. My father, before anyone had heard of him, had built his whole career by collecting extraordinary people early, so I asked the prefect who under his command could actually govern. He listed a dozen names I'd never heard of, and then one that made me sit up. Zhang Wan. I knew that name. A pillar of the later Shu Han, the man who'd hold the state together after Zhuge Liang was gone. The talent to govern a nation, not a district. Right now, probably in his 20s or 30s, unknown to the world. He swaggered out from the very back of the civil ranks, drunk, hiccuping, clutching a wine jar, looking even more intoxicated than I'd been at Guiyang. His own prefect's son scolded him for losing his composure again. I waved it off. "Let me ask you," I said, "if I gave you Lingling, could you run it well?" Zhang Wan looked around and started bragging. "A mere Lingling? I could handle it with my eyes closed." His prefect hissed at him to stop talking nonsense, and I waved the prefect quiet. "Go home and pack. You come with me tomorrow." He blinked at me like he suspected I'd outdrunk him. "Really?" I had wine brought, 3 jars, and he set to drinking and got halfway through the second and shouted, "Good wine," 3 times, and fell over with a clang and did not move. And I looked at the snoring drunk on the floor, this future minister of a dynasty, and thought, I certainly hope you're worth it. "Load him in the cart," I said. "We take him to Jiangxia tomorrow." And with that, it was done. The 4 commanderies of southern Jing, Changsha, Guiyang, Wuling, Lingling, taken in under a month by a young man with 2 attendants, 1 wooden-faced lieutenant, and a letter written in blood. The news reached my father while he was discussing crop yields, and Mi Zhu came running with a silk scroll. "Good news, my lord." And my father read it start to finish and cried, "Ah, ah, ah," 3 times and nearly came out of his chair. Guan Yu asked if it was the result of red cliffs. And my father looked at his second brother, then at the whole assembled court, and shook his head, expressionless with shock. "It's not red cliffs, it's Liu Feng." A pause. "This kid has actually taken all 4 commanderies of southern Jing." The hall detonated. That can't be. Riding alone through 4 cities? Not even alone. With 2 attendants, there's still only 3 men. How? Impossible. Is this information accurate? Overnight, my father had gone from a homeless, hunted, down-on-his-luck hero to a warlord holding half of Jingzhou. And every man in that hall was trying and failing to understand how his lecherous, frog-catching, useless adopted son had done it with 3 people and a piece of paper. Zhou explained it to them eventually, small detail by small detail, and only then did they believe it was real. Bring two attendants or bring anyone else, it wouldn't have changed the outcome. Replace Liu Feng and it would have been impossible. Guan Yu and Zhang Fei marveled and burned, just a little, with envy, because the insignificant adopted boy had made them look like they'd been standing still, especially Guan Yu, who'd been asked to come and had flatly refused. If he'd gone, the world would have assumed he did the work. Instead, his refusal had handed the whole legend to me. My father paced the hall 3 times, glowing, and asked the only question that mattered to him. When is Liu Feng coming back? Tonight or tomorrow at the latest? Throw a banquet, he said. Welcome, my son. Wash the dust from his road. He was so happy. He had no idea what I was going to ask for. My father met me 30 miles out, in a robe that shimmered, and pulled me off my horse and looked me up and down 3 times with a face full of pride. I'd come home with 10,000 troops and enough grain and silver to feed the Xinye army for 3 months and half a province in my pocket. Liu Feng, he beamed in front of every civil and military official he had. Your achievement has amazed me. This time, I'll reward you handsomely. Tell me, what do you want? Somewhere in the crowd, I could feel the whole court leaning in. At this point, I could ask to be prefect of a whole commandery, easily. A man who took 4 could surely hold 1. I folded my hands, deeply sincere. Father, I want a woman. His benevolent smile froze on his face like frost. The eye twitch, the forehead vein, that specific, exquisite disappointment I'd come to think of as my personal artwork. Liu Feng, he managed, there is nothing else in your eyes but women? A young, beautiful one, I said helpfully, who knows music, who can sing and dance. If she knows tea ceremony and poetry as well, that would be my dream. He closed his eyes. He took a very deep breath. And then he did the thing I was actually steering him toward. He laid the real menu on the table, out loud, in front of everyone. You've earned great merit. 4 commanderies bow to your name. Say the word, and you're prefect of any of them. Or if you want military power, I'll make you commander-in-chief, same rank as your uncles, and give you these 10,000 men. A sigh. But if you still insist on a woman, fine. Go back to being your little magistrate of Jingling. And there it was. The choice, spelled out plain. A prefect with land and an army clearly meant to make me a pillar of the state, or the tiny magistrate's chair in a swamp, with women and comfort. If it were you, which would you take? I thought about it, seriously, in front of the whole court, and then I said, on careful reflection, Jingling is home to 100,000 soldiers and civilians of Xinye, and I have a deep bond with the place. So if I must choose, I'll stay the magistrate of Jingling. My father was too angry to speak. Here's what he couldn't see, and what I'd worked out on the road. Those 4 commandery seats were nothing to me. Jingnan is the far corner of the world. You sit there wrangling farmers and patching walls. You can't win real glory, and you can't afford a real mistake. But Jingling wasn't a swamp to me. Jingling sat on the front line, with 100,000 people who already loved me, where everything I did would run smooth, and Jingling had something behind it, Jiangsha, because that's where this was going, and my father was about to walk me right into it. He was too exasperated to keep me in the field, so he sent me back to my little chair, and then Lu Qi's illness worsened, and my father needed a new prefect of Jiangsha. He searched all of Jiangsha. He found no one better, and grinding his teeth the whole way, he arrived at the obvious answer, me. He summoned me, and, through Lu Qi, offered it as a gift, prefect of Jiangsha, the smallest of the districts, but the most strategic, wedged between Cao Cao to the north and Sunchuan to the east, the seat he'd wanted to give me all along. And I refused, loudly, in horror. Absolutely not. Jingling already gives me a headache. Being prefect of Jiangsha would be the death of me. And then I did something that made my father's eye twitch all over again. I recommended someone else for the job. I can recommend a man whose wisdom rivals Zhou Yu and whose courage rivals Liu Bu. He was indispensable in my taking of the 4 commanderies. His surname is Wei. His name, Yan. Now watch this, because it's a small cruelty I'm not proud of and can't stop admiring. On the surface, I was praising Wei Yan to the sky, recommending my own capable general for a promotion he desperately wanted. But I compared him to Liu Bu. Liu Bu, the man who betrayed and murdered 2 masters, the byword for a traitor you can never trust. I planted the name Liu Bu in my father's head and then handed him a candidate who, as would come out in about 1 minute, really had betrayed 2 masters to reach me. My father, cautious as ever, brought Wei Yan in and drew the past out of him. Yes, Wei Yan had killed a gatekeeper to open a city for my father once. Then he'd abandoned that master for Han Xuan, then abandoned Han Xuan for me. Twice a turncoat, for love of my father each time, but who'd believe that now? He has merit, my father concluded, but he's betrayed 2 masters. Liu Feng may never have met Liu Bu, but it's a fact this man has walked Liu Bu's road twice. How can I give him such weight? And he sent Wei Yan off with a warm promise and a real refusal, and turned back to me. As for Jiangsha, you'll take it, Liu Feng, which was the plan. I sighed like a man carrying a mountain and accepted, and immediately tried to dump the actual work on Sun Qian. And my father, smiling, took Sun Qian away from me to keep for himself and told me to govern Jiangsha alone. Perfect opportunity to grow, he said, delighted with his own cleverness. And I bowed, defeated, and left. Except I wasn't defeated at all, because now I was prefect of Jiangsha, the seat behind Jingling, the seat I'd been aiming at the whole time, and I could finally, legitimately, build my own machine. I put Wei Yan in charge of the city's defenses and all military matters. The man was worth 10 of anyone at holding a wall, and giving the twice betrayer real trust turned him from Cao Cao's admirer into mine overnight. I gave Chen Dao 1,000 of the strongest young men to forge into my personal guard, my own elite, loyal to me alone. And I handed the entire civil administration, livelihood, law, farming, everything to Jiang Wan, who sobered up long enough to be astonishing. He sat in the prefect's chair, called for the registers, took a sip of wine, asked a few questions, had anyone who annoyed him dragged out and beaten. And he went from knowing nothing about Jiangsha to knowing all of it in an afternoon. Then I stretched and left them to it, and went home to do the one thing I was truly, deeply gifted at. Nothing at all. Because a prefect who works himself ragged is a prefect who's building something, and a prefect who hands the whole thing to trusted men and vanishes to play chess is a lazy, harmless boy who happens to run the best fed, best defended, most orderly district in 3 provinces. The mask was working perfectly, which is exactly when Sun Quan sent Zhou Yu to kill my father. The invitation came dressed as friendship, the way the deadly ones always do. Red Cliffs had been locked in a stalemate for 2 months. Zhuge Liang was still stuck over in eastern Wu, and word came that the Grand Viceroy Zhou Yu, commander of the Allied fleet, the brilliant young star of Jiangdong, very much wished to meet my father in person. Firstly, to pay his respects. Secondly, so my father could reunite with his strategist. My father decided to go. Nobody could talk him out of it. But he'd take guards, and with Guan Yu off seducing Cao Ren at Nan Commandery and the other uncles all posted, the only man left to escort him was me. I knew exactly what this was. I'd read it. In the history I remembered, Zhou Yu lays a fine banquet in his tent and hides axemen outside. Halfway through the dancing, he smashes a cup as the signal, and the killers pour in to butcher Liu Bei on the spot. And the only reason it fails is Guan Yu, standing behind my father, radiating enough menace that Zhou Yu loses his nerve and never breaks the cup. But Guan Yu wasn't coming this time, so the menace would have to be me. And I don't have Guan Yu's beard, or his face, or his 40 years of terrifying reputation. If Zhou Yu wasn't cowed by me the way he'd been cowed by Guan Yu, then all those axemen were going to come for a man who couldn't stop them. So I came up with something bolder than standing there looking scary. We sailed to Jiangkou, me, my father, and Fu Shiren as second guard. And there was Zhou Yu on the bank in a red cloak over silver armor, banners snapping, ranks of armored men, the whole imposing show. From across the water, he called out the compliments. Emperor Liu Bei, a dragon among men. And then his eye found me. Who's the one in white? And when someone told him it was Liu Feng who took 4 commanderies single-handed, Zhou Yu frowned and decided, on the spot, that a dissolute-looking young master couldn't possibly have done it. The cities must have simply surrendered to Liu Qi's name. Just in time, he said, cold. We'll clean them all up at once. Meanwhile, my father was on the boat praising Zhou Yu, a true dragon, a man of exceptional talent. And I, watching the same red cloak, thought, this dragon among men is planning to murder you. What I said out loud was that I'd heard his concubine Cao Cao was a 1 in a million beauty, which slipped out entirely by accident and earned me a scolding from my father about not commenting on other men's wives. So make of that what you will. File it away, actually. Everything files away. Inside the tent, I could feel the killing intent hanging in the warm air like smoke. Everyone smiling, everyone armed, Zhou Yu with a wine cup he could smash at any second. I sat where I could watch his hands, and I made a plan. The instant he moves, I go for him before anyone else can and take him hostage. Capture the king, and everything else stops. But Zhou Yu was no fool. Gan Ning, Eastern Wu's fiercest blade, stood right beside him, and the moment I lunged, Gan Ning would be on me. I needed Gan Ning distracted, and Zhou Yu careless, and I needed both at once. So I made Zhou Yu careless the only way you can make a genius careless. I insulted him where it hurt. He fired the first shot himself, leaning back, sneering, telling my father his 4 commandery achievement was really nothing next to how the Sun Army did all the fighting at Red Cliffs, while the Liu Army reaped all the rewards. A fair jab, honestly, and my father floundered under it, unsure how to answer. I answered for him, and I didn't defend us. I did something far more infuriating. I claimed credit for saving Zhou Yu. Grand Viceroy, you're mistaken. My taking the 4 commanderies was only to tie down Cao Cao's forces and ease your worries. His head came up. Ease my worries? What worries? Cao Cao's 800,000 meant to ride the northwest wind and crush you in a single blow. I observed your formation. disciplined on the outside, but riddled with flaws, and quite weak. If Cao's army had come, Eastern Wu would have been shattered, but I marched into Jingnan and pinned down a great mass of his troops so they couldn't move south, and that's the only reason you've held out this long. That was me, easing your worries. It was complete nonsense, and I knew it, and everyone in the tent knew it. Cao hadn't come south because he was drilling a navy, not because of anything I'd done, and there were no flaws in Zhou Yu's formation. But that was the point. Zhou Yu had started throwing garbage. I just threw more of it, back at the exact spot where it would enrage him, his pride, and his fear that his young army really did have holes in it. His nose nearly went crooked. Gan Ning's hand went to his sword. But Zhou Yu didn't smash the cup, because he was too arrogant to let a lie stand unanswered, and too disciplined not to want to know whether the flaw I'd named was real. Argue first, kill second, which is exactly the crack I'd been prying at. So I kept prying. When he demanded to know if I understood military strategy, I bragged shamelessly. Studied it since childhood. Applied it. Took 4 commanderies. Sought out daily by admirers. I even quoted the Analects until my father put his face in his hand and started regretting the whole trip. And then, having established myself as an insufferable expert, I closed my hand around his throat without touching him. Grand Viceroy, it's understandable. A young man commanding an army for the first time, unfamiliar with strategy. But governing an army is no game. You really should learn from your veterans, from Cheng Pu and Huang Gai. Study a little military administration. In time, you'll grasp it, without my needing to say a word. A 17-year-old telling Zhou Yu, the feather-fanned prodigy whose brilliance was the pride of Jiangdong, to go take remedial lessons from his own elderly subordinates. He came up out of his chair, veins standing out, and roared, "Do you think I, Zhou Yu, am some Jiao Kuo, all talk and no war?" His officers reached for their swords. And I had him, furious, standing, his attention entirely on the argument, his hand pressing his men down instead of gripping the cup, demanding I name the flaws in his army or never leave the tent. Since the Grand Viceroy asks so humbly, I said, I'll teach him in detail. I glanced around, lowered my voice. Though I fear a Cao spy among us, let me come closer and explain quietly. And I walked straight at Zhou Yu. Nothing seemed wrong, right up until the last step, when Gan Ning's instinct screamed and his sword came up to block me. Too late. I drew, and my twin blades split. One knocked Gan Ning's sword wide, and the other flashed out, and the cold edge came to rest against Zhou Yu's throat. Perfect. Let me be honest about that draw, because it's the one place my glitchy little cheat actually earned its keep. I'd poured every potential point I owned into swordsmanship. My sword work isn't fast. I'll never be Liu Bei, but it's exquisite, and the trick was 2 blades at once. One to pin the fiercest general in Jiangdong, one to open the Grand Viceroy's throat. Gan Ning was seasoned enough not to lose his sword, barely. Nobody else was quick enough to matter. My father gaped. When had Liu Feng's swordsmanship gotten like that? Zhou Yu, cold sweat breaking, understood he'd been played and shouted, "Liu Feng, what are you doing?" And my father cried out that I was being outrageous. I didn't move the blade. "Put your sword down first," I told Gan Ning, pleasant, "or I might accidentally hurt your Grand Viceroy." His face working, Gan Ning withdrew his sword. "Don't harm the Grand Viceroy." And I sheathed my left blade and kept the right one at Zhou Yu's neck. And Zhou Yu, always the professional, even with a knife on his throat, tried the honest man gambit. "I received you with sincerity, and you let your son coerce me. What is the meaning of this?" While my poor honest father actually started to believe him and told me to put the sword away. "Father," I said, "do you really believe him?" "What do you mean?" I smiled, a smile with nothing kind in it. "The Grand Viceroy claims sincerity. Let's see exactly how sincere he is." And I picked up Zhou Yu's own wine cup with my free hand, tilted my head back, and drank it dry. Then, instead of setting it down, I flicked it into the air. It turned in a slow, graceful arc, and it landed. Clang. Zhou Yu went white, because the cup was the signal. His signal. The one he'd arranged to give when he wanted his hidden men to kill my father. And I'd just given it for him. Shouts erupted from every side of the tent. "Grand Viceroy has given the order. Kill Liu Bei." The canvas walls tore open. Axemen surged in toward my father, and Fu Shiren threw himself in front of him with his sword out. And for about 1 second, it was exactly the massacre Zhou Yu had planned. "Stop!" That was Gan Ning. Gan Ning, who wanted more than anything in the world not to stop. Because stopping was the last thing he wanted, and the only thing he could do. He'd done the math faster than anyone. If the axemen don't stop, my father dies, and the instant my father dies, I take Zhou Yu's head, and a dead Grand Viceroy on the eve of the great battle means the annihilation of Eastern Wu. So he screamed for the killers to freeze, and they froze. My father on the east side of the tent, ringed by a dozen blades, me on the west with a sword laid calmly against the throat of the most important man in Jiangdong. I smiled at Zhou Yu. "Grand Viceroy, I knew the moment I walked in that you'd hidden axemen out there, ready to take all 3 of our lives whenever you pleased. So tell me, who's the one without sincerity?" He swallowed, hard. He knew the ground had shifted, and he knew he was in the wrong, and he tried anyway. You can't leave Eastern Wu alive either. And I laughed, easy and unhurried, and told him thinking about Eastern Wu was simple. I'll gouge out one of your eyes right now, and have Gan Ning ready me a ship, and if he hesitates, I'll take the second eye and see if that speeds him along. Gan Ning shouted no. Zhou Yu, bitter, played his last card. I'll die here today, and none of you will leave. And I laughed again. Grand Viceroy, you're a grown man in your 30s. How can you talk like a child? Of course none of us leave if you die. But it isn't only us who won't leave. Your lord the Marquis of Wu won't. Your wives and children won't. And the countless people of Jiangnan will follow my father and me into the grave. Because the day Jiangdong falls and Sun Quan hangs himself with a strip of white silk, he'll wonder why he ever put the fate of Eastern Wu in the hands of a man this reckless. And Sun Ce, waiting in the next world, will wonder why he ever called you his closest friend. If everything before had been fuel on his rage, that was a bucket of ice water over his head, because it stopped being about his own life. He remembered Sun Quan drawing a sword and cutting the corner off a table and swearing that anyone who spoke of surrender would end like that table, and then handing that same sword to Zhou Yu, trusting him with the whole of Jiangdong. 200,000 soldiers, 1 million civilians, an entire regime resting on this one man's judgment. And here he was about to throw all of it into the fire because a boy had wounded his pride. Zhou Yu closed his eyes and let out a long, broken breath and told his men to stand down, to get out. And when they hesitated, he snarled it, "Get out of my sight," and the killers filed out of the tent, and my father, understanding at last, rose up shaking with fury and denounced him properly. Zhou Yu could only bow his head and beg forgiveness, and promise to come and apologize once Cao Cao was beaten, and offer his own life then to do with as we pleased. Empty words. But we were allies, and Sun and Liu had to stay allied, or Cao Cao ate them both. And you cannot exactly march the enemy's supreme commander home in a cage on the eve of the decisive battle. He had to be released. So the only question was how to walk out of that tent alive, given that the moment I let Zhou Yu go, nothing stopped him from calling the axemen back. I told him what it would cost. You'll command the anti-Cao army at Red Cliffs, Grand Viceroy, but you'll give me a hostage to take back to Jiangsha. Only then are my father and I safe, and not some common soldier, someone close to you, someone whose life would make you think twice before you had me shot full of arrows on the river. Gan Ning volunteered himself, and Zhou Yu refused. Gan Ning was his vanguard. He couldn't spare him with a battle coming. I called for Lu Su, who'd been watching through a gap in the tent alongside Zhuge Liang, both of them chewing their own hearts to pieces, and Zhou Yu refused him too, since Lu Su was the army's chief of staff and the battle couldn't be fought without him. Every important man in Jiangdong, it turned out, was too important to lose. Which left exactly the person I'd been steering towards since the boat. Then, Grand Viceroy, I said, I'll take one of the Cao sisters as my hostage. It's the only knot that unties us. Everyone you truly value is essential to this battle. The only ones who aren't essential, yet still make you hesitate, are the two most beautiful women in Jiangnan. The tent went silent, because I had him boxed, and he knew it. Da Chao was his dead brother's widow. Hand her over, and he could never face Sun Ce in the afterlife. Xiao Chao was his own wife. Hand her over, and he'd be a joke for the ages, the great Zhou Yu who traded away his wife to save his skin. Zhuge Liang, appalled, tried to offer up Zhou Yu's eldest son instead as a kinder substitute, and I nodded along and agreed it was a fine idea, while knowing perfectly well it was worse than mine, because a nobleman's heir is worth more than a wife, and because who could even verify a random child was really the son. Xiao Chao, though, the #1 beauty of Jiangdong, you cannot fake. That face doesn't grow on trees. Zhuge Liang was quietly performing his objections so Lu Su wouldn't have to beg, and Lu Su was begging anyway, and through all of it the trap only tightened, and Zhou Yu, after the longest silence of his life, squeezed the words out from between his teeth like they were being pulled with pliers. Someone, fetch my wife. Lu Su cried out no. Gan Ning fell to his knees, offering himself again, and Zhou Yu, face contorted, voice unbroken, said the thing that would define the rest of his hatred for me. A true man serves his lord and his country. With a great war at hand, how can I let a woman jeopardize the affairs of state? My mind is made. Fetch the lady. 2 hours later she arrived, in a brocade robe and a mink hood, and when she lifted the cloak, the whole tent lit up. 25, maybe 26. Jet hair, jade skin, eyes that shone, a grace in every small movement that stopped the breath in your chest. Not seductive, luminous, beautiful without being vulgar, gorgeous without being cheap. Even I, who had walked in here to do exactly this, felt my heart skip and had to drag it back into line. Zhou Yu, she said, in a soft Wu country accent like an oriole singing. What brings you to the camp in such a hurry? He couldn't look at her. He pointed at me, closed his eyes, and said the most heartbroken and helpless words of his life. You, go with them. She didn't understand. He wouldn't explain. She thought we were allies and asked why she should go, and he clasped his hands to her and said only, You know Zhou Yu hasn't failed his lord, but he has failed you, madam. Ask nothing more. And she turned to Zhuge Liang and demanded, "An ally, why are you taking away another man's wife?" And Zhuge Liang gave her the whole ugly shape of it. The axeman, the trap, the hostage none of the important men could be. And Zhou Yu, who least of all wanted to speak, snapped at her. "You're a woman. Why so many questions? Just go." The first time in all their years he'd ever been that cold to her. And something in her broke. She pressed her lips together, tears standing in her eyes, and said, very quietly, "Very well, Zhou Yu, I'm leaving." I took her arm. A faint fragrance, and I had to steady myself again, and I laid my sword against her collar and told her to cooperate or my blades were indiscriminate. She looked up at me with those clear, sorrowing eyes. "It's all right," she said. And I walked out of the tent with the most beautiful woman in Jiangdong as a human shield, and Fu Shiren guarding my father, and behind me, Zhou Yu bowed his head over his own broken heart. On the water, my father called out his thanks to Zhuge Liang, and Zhuge Liang called back to take care, and Lu Su shouted from the bank, "When will you return, Cao Cao?" And I called back the last twist, cheerful as anything. "Once Red Cliffs is won, and my strategist is safely out of your camp, I'll personally escort my lady home." Lu Su reeled, "But you said Xiako," and I explained, sweetly, that my strategist was still in Zhou Yu's camp, and I'd hate for anything to happen to him too soon. Zhou Yu, hearing it, ground his teeth to powder, and understood at last that this boy's care matched Zhuge Liang's stroke for stroke. And Zhuge Liang stood on that shore, watching his own safety get folded into my hostage deal, quietly and reluctantly moved. It's good the eldest young master still cares for my life. While a smaller, sharper voice in the back of his head wondered whether the boy who just outmaneuvered all of Eastern Wu had other motives regarding the stunning woman on his boat. Sit with the shape of it a moment. It's the whole arc of who I'd become, drawn in one river crossing. A season ago, I was the adopted son, foreign surname, bottom of the family, riding into a massacre with a plan to murder a baby and no one on earth taking me seriously. Now I sailed home from the enemy's own tent. I'd disarmed a murder plot. I'd taken the supreme commander of the Allied fleet hostage with his own signal. I'd walked out untouched with half a province behind me and the most beautiful woman in Jiangdong at the point of my sword. My father wept and called me the only prodigy he had. Zhuge Liang stood on the shore admitting he couldn't fully read me, and my enemies had started saying the name Liu Feng with a chill in their throats. The nobody had become the thing that keeps the powerful awake. Cao Cao sat at the bow of my boat and cried without a sound, watching the mountains slide by, and I let her. I'd calculated a lot of things about this trip. I had not, it turned out, calculated the woman, because 2 rows of boatmen were pulling us west against the current. The sky was doing something I didn't like. My father was already sighing with relief far too early, and then a gust hit the bow, and the boat tipped, and everyone lurched, and by the time it steadied, there was a sound I'll hear for the rest of my life. A splash, and an empty seat where the most valuable hostage in 3 provinces had been. My father screamed one sentence, and it cost him a month of regret. "Liu Feng, save her. If she dies, the strategist is finished." He was right, which made it worse. A dead Cao Cao meant a dead Zhuge Liang, meant a broken alliance, meant Cao Cao devouring everyone. So there was no choosing. I looked at the black, churning river. I looked at the armored sailors frantically stripping their armor so they wouldn't sink, and I did the math in about half a second. Nobody else was getting there in time. I jumped. The cold went through me like a blade. My hand closed on an ankle, thin, delicate. It had to be hers, and I hauled her up by the sleeve and got an arm around her. And then the undercurrent took us both and carried us off downriver like we were nothing. And when I fought my way up for air, my father's boat was already 50 paces gone. He stood at the bow, beating his chest, shouting my name. I almost shouted back. And Cao Cao, half conscious, terrified, running on pure animal instinct, grabbed me and dragged me under again, which is what drowning people do. Even ready to die, your body claws at whatever's near it. She clawed at me, so I held her down and hit her once, hard, at the back of the skull, and she went limp, and only then could I actually swim. When I broke the surface again, the boat was 100 paces off. "Father," I called. The river ate it. So, new plan. Get ashore first. Everything else after. Half an hour in freezing water, and I dragged us both onto a bank by grabbing a willow. My whole body was shaking. Her lips had gone purple. This was Jiang Bei, the North Shore, which is to say, Cao Cao's land. So the plan updated again. Forget the boat. Forget my father. Just survive the night. It was late autumn. The bad news was we could freeze to death by morning. The good news was the trees were dry and would burn. Now, I want to manage your expectations about my rescue technique, because it was not romantic. I laid her down and covered her in branches and wrung out my clothes. I cut firewood with my sword, whittled a bow drill, tore strips off my own robe, and spent a solid half hour making fire by friction like a caveman. When it finally caught, I carried her to it. Then I had to get her out of wet clothes or she'd die, so I did. I spent the whole process reciting old poetry in my head, keeping my thoughts somewhere academic. I draped my dried clothes over her, packed dry grass around her, and fed her a cold medicine my sign-in system had spat out that week, which for once turned out to be useful garbage instead of the usual useful garbage. She came around slowly, looked at the fire, at the clothes drying on sticks, at her own bare shoulders under the leaves, and understood, and looked like the sky had fallen. How could you do this? Tears in her eyes, mortified. A married woman, she'd rather have drowned with her honor. I was too cold to argue philosophy. Who told you to jump in the river? It's late autumn, wet clothes, you freeze, simple. I didn't jump, she snapped. The boat threw me. And you know what? Thinking back, a wave had come, and Fushiren and I had both grabbed for my father and let go of everything else. Maybe the river really did take her, which meant I'd nearly died dragging out a woman who fell by accident, and now she wanted me to kill her to preserve her chastity. And I want you to appreciate the customer service I was providing under these conditions, because that's exactly what she asked for next. Just kill me. I've lost my chastity. How can I live? And I told her, patiently, that she hadn't lost anything and I hadn't touched her. But then, when I explained I'd had to see her to save her, she blushed and decided that was almost as bad and asked again to die. So I did the thing I always do when someone hands me an emotional problem. I turned it into a strategic one. Fine, I said, weaving a fish trap out of bamboo, not looking up. You die. Easy. Now think about what happens after. If Zhou learns you're dead, he murders my strategist. The alliance breaks. Cao Cao divides and conquers, marches south, and to terrify the great families of Jing and Jiangdong into surrender, he massacres cities, city after city, to vent his mood. The 6 prefectures and 81 districts of Jiangdong drowning in blood, all of it flowing out of one woman's death by a river. I leaned closer, and after that, Yizhou falls, Hanzhong falls, and Cao Cao stops needing to hold the emperor hostage. He just makes the emperor abdicate, changes the era name, crowns himself, and the 400-year Han is finished. My lady, you don't want the whole dynasty to die in your hands, do you? She stared at me. Is it really that serious? Otherwise, why would I risk my life to save you? She sat with that for a long time, and then she said, small, so I can't die yet. Not only can't you die, you have to live well, for the people, for the Han. My tone was iron, and I'll never tell anyone what happened today. That's how I discovered the real trick with Cao Cao. She wasn't a fool. She was a Jiangdong daughter who'd been handed from man to man like a treaty, and the one thing nobody had ever done was tell her she mattered to something bigger than a bargain. So I gave her the whole weight of the Han to carry, and she picked it up, and it saved her life. Make of that what you will. We were on Cao Cao's shore, cold and starving, with fires that might draw patrols. So we survived. I set the bamboo trap. I caught, of all things, a hibernating white python that had come toward the heat, and I split it in 2 with my sword and roasted it, and I fed her python meat and boiled river water in bamboo tubes and warmed the soles of her feet until the color came back. And the second night, and the third, we stopped minding sleeping side by side, because you stop minding a lot of things when the alternative is freezing. She learned to weave straw sandals. She held up a little shoe she'd made and shook it, proud as a child. Look, isn't it good? It's great, I said. We could make a living at this. No way, she laughed, pursing her lips. Somewhere in 8 days of jungle, pulling thorns from her feet, washing the mud off her clothes, teaching her to make hammocks out of bark, the thing between us quietly changed shape, and neither of us said a word about it, and we both stopped mentioning the name Zhou at all. On the 8th day, we walked out of the wetlands into Huangzhou, and I had to solve the small remaining problem of being 2 soaked, filthy fugitives on the enemy's side of the river, one of whom was the single most recognizable face in Jiangdong. I decided to solve it the way I solve everything. I lied so big nobody could survive the shock long enough to doubt me. The gatekeeper at Huangzhou asked who I was, and I slapped him across the face. Let me explain the logic, because there was some. A filthy man in a torn but obviously expensive brocade robe, an ornate sword at his hip, a woman beside him too beautiful to be real. You can hide that, or you can weaponize it. Hiding gets you searched. So I went loud. How dare a mere gatekeeper ask my name? Get lost! And I hit him. And the poor man froze, because everything about me screamed money, and money in that era screamed danger. The county magistrate came out to handle the strange, arrogant stranger, and I didn't give him a chance to interrogate me. I went on the attack. I traveled from Xuchang without trouble, and the moment I enter your county, bandits everywhere, thieves rampant. As magistrate of Huangzhou, explain that. Official jargon, righteous fury. He broke into a sweat and gleaned exactly what I wanted him to glean. Xuchang, Cao Cao's own capital. This young lord is from the center of power, and I pressed on. My attendants killed, my carriage stolen, all my goods taken, and you dare ask who I am? Fine. Listen, the pitiful man before you is none other than the young lord, Cao Pi, Cao Cao's heir apparent. The magistrate nearly kissed the ground, and now he had a problem far worse than bandits, because he remembered exactly what Cao Cao did to the governor of Xuzhou when Cao Cao's father was murdered passing through, pinned the blame on the man, slaughtered every official in Xuzhou high and low, and killed tens of thousands of common people to die alongside. If this arrogant lord really was Cao Cao's son, and anything happened to him in this county, not one of the magistrate's family would survive. So he did the smart, terrified thing. He gave me the best room, the best wine, the best food, and came crawling back to ask what I needed. I made him work for it, demanded he suppress the bandits and recover my stolen treasures within 2 days. And when he begged to know what treasures, I invented a list off the top of my head, priceless sounding nonsense, an official seal and a fiery wind god pearl, and a jade purification bottle, things I'm fairly sure I half remembered from a folktale about a snake spirit. He'd never heard of any penny of it, which only proved to him it must be beyond price. And when he pressed why the young lord was traveling through his county in secret carrying such wealth, I gave him the story with just enough truth to be sticky. Pang Tong, I told him, fledgling phoenix. You know the saying, crouching dragon or fledgling phoenix, either one wins the world. Crouching dragon already sits with Liu Bei. My father Cao Cao has long coveted the phoenix. These treasures were the gifts to buy him, and I was slipping through your county on the trade roads to reach eastern Wu quietly, because if Wu learned of it, they'd intercept and kill me. And on the way, in your jurisdiction, bandits robbed me blind. Clear cause, clear effect. A secret so plausible, he never thought to question the man in it. He was so rattled, he started offering treasures of his own to make amends. A warring state's bronze cauldron. I sneered that it obviously came from a tomb, and fledgling phoenix would never accept grave goods. And besides, he couldn't admit that, because admitting it meant admitting Cao Cao was a tomb robber. A bronze mirror once belonging to a Han concubine. I threw it down, offended, and said Pang Tong was famously ugly and would take a mirror as an insult. And then he brought out a sword, an 8-sided Han blade, 100 refined steel, 3 feet 3 inches, 2 small seal characters cut into the flat, restoration. One of only 4 ever forged, 3 to 5 years' work apiece. My own sword was a nameless thing I'd been using to chop firewood and hack pythons. It was worn out. This one came at exactly the right time. I weighed it, smacked my lips, allowed that it fell short of my father's legendary blades, and graciously kept it. Then I set the hook. Enter Wu tomorrow, I said. So long as you clear the bandits before I return, and listen carefully. Recover the gold if you can, but keep the bandit leaders alive for me, so I can personally rip out their hearts and eat their flesh. I said it through my teeth like a man with a genuine blood grudge. He was overjoyed to have a task he could survive, and asked how to get me into Wu. He told me the trade route. Grain prices in Xiakou had soared, and merchants were smuggling grain across all along the river. The bank stretched too far to police. As long as no army was crossing, nobody cared. Which, incidentally, confirmed something I'd set in motion months earlier without meaning to think about it out loud. He gave me 4 guards fluent in the Wu region, 4 maids fluent in the dialect, disguises, scholars' robes, books, and a bag of travel money, and put us on a boat. Xiao Qiao, waiting until we were alone, gaped at me. That was amazing. I thought you were telling the truth. So did I, a little. There's nothing we can do about it. We still need to be careful until we cross. Then we're safe. You made up that whole thing just to cross a river, she said, and for the first time in weeks, she almost smiled. She looked, in that moment, a few years younger than the grief Zhou had loaded onto her. Once we crossed into Wu territory, I sent the guards back, and I told them a fresh lie on the way out, that I wasn't Cao Pi at all, I was his brother, Cao Zhi, eloping with my sister-in-law, and if they didn't leave right now, I'd kill them. They stared, dumbfounded, and rode home to a magistrate who was going to have an extremely confusing afternoon. Cao Cao laughed out loud, picturing his face. I sheathed my new sword and said his face was no longer our problem. Then I disguised her, men's clothes, soot on her cheeks, a few false pockmarks, because even in a page boy's robe, she was so beautiful she stopped traffic, and I aged myself up, and we started the long circle back toward Xiakou, taking the mountain roads to be safe. And on a dark forest path at the edge of the war, with the whole world holding its breath for red cliffs, I heard a voice reciting military texts out of a lit thatched hut. Clear, magnetic, pleasant, and I stopped the cart, because I knew that voice. Or rather, I knew the scene. I'd read this exact page. Here's the page. Right about now, Cao Cao's envoy Dangyang comes to eastern Wu a second time. Zhou lets him wander off by accident into the forest, where he stumbles on a brilliant recluse reading aloud, Pang Tong, the fledgling phoenix himself. They get to talking. Dangyang brings the genius back to Cao Cao, and the genius sells Cao Cao the chain strategy. Link all the warships together with iron chains so the seasick northern soldiers can stand on them like solid ground. It works beautifully, and it's precisely why, when the fire comes, the whole fleet burns together and Cao Cao loses everything at Red Cliffs. I was standing in the middle of that page. Late night, no patrols for miles, a scholar reading war texts in a hut, the whole trap Zhou had built to launch Pang Tong at Cao Cao. And a few minutes earlier, a soft, furtive scholar had actually tried to buy my card off me on that same road. Refined little man, staring at me too hard. I'd punched him in the nose, kicked him in the gut, knocked him out, stuffed a sock in his mouth, tied his wrists, and, this is the part I'm slightly ashamed of, carefully put back the money he'd offered, because I'm a thief of carts, not of coins. That was Jianggan. I'd just removed the one man this whole scene needed, which left an opening. So I knocked on the hut. The man who opened it was magnificently ugly. Thick brows, flat wide nose, dark face, an air like he owned the mountain. Pang Tong. And I played the game the histories don't record because I invented it. I played hard to get. I complimented his reading and asked his name. He gave it, gracious. Then he asked mine, and I hesitated and demurred and said my position made it inconvenient, which offended him instantly. I gave you my name honestly, and you hedge and hide? Your heart isn't sincere. Please leave. And he showed me the door. And I left, bowed, apologized, walked out with my page boy, gone. Because here's the thing about two schemers meeting on a dark road. It's all bluff, and it comes down to who breaks first. If Pang Tong genuinely had a mission, if he really was waiting to be discovered, then he couldn't afford to let me walk. And sure enough, I hadn't gone 10 steps before he called after me. Zhanggan Ziyi, do you truly have no sincerity? I turned around wearing a face full of panic. How did you know my identity? And Pang Tong smiled and waved his feather fan and said he'd divined it. He'd divined it. He'd arranged this entire chance meeting with Zhou, and he insisted it was fortune-telling. Because showing off is a disease, and fledgling Phoenix had it bad. So I gave him what he wanted. Yes, I confessed, I'm Zhanggan, and I let him lead the conversation, and he led it exactly where I already knew it went. Bitter about Zhou, hungry for a better master, dropping heavy hints that he'd love to be introduced to Cao Cao. He even bragged that Sun Quan was too short-sighted to use him, and that Red Cliffs was already lost, and that he knew how to break Zhou's fleet. I steered against the current, refused to take the bait, made him chase, until he was sweating and I was somehow the one being begged. And then I got him onto a boat toward the north shore, and the boatman rowing, everything arranged, and I let him relax. And then I steered the boat the wrong way. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He's fledgling Phoenix. He drew his sword, pointed it at me. You're not Jianggan. Who are you? And I drew faster, knocked his blade away, put him on the deck, laid my sword on his neck, and said the same words back to him with a straight face. You're not Pang Tong either. Who are you? He realized, far too late, that he'd walked into someone else's boat. I bound him head to foot, and I took fledgling Phoenix, the man who was supposed to hand Cao Cao the chain strategy, home to Jiangsha instead. I need you to understand why I did that, because it looks insane. I foiled my own side's greatest trick. Without the chain strategy, Red Cliffs might not be the crushing total victory the histories promised. Cao Cao might crawl away with half his fleet. And that was exactly what I wanted. Because a total Sun Liu victory means Eastern Wu comes out strong and hungry, ready to turn on us next. But a Sun Liu victory that's just a bloody stalemate, where both Cao Cao and Sun Quan bleed themselves pale and neither can finish the other, leaves the whole board exhausted and leaves my father, quietly, to grow. The longer Red Cliffs grinds, the more everyone else pays for it, and the more I win by doing nothing. So I kept the genius and killed the plan. Meanwhile, back in Zhou's camp, they were staring at a bound, groaning Jianggan, the real one, who I'd left tied up on the road, and Zhou was screaming a question no one could answer. Where is Pang Tong? Where is Pang Tong? Pang Tong was in my prison in Jiangsha, and I had a problem. I couldn't let this man go, and I couldn't quite convince him to work for me either. He was heartbroken, not because I'd caught him, because his grand debut scheme had been dissected and stolen by some frivolous boy, and he was too ashamed to face Zhou ever again, and he kept threatening to bang his head against the wall. So I gave him something to live for, a puzzle. I drew a map, regions of every shape, all touching, and I asked him a simple question that has no simple answer. Any map, I told him. Can you color it so no two touching regions share a color, using only 4 colors? Draw me one that needs 5. And if you can't, explain why not. He took the bait like a starving fish. Bring paper, he said, and he bent over that map, muttering, drawing, failing, muttering, for days. I'd handed fledgling Phoenix the 4-color theorem, a thing that, where I come from, took the greatest minds centuries and a machine to crack, and told him it was homework. He was going to sit in my government office chewing on it, alive and busy and mine, for a very long time. I even left the front gate open, a good horse tied up, travel money in the saddlebags, a map. Go, if you want, because you cannot cage a man like Pang Tong, but you can give him a reason to stay, and then leave the door open so he can pretend it was his idea. He got as far as the city gate once, then he turned around and came back, because he refused to leave a problem unsolved, which told me everything I needed to know about how to keep him. And with Red Cliffs about to burn one way or another, I had one more front to manage. Because my second uncle, Guan Yu, had gotten bored and decided, all by himself, to go conquer the most fortified city in Jingzhou with 1,000 men and a bad attitude. Nan Commandery, Zhangling, is the real heart of Jingzhou, worth more than Jiangsha and everything else put together. It was held by Cao Ren, Cao Cao's most trusted clan general and the finest defensive commander of the age. In the version of history I'd read, Zhou threw 80,000 men at it for a year and couldn't take it. Guan Yu decided to take it with 1,000. To be fair to my second uncle, he didn't lose, but a month in, he hadn't won either, and my father, worried, sent Mi Feng and me to deliver winter clothes, and quietly, to talk Guan Yu into going home. On the road, at a Mi family post station in a rainstorm, something dropped in my lap. A Cao army scout came through in the night trying to force buy my Dilu horse, and when he wouldn't back off, I let him take it, and Dilu, being Dilu, threw him and dragged him back half dead, because that horse only curses masters it doesn't like. On his body was a bamboo tube sealed with beeswax. Inside, a secret letter, Cao Cao to Cao Ren. Feign defeat, let Guan Yu into the city, bury archers on the walls, and fill him full of arrows. Reinforcements arrive in 3 days. It was the exact trap that, in the histories, catches Zhou, and here it was in my hand, which meant Cao Ren hadn't been ignoring Guan Yu out of cowardice, he'd been running a longer play, wearing my uncle down for the kill. When I reached camp, Guan Yu was on a hilltop staring up at a giant no-war banner Cao Ren had hung 10 feet tall, looking like a man who'd like to strangle a sign. His men had spent a month screaming insults at the walls, and every time they did, Cao Ren beat his war drums and drowned them out, until the soldiers were hoarse and Cao Ren hadn't lost a man. It was, honestly, magnificent trolling. My uncle greeted me warily. "You're not here to talk me into retreating, are you?" He'd sworn he wouldn't face his brother without taking Nan commandery. So I didn't argue. I showed him the letter. He read it 3 times and went cold. If that had reached Cao Ren and my uncle had charged a defeated enemy into the city, he'd have died under a wall. Everyone assumed I'd say retreat now. Instead, I said, "We must not retreat," which surprised the whole tent, including Guan Yu, because I'd read the other half of the page too. Cao Ren was patient, but Cao Ren also knew how to attack. When Guan Yu's army looked strong, he stayed behind his walls. But the moment it looked weak, the moment we faked a retreat, he'd send out a brave general to test us, to break our formation, to nip at the tail of a fleeing enemy. So I laid it out. Feign the retreat, bait the sortie. When they charge, we spring, and we don't kill them fast, and we don't let them go. We fight them just long enough and just messy enough that Cao Ren himself has to come out to save his own men. And when he does, we forget every other soldier on that field, and we throw everything at one man. Catch the thief by catching the king. Cao Ren. Guan Yu stroked his beard, and the smallest smile appeared, because he'd had the same idea, but not so complete, not so patient. And there was one crack in it, which I named. Our men had been screaming at a wall for a month. Their morale was in the mud. What if the sortie just scattered them? And Guan Yu smiled all the way this time. Don't worry about that. The moment my drums sound, they'll come alive. The low morale was theater. He'd been playing dead for Cao Ren just as deliberately as Cao Ren played turtle for us. 2 masters, lying to each other with whole armies. So we faked the retreat down to 50-odd men. And Cao Ren took the bait, sent a fierce general and 300 elite cavalry to run down the stragglers. And out of nowhere, Guan Ping and Zhou Chang hit them from both flanks, and the exhausted army came roaring back like they'd been injected with fire, and we surrounded the sortie and ground it slow, not killing them fast, not letting them run, exactly as planned. Up on the wall, Cao Ren watched his men bleed and refused to save them, cold enough to make his own officers flinch. Let them charge a while longer, he said, using 300 cavalry to measure Guan Yu's strength. And when he'd measured it, when the enemy sortie was down to under 100 and our men looked spent, he threw open the gates and led the rest out himself to capture Guan Yu alive, which was the moment we'd built the whole day around. Guan Yu went straight at him. 3 of Cao Ren's guards blocked the way. My uncle sheared all 3 spears in half with one swing, split the last man top to bottom, and kept coming. Cao Zishao, I've arrived. And Cao Ren, no coward but no fool, broke into a cold sweat. He peeled off to the flank to avoid the god of war and chip at him sideways, which put him right in front of me. His sword work was good. Mine is exquisite, and I had twin blades, 4 passes. On the 4th, I threw my longsword into his horse's leg, and it reared and stumbled, and I was off my own horse and had the point at his throat before his guards could close the 5 steps between us. Stop, or Cao Ren dies here. The whole Cao army froze, commander in enemy hands, personal guards' lives forfeit if he falls, and the 2 sides pulled apart. And just like that, we'd trapped Guan Yu inside Cao Ren's ring at the same moment we'd captured Cao Ren himself. Cao Ren, gagged and bound, kept trying to order his men to hold the city even if he died. I tied him tighter. Guan Yu, delighted, wanted to march Cao Ren to the gates and use him to take Nan commandery. And I stopped him. Second uncle, absolutely not. Because even with Cao Ren as a key, we couldn't hold that city. Cao Cao's reinforcements were 3 days out. Cao Hong, Xu Huang, Li Tong, converging. They wouldn't storm us. They'd ring the city, cut our water and grain, and dangle my father into a rescue. And if my father learned we were trapped, he'd come at any cost, and we'd be surrounded, and our reinforcements ambushed, and losing Nan commandery would be the small problem next to losing my father in the field. Guan Yu went still, like cold water down his back. Don't worry, I said. Taking Cao Ren out of that city is the same as taking the city. We trade him back to Cao Cao for Nan commandery. Gold's easy to find. A general like Cao Ren, Cao Cao's own kin and his best defender, sworn to die rather than surrender? He'll never let that man rot in our hands. He'll pay the city for him. Guan Yu stared at me, and then he laughed and pointed his blade forward. Make way, or I killed Cao Ren. Which sure was one way to say it. We walked out of the encirclement, 300 of 1,000 elite lost, but Cao Ren's whole army too spooked to risk their commander. I got us clear across a river the simple way, gathered the ferries, crossed in batches, burned the boats behind us, paid the villagers double for every one. Because my father's rule was you always pay the people double and you never once break it. We took Cao Ren home tied to a horse, a drum beside him, and every time he opened his mouth to curse, Guan Ping beat the drum and drowned him out. A month of that no war banner, repaid with interest. And somewhere on that road, Guan Yu, proud, cold, adopted son-despising Guan Yu, looked back at me and said the thing I never thought I'd hear from him. Liu Feng deserves half the credit for this victory. I laughed it off, of course, and gave every scrap of it back to him. You already had the plan, second uncle. You lured Cao Ren's guards onto yourself so I could take him. This was all your strategy and courage. I did 1 or 2 tenths at most. And I watched his whole face fill with satisfaction. Because I'd learned the shape of Guan Yu by then, Give him the credit. Speak beautifully. Never crave your own. And the man who once looked at you like garbage starts calling you a fine general. We came home to Nan Commandery and to my father, who traded Cao Ren back to Cao Cao for the city, exactly as I'd said. And now my father held 6 commanderies. Now he held Jingzhou for real. And the world had a new problem to lose sleep over, which was a young man who took cities with letters and captured legends with patience. And I want you to know I paid for all of it in sweat nobody ever saw. Because the man who paid the most, and hated me the most for it, was still out there. His name was Sun Quan, and he had just decided to boil me alive. Red cliffs burned while all this was happening, and it went almost exactly the way I'd wanted. Zhuge Liang's fire came on a southeast wind. Cao Cao's fleet took a beating, but without the chain strategy I'd stolen, it wasn't the total annihilation the histories promised. Half the warships survived. Cao Cao crawled home to Suchong with an army that was hurt, but not dead. Sun and Cao had bled each other pale, and neither could finish the other. A bloody stalemate. Exactly the board I'd wanted, where the only man quietly getting stronger was my father. Zhuge Liang, meanwhile, slipped out of Eastern Wu on his own, left a straw dummy on his wind-praying altar, sailed home the back way, and reappeared in Shakou, travel-worn and grinning while everyone else was still wondering if Zhou Yu had killed him. I'd nearly drowned trying to fetch him. He walked out on his own. Some men you don't need to save. And I brought Cao Cao home to my household. My father grumbled and let it be. After 8 days in the wilderness, there was no undoing what people would assume. And Cao Cao herself said, quietly, that she would not go back to Jiangdong, which she meant and which mattered to me more than I'd planned for it to. But a hostage is a hostage, and Sun Quan wanted his back. So he sent my father a letter. Honey sweet, the alliance is whole. Let's end this quarrel. Send Cao Cao home and we'll return Zhuge Liang. And by the way, I've long admired the young hero Liu Feng and would love to meet him. Zhuge Liang was already home, sitting right beside my father as they read it, which meant the letter was a lie top to bottom. Sun Quan didn't have Zhuge Liang to trade. Sun Quan wanted me to come to Jiangdong so he could kill me. My father didn't want to send me. He wanted to send Sun Qian, the harmless scholar. And I told him what I remembered, that when Eastern Wu received an envoy they hated, they didn't just refuse him, they ground him into the dirt for sport. Send Mr. Sun alone and they'd bully him to death. And if they changed their minds mid-visit, we'd lose the strategist and the envoy both. I should go, and I should not bring Cao Cao, because the moment I handed her over, Sun Quan would tear up the deal and take my head. So I went to Chaisang with Sun Qian and no hostage and a very simple plan, which was to find out exactly how badly Sun Quan wanted me dead, and then make him regret it in front of everyone he'd ever tried to impress. The welcome told me everything. No wine on the bank, no tea, just 2 rows of enormous iron-armored guards with halberds, radiating menace. A man named Bu Ji met us with his hands behind his back and his chin up and said he'd been told to wait for us, not respectfully await, just wait, like we were prisoners of war being processed. Every 10 paces down the road stood 2 armored men who screamed wrath in our faces as we passed. Sun Qian was sweating through his robe by the 2nd mile. I strolled. The hall was 100 paces of cold stone, packed with 100 armored men in swords and halberds. And in the center, over a roaring fire, sat a huge cauldron of oil, bubbling. And up a flight of stone steps, on a high platform, lounged a man in magnificent robes looking down at us like insects. Sun Qian. Sun Qian gripped my sleeve. Young master, we may both die here today. And I looked at the cauldron, and I looked at the man perched high above it too careful to come down, and I started to laugh. First a chuckle, then a real laugh. Then I was bent double, and then I was sitting on the floor of Eastern Wu's Grand Hall, slapping my own knee, howling like I'd just heard the single funniest joke in the history of the world. Sun Qian thought I'd cracked. Sun Qian, up on his throne, thought so too, and worse, hoped so, because a Liu Feng scared out of his wits was exactly the show he'd built this whole hall to stage. Why, Sun Quan asked, cold, are you laughing? I pointed, roughly, in his direction, and I said it to Sun Qian, loud enough for 100 armored men to hear. Everyone says Sun Quan of Jiangdong is all bark and no bite, that he fears me like a tiger. I never believed it, but now I've seen it, it's true. That went into Sun Quan like the cup went into Zhou Yu. He shot up out of his chair, veins standing, hands shaking, because I'd trapped him with his own theater. He'd built the platform and the cauldron and the screaming guards to prove his might, and if he now hid up there and had his soldiers boil me without a word, it would prove, to every man in that hall, that he'd been afraid of me all along. Some things have to be said out loud, and the worst thing you can do to a proud man is make the saying his only option. Nonsense, he roared. You think I fear you? That's a joke. If you don't fear me, why the 100 suits of armor? Why hide on that platform, not daring to show your face? Even the king of Qin wasn't this cautious. Are you afraid I'll assassinate you? He was losing his mind, and every word out of him made it clearer that he'd been afraid, and I could see his advisors staring at each other in horror, because the script had gotten away from them completely. So I gave him the ladder down that a proud man can never refuse. I unbuckled my sword and threw it clear across the hall, clang, feet away. Look, Marquis of Wu, I've thrown down my sword. He seethed, and then I upped it. I beckoned to his own guards and invited them to come search me. Nobody dared move without his order. So I said, fine, I'll do it myself, and started opening my robe to show the the armored men there was nothing hidden on me, which was the strip search his advisor had prepared to humiliate me with, now performed by me, on myself, cheerfully, as a taunt. Look, nothing on me, and the Marquis of Wu still won't come down. Aren't you afraid of me? Sun Quan lost it completely. He tore free of Zhang Zhao's restraining hand, told his guards to stay put, and stormed down the steps to stand chest to chest with me. Liu Feng, you brat. Now Sun Quan is right in front of you. Do you think I'm afraid? I looked at him. If you're not afraid of me, why bring your guards? What guards? The ones standing right behind you. He turned to look. I'd told his own men to stay back. Who was disobeying? And there was no one there. And in the half-second his eyes were off me, I moved. I threw the Marquis of Wu to the floor of his own hall, pinned him with my knee, pulled his own sword, and laid it across his throat. Everyone back 50 paces, one step forward, and I kill him. 100 armored men stopped breathing. Sun Qian scrambled over, grabbed my thrown sword and my scattered clothes, and stood at my shoulder, and I want to note that a bookish little scholar had just gone from certain will die to guarding my flank in under a minute, because Sun Qian is braver than he looks. His advisors begged. I patted Sun Quan's cheek. You brought me here to kill me, and now you've plotted against your own allies again and broken your word again. Don't you understand Cao Cao would swallow you whole without my father to balance him? This is your idea of a Marquis of Wu? Every question stripped another layer off him in front of his court. And then, because a lesson has to leave a mark, I dragged him to the cauldron. The steam hit our faces. You set this pot to boil me, didn't you? Fine, boil me. What does Liu Feng have to fear? But I'm taking the Marquis of Wu into the oil with me, and we'll both find out how it tastes. He wasn't fighting to break free anymore. He was clawing backward with both hands, and I was stronger, and I pressed him down until the side of his face touched the rim of the cauldron. It hissed, he screamed, and a brand seared itself diagonally across the face of the Lord of Eastern Wu in front of 100 of his own soldiers. That's the thing about me that people underestimate right up until it's too late. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to die. But I'd learned the one iron law of standing in a room full of people who want you dead. The more terrified you act, the more they'll dare, and the more insane you act, the more they'll hesitate. So I out-crazied the room. Again. And it worked. Again. Zhang Zhao caved. Fine. We don't have Zhuge Liang. We admit it. Don't kill the Marquis. We swear no harm. And I knew it. Knew the whole letter was a lie. Knew they'd never held Zhuge Liang. Knew this had only ever been a plan to boil me. But you can't march the Lord of Jiangdong home in a cage on the eve of everything either. So I made a demand instead. I keep Sun Quan as hostage. You go find Zhuge Liang. And if you can't produce him in 3 days, I feed the Marquis of Wu to heaven. And I refused to sit in any residence or inn they offered. No food I hadn't watched cooked. No bed they'd arranged. No chance for a rescue in the night. Sun Qian knew a place. An abandoned temple up the mountain. Sun Tzu's spirit tablet inside. One path up. Hold it with a single man against 10,000. So I bound Sun Quan and marched him up there, and left Zhang Zhao a message at the foot of the trail. 3 days. Produce Zhuge Liang or bury your lord. And the temple turned out not to be empty. There was a woman living there, late 20s, dressed plain, washing clothes in a winter stream with hands gone red from the cold. Beautiful and familiar. The same face as Cao Cao, but gentler, sadder, quieter. Da Qiao, Sun Tzu's widow. Living in hiding in a dead man's shrine, 8 years, on grain smuggled up by the sister and brother-in-law who still loved her, because a widow with no husband and a nervous brother-in-law on the throne is a woman who learns to disappear before the throne remembers she exists. I understood her whole life the moment I saw her, and I understood something uglier too when Sun Quan, tied up, cornered, days into his humiliation, let a certain look cross his face at the sight of his brother's widow. She caught it. She went into the shrine and came back holding Sun Tzu's spirit tablet and asked her brother-in-law to repeat, in front of it, what his face had just said. He couldn't. He wept. And I filed away, quietly, that Da Qiao could never safely go home again, not with what she now knew about the man on the throne. The 3 days ran out with no Zhuge Liang, because Zhuge Liang was already sitting in Shako beside my father, having escaped Eastern Wu weeks before, so the whole hostage exchange was 2 sides holding empty bags. Which meant it could only end one way. A letter from my father, verified down to a missing brushstroke on the date so I'd know it was real, telling me to bring Sun Quan to the ferry and hand him back. I released the Marquis of Wu at the water's edge with his brand still raw on his cheek, and I took Da Qiao out of Jiangdong with me, because leaving her there was leaving her to die. And I bowed to Sun Quan and said, pleasantly, until we meet again. He bowed back, politely, and I watched him swallow a rage so total it had gone quiet. Let me draw the line all the way so you can see what 1 year had done. A year ago, I was the adopted son, foreign surname, bottom of the family, a nobody riding into a massacre. And now, I had taken half of Jingzhou. I had captured Cao Cao's finest general and traded him for a province. I had taken the supreme commander of the allied fleet hostage with his own cup and pressed the lord of Eastern Wu's face into a cauldron of oil in front of his own 100 guards. My father called me his only prodigy. Zhuge Liang studied me like a puzzle he couldn't finish, and the 2 most powerful men south of Cao Cao said my name with a chill. I'd out-schemed the whole board, and the board knew it now, which was exactly the problem, because that night, across the water, Sun Quan sat with the brand cooling on his cheek and with Zhou, twice shamed, the stolen wife still burning in him, and the two most dangerous men in Jiangdong stopped, at last, thinking about how to kill me. You can't kill Liu Feng, Zhou said. Cao Cao would eat the pieces, but there's an older way to destroy a man, the way you turn a son against a father, the way Diaochan turned Liu Bei against Dongzhou. Do you remember, Sun Quan asked slowly, the beauty scheme? And they looked at each other and smiled for the first time in a very long time. They had a sister, Sun Shangxiang, beautiful, fierce, and unrefusable. And they were going to wrap her up as a gift and hand her to me, a gift I could not decline without insulting the alliance, and could not accept without lighting a fire between me and the one man whose complete trust was the whole foundation I stood on. Either my father would come to see the adopted son as a threat he had to remove, or the son would betray the father and lose the world and everything in it. One of us had to fall. That was the entire point of the gift. And I, sailing home in triumph, half a province at my back, my father's love and Cao Cao and a rescued widow all under my roof, more certain than I'd ever been that I had this whole world figured out. I had absolutely no idea it was coming. But the bride, and the trap folded up inside her, and the longest, quietest, most personal game anyone would ever play against me, that's where the story goes next. Because the man who beats everyone at the board eventually meets the two who stop playing the board and reach for his family instead. They sent me a bride, and the bride came with 100 sword maids and a knife folded behind her smile. I should explain the knife, because on paper it was the friendliest thing anyone in Eastern Wu had ever done for me. After I'd taken half of Jingzhou, humiliated their grand viceroy, and pressed their lord's face into a cauldron of oil in front of his own 100 guards, Sun Quan and Zhou stopped trying to kill me. They'd worked out that killing me was impossible. Cao Cao was still north of us, and if the Sun Liu alliance broke over my corpse, Cao Cao would eat the pieces. So they did the only thing left. They tried to make my own family kill me. Do you remember, Sun Quan had asked, why Dongzhou and Liu Bei turned on each other? A woman. That's the whole answer to that riddle, and both of them knew it. So Zhou built the plan around it, and it was, I have to admit, beautiful. Sun Quan had a younger sister, Sun Shangxiang, 16, fierce as a wildcat, gorgeous, and surrounded at all times by 100 maids who carried real swords and knew how to use them. And the plan was to offer her in marriage to my father, Liu Bei, as a gesture of alliance, to be sent from her family home like a proper bride. And my father, they figured, would come to Jiangdong to fetch her, and once he was on their soil, alone, they'd cage him. Cage the Imperial Uncle, and you can command Liu Feng through him, because Liu Feng is famously, tediously loyal to his father, and would never dare disobey. That was the front half. Here's the part with the knife. If my father didn't come himself, if he sent me to escort the bride instead, then the trap flipped and got worse, because Liu Feng is famously, tediously fond of women. Put a beauty like Sun Shangxiang in front of him for days on the road, and sooner or later, he'd cross a line. And the moment he did, they'd have a handle. Even if father and son stayed close afterward, the whole world would laugh. And a laugh at Liu Feng is a Liu Feng my father can no longer use. And if it went all the way, if the son actually took what belonged to the father, then Dongzhou and Liu Bei all over again. One of two things had to happen. Either my father would come to see the adopted son as a threat and remove him, or the son would betray the father and lose the world. Whichever fell, Eastern Wu sat back and watched two tigers eat each other. You cannot refuse a bride. Refusing a marquis of Wu's sister is an insult that shatters the alliance and hands Cao Cao everything. You cannot accept her cleanly either, because accepting her is walking into the exact fire they lit. It was a gift you could not decline and could not survive. It was, in short, the best move anyone had ever made against me. And the first I knew of it, I was standing at the Jiangsha ferry with 1,000 men hidden in the reeds, watching 30 red-ribboned bridal barges sail toward me out of the east, and Sun Qian beside me saying, in a small voice, that strategist Zhuge Liang was indeed a master. Because the day before, a message had come from non-commandery, from my father, from Zhuge Liang. Not a letter, 3 small brocade pouches, and the man who delivered them, Sun Qian, had warned me over and over. The strategist said open them only when the time is right. The first one, open it, he said, the moment you lay eyes on them. So I'd opened the pink one, and Sun Qian and I had stared at the silk inside, and stared at each other, and neither of us had the faintest idea what it meant. A note about red-clothed maids, a band of musicians, executioners. It read like a shopping list for a nightmare. And then I'd thought about it for a while, and the shape came clear, and I'd almost laughed. Zhuge Liang had guessed the trap before it arrived. He knew Sun Quan would send the sister. He'd sent me a countermove I didn't yet understand, sealed in pouches, to be opened in sequence like a recipe. Which is how I ended up meeting the deadliest wedding present in 3 provinces with my own war drums, an honor guard, and a plan I hadn't finished reading. Sun Quan himself came off the lead barge, all smiles, and took my hand like we were old friends. Brother Liu Feng, how have you been? Behind him stood Lu Su on one side and Zhou on the other. 3 of the heaviest men in Jiangdong come to hand-deliver a girl to a ferry. Nobody escorts a wedding with the Grand Viceroy and the Chief of Staff unless the wedding is a weapon. Zhou cupped his hands, brand scar and all, and spoke the sweet part. Eldest young master, it's time Sun and Liu buried the past. My lord sends his sister to marry the Imperial Uncle. May our two houses be forever joined. Translation? I'm putting my own sister into your house like a hostage. Look how sincere I am. Now come take the bait. And behind him, off the barge, they started coming down the ramp. 200 soldiers first. Then 100 maids in red, young, pretty, cold-faced, everyone with a sword at her hip and murder in her posture. And then, drawn carefully off the ship by 4 soldiers, a bridal carriage so gorgeous it looked like a small palace, curtains drawn, a figure just visible inside. I looked at the 100 armed maids, I looked at the veiled shape in the palanquin, I looked at the 3 most dangerous men in Jiangdong smiling at me on my own riverbank. And I understood exactly why the second brocade pouch was still sewn shut in my sleeve, and exactly why Zhuge Liang had told me to open it later. He hadn't finished laughing yet, and neither, it turned out, had I. The first thing I did was refuse to let 3 enemy commanders stand on my riverbank a second longer than necessary. Sun Quan pressed, "Come now, brother, we didn't sail all this way just to hand off a girl and leave. Surely you're not afraid of me." And I looked him in his branded face and said, cheerfully, the one word he wasn't expecting. "Afraid, yes." He blinked. "Eastern Wu has plotted against my father, my strategist, and me 3 times now. You're ruthless and treacherous, and I hold Jiangsha, and the lives of 100,000 people rest on me. Of course I'm afraid of you. I've received you with drums and honor, which is already more courtesy than you've earned. But if you don't leave, then you're not delivering a bride, you're invading my Jiangsha, and if that's the case, don't blame me for turning cold." And I clapped my hands. Drums rolled from the reeds, banners went up on the hills behind us, and warships slid out of the waterways on both sides and quietly ringed Sun Quan's little wedding flotilla. It was, I'll admit, a bit theatrical, but you cannot let a man who came to trap you feel comfortable on your own ground. Sun Quan forced a smile, said he wouldn't stay where he wasn't trusted, and offered, generously, to leave honest, gentle Lu Su behind to accompany the bride the rest of the way, which I accepted because I knew perfectly well Lu Su wasn't left behind out of manners. He was left to watch, to be the eyes that made sure the trap sprang. Fine, let him watch. Sun Quan turned to go, and the moment his back was to me, the smile fell off his face like a mask, and he muttered to Zhou through his teeth, and the 2 of them sailed away carrying enough hatred to power a small war. Which left me on a boat, heading west toward my father, with a bride I couldn't refuse, a hostage escort watching my every move, and 100 sword maids who all wanted to test whether Liu Feng was really the man from the songs. The bride tested first. She did it from inside her curtained palanquin, on the 2nd floor of the barge, where she took her meals and never showed her face except to her maids. A voice came out through the curtain the first night, sharp, spoiled, curious. "You're Liu Feng." "Miss," I said, and bowed to the curtain. "Liu Feng is here. I heard you're good with a sword. Who taught you?" "My second uncle." "Then let's spar sometime." Sun Qian went pale beside me, and I answered her the way I answer anyone fishing for a handle. "Liu Feng's sword is deadly," I said, and let it hang there like a closed door. She pushed once more. "If it's so deadly, why didn't you kill my brother when you had him?" And I gave her nothing she could hook onto, and the curtain went quiet, and I thought that was the end of round 1. It wasn't. Because Sun Shangxiang was 16 and had never in her life been told no, and a locked box is precisely the thing that makes a spoiled, fierce girl want to climb out of it. So one night, she climbed out of it, traded clothes with a maid, slipped out of the palanquin to prowl the deck, and found me apparently asleep in a chair by her carriage, guarding it like a statue. And she decided to see, quietly, with a real blade, exactly how good the sleeping man's reflexes were. The sword came down at me in the dark. I caught it, knocked it wide, embedded it in the ship's rail with a thud, and had my own blade at the maid's throat before the echo faded. And I opened my eyes and looked at her, beautiful, sharp, capricious, panic flickering under the boldness, and I said, "Miss Sun, do you really not want to live?" She tried to bluster, "I'm not Miss Sun, I just wanted to test your sword work," and I laid it out flat. "I remember the faces of the 4 maids who boarded this ship. I've never seen yours, so I suppose the young lady couldn't bear the box, and traded clothes to go for a stroll." She stiffened her neck and admitted it. "Fine, I'm your future stepmother-to-be. What can you do to me?" Which was the whole trap in one sentence. She was gold. She was untouchable. She was about to marry my father, which made her the one person on this boat I couldn't lay a finger on, and she knew it. And she was going to spend the entire voyage daring me to react so they'd have their handle. So I didn't touch her. I did something worse. I called for her 4 real maids to be brought up, bound them like chickens on the deck, and I said, pleasant as anything, "If the young lady keeps misbehaving, I'll throw these 4 into the river, one at a time." "You wouldn't dare." I gave a small nod, and 2 soldiers lifted a maid over the rail. Sun Shangxiang cracked instantly. "Fine, fine, I'll do whatever you say. Just put her down." And there it was. The girl had one weakness, and it wasn't a weakness Zhou had planned for. She genuinely loved the women around her. She'd throw herself at a wall to prove she couldn't be controlled, but she'd fold in a heartbeat to protect someone she cared about. I filed it away, exactly where I'd filed the shape of Guan Yu and the guilt of Liu Pen and the pride of Sun Quan. Everyone has a lever. Hers was loyalty. I put the maid down. I sent Sun Shangshang back into her box with her 4 maids assigned to attend her and a standing order, 1 out at a time, no exceptions, nobody leaves without my say-so. And the bride who'd come to trap me spent the rest of the voyage sitting exactly where I put her, sulking, and, though I wouldn't understand this until later, quietly, furiously fascinated. Because that's the thing nobody tells you about a girl raised to be a weapon. Point enough men at her, and the only one she'll ever look at twice is the one who doesn't flinch. Sun Qian, watching me handle all this without laying a hand on her, breathed easier and thought his young master was safe. Sun Qian did not know about the second brocade pouch. And the second brocade pouch was where the whole thing turned inside out. Here's what Zhuge Liang had done while I was busy not touching a bride on a boat. The bride had been sent to marry my father, so Zhuge Liang gave my father a different wedding. By the time we reached non-commandery, the whole city was already decked out red and gold for a marriage, my father's marriage, to a noblewoman of the Jingshang gentry, a match sealed weeks ago, invitations sent from the great families down to the common folk of the whole commandery. It was public. It was done. It was, as far as anyone in Jingzhou knew, the wedding of the season, and it had absolutely nothing to do with Sun Shangshang. Zhuge Liang met us 30 miles out, all courtesy, and handed Liu Su an invitation. Liu Su, escorting a bride to marry Liu Bei, opened an invitation to Liu Bei's wedding to somebody else, and I watched the color drain out of his honest face in real time. Strategist, he said carefully, how has this become Liu Bei's wedding to a woman of Jingzhou? And Zhuge Liang gave him the performance of a lifetime, which was to be pleasantly, immovably baffled that anyone found this strange. What's odd about it? She's a daughter of a good Jingzhou family who's long admired the Imperial Uncle. My lord isn't a heartless man. Taking a wife is only human. You're making a fuss over nothing. Liu Su's mouth opened and closed. Then what about Miss Sun? Miss Sun? Zhuge Liang blinked, all innocence. Which Miss Sun? I want you to appreciate the machine that was running here. Zhuge Liang knew exactly which Miss Sun. He'd known before she left Jiangdong. The whole staged wedding existed for one purpose, to make it physically impossible for my father to marry her, so that when Liu Su arrived with a bride and nowhere to put her, there'd be exactly one face-saving solution left on the table. And Zhuge Liang was going to make Liu Su reach for that solution himself and thank him for it. Because think about Liu Su's position. He'd escorted a Marquis of Wu's sister across 2 provinces in a bridal palanquin with fanfare to be married, and now the groom was already taken. If she went home unwed in the same palanquin she came in, it wasn't just embarrassing. It was a catastrophe. Miss Sun would be a laughingstock. The Marquis of Wu would be a laughingstock. The alliance would curdle over pure humiliation. And Zhuge Liang, having built that cliff, gently offered Liu Su a bridge. Why not simply say, he mused, that Miss Sun came here to marry young Master Feng? They're a fine match, close in age. Even if there was some playful friction on the road, young man, young woman, that's only the start of affection. Marry them, and every wagging tongue goes silent. And she's still family to my lord. The alliance only grows stronger. A match made in heaven. Isn't it wonderful? Liu Su stood there with his mouth open, watching a trap close so gently he almost wanted to compliment it. He tried to fight. My young lady is of noble birth. How can she be a mere concubine? And Zhuge Liang closed that too. The eldest young master is only betrothed, not yet wed, and will treat Miss Sun with the full rights of a principal wife. And then he sealed it with the thing Liu Su couldn't argue against, a wandering rumor from the barge, which the Mi brothers had helpfully overheard and helpfully spread, that Miss Sun had slipped out of her palanquin in disguise and had playful words with the young master, which was true. She'd said, "What can you do to me?" while holding a sword she'd stolen to test on me in my sleep. But out of context, at a wedding, it sounded like exactly the kind of playful friction that ends in a marriage, and it made returning her home look even worse than marrying her off. Liu Su did the arithmetic every honest man eventually does across a table from Zhuge Liang. Marrying her to Liu Feng saved Eastern Wu's face, preserved the alliance, and cost Jiangdong nothing it hadn't already spent. Whereas fighting it just meant carrying a rejected bride home in front of the whole world. So he sighed, the long sigh of a man who's been outthought and knows it, and agreed. The beauty trap Sun Quan and Zhou Yu built to split me from my father had just been reforged, by my father's own strategist, into a wife who bound Jiangdong to me tighter than ever. The knife they folded inside the gift had been quietly turned around to point back at the men who sent it. There was only one person who didn't cooperate with the flawless plan, the bride. Because when they told Sun Shangshang she'd be marrying Liu Feng instead of Liu Bei, she was not offended, not heartbroken, not outraged at the insult to her house. She had exactly one objection, and it was the most Sun Shangshang objection possible. What? If I'm the principal wife, she demanded, then why does he still have to marry Guan Feng? Liu Su rubbed his temples. The girl's focus was, let's say, unusual. She was supposed to be asking why the wedding had switched grooms. Instead, she sounded, if I'm being honest, a little excited and a lot territorial. He explained, patiently, that young Master Liu Feng was already betrothed, and this was the only clean way out. She thought about it. Fine, but 2 conditions. Liu Feng has to agree. A pause. And my maids come with me. And that was that. The wildcat they'd sent to burn my house down had, over the course of 1 boat ride, decided she rather liked the house. My father, standing under all that red and gold with his own Jingzhou bride, watched us bow to him, and beamed, and did not know whether to be relieved or terrified. He'd wanted the succession safe. Zhuge Liang had just handed his adopted son the sister of the Marquis of Wu, and turned an assassination plot into a marriage alliance, and cost him nothing but a little face he'd already decided to spend. The only thing standing between me and a peaceful wedding night was a bride who'd made her maids draw swords across my bridal chamber door and dared me to come in. Now, a word about Sun Shangxiang, because you have to understand the history to understand the wedding. In the version of events I'd read, Lady Sun married my father, and it went badly. The 2 of them so suspicious of each other that she built herself a fortress room and packed it with 100 armed maids, and my father simply gave up and left her to rule her little kingdom of blades alone. Neither of them ever really lowered a sword. A marriage that was 2 garrisons pretending to be a household. But she wasn't marrying my father, she was marrying me, and I had no intention of surrendering a wing of my own house to a standing army of teenage swordswomen. Fortunately, 96 of the maids were already mine, folded into my household in the deal, which left her exactly 4, and 4 I could work with. So on the wedding night, she led me to the chamber door, and then she darted inside, spun around, and slammed it in my face. "If you want into the bridal chamber," she called through the wood, "beat my 4 maids first." And she stuck her tongue out and threw the bolt. The 4 maids drew their swords and surrounded me in the courtyard. And I want to be clear that these were not helpless girls. She'd trained them, and they knew what they were doing. It just didn't matter. A few moves and all 4 were on the ground, disarmed, nursing bruised wrists, entirely intact and entirely defeated. But I didn't knock. I didn't kick the door. I cupped my hands, polite as a guest, and said, "Since Madam won't let me in, Liu Feng won't force it. I'll go sleep in my own room. Good night, Madam." And I turned and walked away. There was a silence from behind the door, a confused, calculating silence. Then a kick, and the door flew open, and Sun Shangxiang stood in the wreckage of her own bolt, staring around the empty courtyard where her husband had, on their wedding night, simply declined to exist. "Liu Feng, what is the meaning of this? Liu Feng, come back here." No answer, just the sound of the side room door closing. "Liu Feng, ah!" She kicked that door too, and there I was, lying comfortably in the side room, and she stood there ready to spit fire. "On our wedding night, and you go and sleep somewhere else. Liu Feng, how could you do this?" "It's not that I don't want to come in," I said, from the bed. "It's that Madam won't let me in." "Then come in now." Madam was holding a sharp sword. Liu Feng is timid as a mouse. "I was afraid you'd hurt me, so I didn't dare open the door." You have to understand what I was doing here, because it wasn't cruelty and it wasn't romance. It was the same thing I do to everyone, applied to a girl. Sun Shangxiang had spent her whole life being the wildcat snarl and men flinch, and she wins. Every man in her life had either feared her or wanted her, which are the same fuel. And the one move nobody had ever pulled on her was the shrug. So I shrugged. I made her fearsomeness into a joke, and her wedding night into a slammed side room door. And I let her feel, for the first time, what it's like to be the one standing outside. "You," she said, going red, "if you're so brave, then don't open it. Don't ever open it again in your whole life." And she stormed off and got 3 steps and came back, because she could not stand to lose the last word. "Fine, I'll throw down the sword." And a blade hit the courtyard stones with a clang. "Now do you dare come out? I'm afraid Madam might have a kitchen knife hidden in her sleeve." "I dare not." "Who hides a kitchen knife in their sleeve?" "Prove it," I said. "Show me you've nothing hidden." I fully expected that to end the argument. I did not expect the God of War's niece, the Marquis of Wu's sister, to stand in the winter courtyard and start yanking off her outer robes one by one to prove she wasn't smuggling cutlery, shivering, out of pure refusal to be beaten by a shut door. At which point a gentleman opens the door. So I did, quickly, and draped my own coat over her shoulders and became, in an instant, the most attentive husband alive. "Oh dear madam, I was only teasing. I never thought you'd actually take them off. You'll catch cold." She glared at me with a hatred so total it wrapped all the way around into something else, and then, for no reason she could have named, she burst into tears. "Liu Feng, you're really something. Not even stepping into your wife's room on your wedding night. You lecher, everyone says, and you won't even—" "It's not that I don't want to go in," I said gently, guiding her toward the door and the brazier and the warmth. "It's that madam kept trying to stab me. And that, more or less, was the taming of Sun Shangxiang, not a conquest." A shrug she couldn't punch, a door she couldn't outstubborn, and a husband who found her fierceness funny instead of threatening. Within a month, she'd stopped testing me and started defending me, telling anyone who'd listen that her brother's son Quan had gone too far, that Liu Feng was in the right. The wildcat Zhou had aimed at my household had, through no cleverness of Zhou's, curled up in it and started guarding the door. The beauty trap was dead, turned, diffused, and married into an alliance stronger than before, which left exactly one loose thread from Eastern Wu still dangling in my house. Because months back, on a very different river, I'd walked out of Zhou's tent with the most beautiful woman in Jiangdong as a hostage, and Cao Cao was still under my roof, and Lu Su had not forgotten her, and sooner or later Jiangdong was going to want her back. The trouble was, by the time they asked, Cao Cao had complications. Between the wedding and the war, I had a province to run, and I ran it like a swindler. Let me tell you about the winter Jiangsha almost starved, because it's the best look you'll get at what I actually am under the fool's mask, and it has nothing to do with a sword. A bad harvest, 100,000 extra Xinye mouths, and the dead of winter coming. The grain I'd hauled back from the south wouldn't last. My minister Jiang Wan came to me with the sensible plan every honest official brings. Ask Lord Xuande to buy grain and sell it cheap to the people. Charity from above. I told him to do the opposite. Close the granaries, raise the price of grain, and buy everything, at double the going rate. Jiang Wan's eyes went wide. Young master, if we do this, the people get less grain, not more. You'll starve them. Just do as I say. I have a plan. Here's the plan, and I stole it, by the way. Copied the homework of a famously corrupt official from a dynasty that hadn't happened yet, because a good Khan doesn't care what century it's from. I set the price sky high and bought in small daily amounts, creeping up, and grain merchants came running. From every direction, from every rival territory, fleets of them, hauling grain across the river into Jiangsha to sell at my ridiculous price, pulling grain out of Cao Cao's lands and Sun Quan's lands and into mine, because a merchant will chase a coin off a cliff. I let them line up. I bought a tenth of what they brought and let the rest sit, and waited for the harbor to fill with more grain than Jiangsha had ever seen. Then, when the granaries were groaning and merchant fleets were stacked up waiting, I flipped it, dropped the buying price to a third, opened the government stores and started selling grain to the people at that same third price, cheap, but only in small amounts, no bulk. And I set up porridge stations, 10 in each quarter of the city, twice a day, so no one who couldn't afford grain would freeze. And I added one instruction that made Jiang Wan stare at me like I was mad. Throw a small handful of dry dirt into every pot of porridge, sand in the relief porridge. It sounds monstrous. It's mercy with math in it, because when free porridge is clean, the rich elbow the poor aside to eat it too, and the poor starve in the crush. But sprinkle a little grit in it, and the rich won't touch it. They'll go buy grain instead, at my cheap third price, which is exactly what I want. And the poor eat it anyway, dirt and all, and they live. Nobody fights. Everybody survives. One handful of dirt sorts the whole city by need instead of by fists. Now, the grain merchants, stuck. They'd hauled their fortunes across 2 provinces expecting my crazy high price. Now the dead of winter was here, and I'd offer to buy at a third, or they could haul it all the way home again. The long freezing road, empty ships turned to loaded ones, grain rotting in transit, everything they'd spent gone for nothing. So they sold, at a third, and I filled every granary in Jiangsha for a fraction of what it was worth, and not one person under my rule froze that winter, while the people in Wenpin's lands and Sun Quan's lands starved. Jiang Wan, watching it worked out the catch himself. Those grain merchants were mostly backed by powerful families, and I just fleeced the powerful families of 3 provinces. They'd hate me. Powerful men who hate you are a problem no wall fixes. I'd already thought of that, so I threw them a banquet. Called it the Grain Appreciation Banquet, out at the foot of a beautiful mountain by the river. 100 tables, venison and wine. Every wealthy merchant I'd just ruined, invited to hear how sorry I was. They came furious, and I gave them 3 gifts. First, every merchant here trades in my territory tax-free for a year, half tax for 2 more. Only the ones who lost money feeding my people. They stopped being furious. Second, I'm building 20 grand estates at the foot of this mountain, walled, patrolled by my own soldiers, safe from bandits. And next year's top 20 merchants each get one, free. In a world where merchants live in terror of being robbed and murdered on the road, I just offered them the government as their private bodyguard. Now they were leaning in. Third, and this was the one that mattered, I brought out a plaque. 4 characters. Good merchant who saves the people. A little wooden sign, worthless until you understand what it's worth. Because in a war-torn age, when armies sack cities and slaughter whoever's inside, there is one kind of person the powerful will spare if they possibly can. A famous, publicly honored philanthropist. Killing one of those costs more in outrage than it's worth. That plaque on your gate was a certificate of virtue that might just keep your whole family alive the day the soldiers came. I was handing out survival insurance and calling it a thank you note. By the end, they were toasting me. And when one asked what I wanted from them in return, I sighed and said only that they prosper and my people eat. Oh, and would they each build a decorated cart for a New Year festival, painted with their guild's name, to parade through the streets so the people could see which merchants saved their lives. Which sounded like humility and was free advertising, and they nearly wept with gratitude for the chance to pay me in publicity. I fed a starving province by ruining its merchants, and then turned the ruined merchants into my most loyal, grateful, self-promoting supporters, and then billed the whole thing to my father's benevolent reputation by telling everyone it was Lord Xuanday's idea. Oh, and the beautiful mountain the estate sat under. I had a great tower built on it and told Zhang Wan to enshrine a brand new god I made up on the spot, the god of timely rain, so the tower would draw pilgrims and the whole district would boom. I named the tower something modest and serene, so no one would think the owner had ambitions above his station, the pavilion of cultivating the heart. Nice and humble. I did not mention that 1,000 years later, in dynasties that hadn't happened yet, the hall of cultivating the heart would be the private residence where emperors lived. Nobody caught it. Nobody was supposed to. That's the whole trick. Bury the crown so deep in a joke that even the genius watching you laughs and moves on. Then I stretched and left it all to Zhang Wan and went home to look useless. Because a man who runs the richest, best-fed, safest district in 3 provinces without ever appearing to work is a man nobody thinks to watch, which was, as always, the entire point. When Lu Su finally came for Cao Cao, the alliance was whole again, and there was no honest reason to keep her. My father agreed she should go home, so I brought her out to be handed back to Jiangdong. And Lu Su and my father watched the most beautiful woman in Eastern Wu walk into the hall, rosier than she'd been, a little fuller, and unmistakably, 7 months obviously, with child. My father's benevolent smile froze on his face and slid slowly off it. This, he managed. Madam Qiao, is that exactly 7 months? Xiao Qiao said sweetly. No more, no less. He pulled me outside and hissed the question. Was it mine? And I cupped my hands, sincere as sunrise. Father, it's yours, meaning your grandchild. He put his hand over his face, because now the math was catastrophic. Borrow 1 wife, return 2 people. Zhou Yu had lent me a hostage, and I was about to hand her back pregnant, which, to a man like Zhou Yu, is not an apology. It's a declaration of war. Send her home now, and Zhou Yu might kill her in a rage and break the alliance. Keep the child, and she becomes a hostage in someone else's hands. Every road out was on fire, so we didn't take a road. We stalled. My father told Lu Su, with great regret, that Lady Qiao had fallen gravely ill and was recovering in Jingling, and we'd send her the moment she was well. Lu Su smelled it, and pushed, and got nowhere. Because you cannot demand to inspect a sick woman without looking like a monster, and Lu Su was not a monster. He went home empty-handed, again, and reported to Sun Quan, again, that Liu Feng had somehow slipped the knot, again, and Sun Quan slammed his fist on his desk and screamed my name at the ceiling, again. I want you to notice a pattern forming, because it's the whole shape of my life in Jiangdong. Every time Sun Quan and Zhou Yu reached for me, they came back with a fistful of nothing and a fresh humiliation, and every fresh humiliation made them more determined, and more determined made them more careless, and careless was exactly the state I needed them in. So Sun Quan, twice shamed over the beauty trap, hatched a new plan, and this one, at last, was almost friendly. He would kill me with kindness. Invite me to Jiangdong for the guining, the customary visit a new husband pays his wife's family. Roll out the wine and the music and the pretty dancers. And, since we were relatives now, gently suggest that his dear brother-in-law help Eastern Wu win a battle or 2, seize a city or 2, since we were all one big happy family. If the flattery softened me, maybe I'd drift from my father. If it didn't, at least I'd be conquering land for Jiangdong. Eastern Wu couldn't lose either way. So I sailed east again, with Sun Shangxiang and Pang Tong still traveling as my ugly, muttering attendant and a handful of guards. And where the last time I'd landed in Jiangdong to a gauntlet of screaming armored men and a cauldron of boiling oil, this time Sun Quan met me on the bank with 18 tables of wine and fruit. A beautiful girl posed at each one, and the widest, warmest smile human muscles can produce. Brother-in-law, he cried, from 100 paces off, hurrying forward to grab my hand. Just months ago we were enemies, now we're both brothers and relatives. What a stroke of luck. I bowed. Liu Feng greets his brother-in-law. What, Marquis of Wu? From now on, it's brother-in-law. And he laughed until his branded cheek crinkled, and I looked at the man whose face I'd pressed into a pot of oil, now beaming and holding my hand like we'd been friends since childhood, and I thought, people can pretend anything, but the true face always leaks out eventually. His did. 2 days into the wine and the flattery, over the music, Zhou Yu leaned in with the ask they'd built the whole welcome around. There was an opening at Hefei, he said. Cao Cao's forces were stretched. My lord would love to take it, but the good generals are all busy, and the Grand Viceroy has to go pacify the mountain tribes, and Gan Ning's fallen ill, and, well, would the brilliant young brother-in-law do us the honor of leading the assault? Which meant, in plain speech, we'll hand you 10,000 of our men, and you go bleed at Hefei. If you win, Eastern Wu gets a city. If you lose, Liu Feng loses his shine. Use the boy as a weapon and throw him at the wall. I should have said no. Any sensible man says no. I said, without a flicker of hesitation, since we're family, there's no need to talk of favors. I'll go. Because they thought they were using me, and I'd been waiting a long time for exactly this. Here's the secret I'd never said out loud. I'd never actually led an army. Look at the record and it seems impossible. 4 commanderies, Cao Ren captured, Zhou hostaged, but pull it apart and every one of those was a trick. Changsha and Guiyang I took because I'd read the book and knew which men to turn. Ling I took with a strategy I'd copied off Zhuge Liang. Nan Commandery, the real fighting was all Guan Yu, and I rode alongside stealing the finish. I'd never once stood in a tent with a map and a real enemy and moved 10,000 men against a commander who was better than me. And I wanted to, because a man whose whole reputation is a magic trick lives in terror of the day someone asks him to do it for real. So Sun Quan thought he was throwing his brilliant brother-in-law at a wall to dull his shine, and I saw a free army, a real enemy, and no consequences. Because that was the deal I nailed down first. What if I lose? I asked Sun Quan plainly, in front of everyone. He laughed and said, just hold a month till reinforcements arrive and you're a hero. What if I can't hold a month? And Sun Quan, exasperated, promised on his mother's honor, win or lose, no blame. Which was all I needed. 10,000 Wu soldiers to practice on, 2 of Jiangdong's generals to command, and a lord who'd sworn not to behead me if I got them killed. Show me a better classroom. The enemy, though, was no practice dummy. Hefei was held by Zhang Liao. If that name means nothing to you, let me put it plainly. Zhang Liao is one of the finest generals of the age, a man the later temples would enshrine. The histories I'd read tell of a day he took 800 men and shattered 100,000 of Sun Quan's, rode so deep into their lines he nearly took Sun Quan's own head. He did it so thoroughly that Jiangdong mothers used his name to frighten children for a generation. That Zhang Liao, sitting in Hefei with 30,000 troops behind 17 walled towns. So the first thing I did was throw away the old map. Sun Quan's map, from his last failed run at Hefei, was worthless. Zhang Liao would have rebuilt everything. I sent Ding Feng out with 500 men to scout the whole region fresh. How many towns, how many defenders, every bridge, every ford, every shallow, the local customs, the weather, and draw me a new map from scratch. And I sent Xu Sheng to make camp, and, this is the part they hated, to keep the men awake and armed all through the first night, exhausted or not. Because I'd read the other man too. Zhang Liao's scouts would have counted our banners before we'd finished pitching a tent. And a great general facing a freshly arrived, road-weary army doesn't wait politely for it to rest. He hits it that first night, in the dark, while the camp is half built and the men are dead on their feet, and he goes straight for the command tent to cut the head off before the body can wake up. That's what I'd do. So that's what I planned to let him try. I set 2,000 men in ambush at the bridges and fords along his likely path. Banzai Bridge, Longgu Bridge, Luohe Shallows, Fenglin Ferry, with one order. Let the enemy pass on the way in, don't so much as breathe. Block the road only on the way out. And I had Xu Sheng leave the camp gates loose, the tents dark, everything quiet and inviting and wrong. And then I did one more thing. Sun Shengsheng had insisted on coming along to escort the grain. You cannot stop that girl from a battle any more than you can stop a river, and she'd hauled her supply train in under a banner nearly as grand as the Marquis of Wu's own, a great Sun character flapping over it. I looked at that banner, and I had it planted over my dark, empty, waiting camp. Because I knew Zhang Liao, and I knew that if he crept up on a sleeping camp in the dark, and a gust of wind lifted a banner to show him the character Sun in the moonlight, one thought would go off in his head like a bell. Sun Quan is here. Take him alive, and the war ends tonight. A man that good, offered a prize that big, stops being careful. Sure enough, past midnight, Zhang Liao led 1,000 elite cavalry out the north gate, men gagged, hooves muffled, crossed at Banzai Bridge, and found my camp dark and silent, gates loose, no sentries, quiet as a grave. He frowned. Something felt wrong, and he was too good to ignore it. And then the wind lifted the banner, and the moonlight caught the sun, and the caution went out of him like a snuffed candle. Kill, he said. He cut the gate-bolt with his hooked blade, and his 1,000 cavalry poured into my empty camp, and found nobody. Tents with no one under them. A command pavilion with no commander. He got about 3 overturned tents deep before the wrongness caught up with him. Retreat! But a whistle had already sounded, and fire bloomed on every side. And my units hit him from all 4 directions at once and sealed the camp behind him. He'd walked into the sack. And he was still Zhang Liao. Even surrounded, even bleeding men, he wheeled his personal guard to cover the rear and punched the rest of his cavalry straight back toward the gate and hauled 300 survivors out of a trap that should have swallowed all 1,000. Which tells you what I was dealing with. But 300 isn't 1,000, and the bridges were waiting. He hit Banza first, 500 of my men across the road. His cavalry were fierce, and my ambushers were tired. And in a straight hour, he'd have cut through them. But he didn't have an hour. Delay, and the whole pursuit closes on him from behind. So he peeled off to Longgu Bridge, 500 more men. Then Fenglin Ferry, 500 more. Then Luohe Shallows. Every road home had my people sitting on it, exactly as I'd placed them, and every fight cost him more of the men he had left. By the end, he was down to a dozen riders, cornered against the river, with my troops closing from the south, out of bridges and out of time. And I was that close. Another minute, and Zhang Liao, the temple general, the man I could turn into the greatest asset in my whole camp if I took him alive, was mine. And then he turned his horse straight into the river. His last dozen followed him in, and the water swallowed them, and my men pulled up short, baffled. Is he drowning himself? He wasn't. There was a hidden shoal there, waist deep at the deepest, invisible to anyone who didn't live on that water. He'd known it was there, and he walked his horse across it and up the far bank and away toward Hefei, while my men stood on the shore watching a legend evaporate. I'd killed 900 of his cavalry and lost about 500 of my own, and nearly captured the finest general of the age on the first night of my first real command. By any honest measure, it was a total victory. I was furious. I called Liu Feng in. I ordered you to map every detail. And you missed one shallow shoal, and because you missed it, Zhang Liao is alive tonight instead of kneeling at that ferry. He went white, dropped to a knee, and offered me his own neck, and I sent him out for 20 strokes of the rod. Then I sat down and thought about it, and felt like garbage, because I was blaming a man for a genuinely impossible thing. Zhang Liao had held Hefei for over a month. He'd walked that ground 1,000 times, knew every road, every bridge, where the water ran deep, where a horse could cross, where it couldn't. Liu Feng had 4 days. No amount of diligence puts 4 days ahead of a month of a great general's homework. And the two of them had followed my plan to the letter and won a brilliant victory. I was punishing a man for not being superhuman because I was sulking over a prize. So I called him back. The 20 strokes were done, and he was pulling his trousers up, sweating with the pain, and I asked if he had any complaint. He cupped his hands. None. I took out a small bottle from my sign-in stash, a white medicine powder that stops bleeding and speeds healing, worth more than any of them knew, and had it brought to him. Spray this. You'll be right in a few days. He took it, and something complicated crossed his face, because a commander who beats you and then hands you priceless medicine is a commander you can't quite categorize. Be more careful next time, I said. Know yourself, know your enemy, and you'll never lose. For one strange moment there, I honestly sounded like a seasoned old general instructing the young. Liu Feng felt it too. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that until 3 days ago I had never led an army in my life. I was learning the whole trade in real time, on his men, against Zhang Liao, and I was learning fast, and the strangest part was that the more I learned, the more I actually enjoyed it. I'd spent my whole second life scheming my way around fights. It turned out I liked winning one on purpose. Zhang Liao, licking his wounds inside Hefei, had a different problem than I did. He had no idea who I was. An army marches a long way to his gate and, before it's even pitched camp, drops a trap on him and nearly ends him. That's not how anyone fights. He counted the Jiangdong banners and found no Zhou among them. If it wasn't Zhou Yu, and it clearly wasn't, then who in all of Jiangdong used troops like that? He'd meet the answer the next morning, in the open field, when I rode out to challenge him. And I had a plan for that too, one that had nothing to do with soldiers and everything to do with the 3 men on that wall who couldn't stand each other. The 3 men on Hefei's wall were Zhang Liao, Yue Jin, and Li Dian, and the most important fact about them was that they couldn't stand each other. Old grudges, wounded pride, the usual poison that collects among proud men who've been forced to share a command. Cao Cao had put them together precisely because the friction kept any one of them from getting ideas. And a crack like that, in a wall you can't breach, is a door. So when I rode out the next morning and Zhang Liao demanded to know who dared harass his Hefei, I didn't answer with a boast. I answered with a family reunion. General Zhang Liao, I called, bowing from the saddle, warm as a nephew. My father speaks of you often, says you're a man of loyalty and righteousness. And my second uncle, Guan Yu, thinks the world of you. He still talks about the nights you two spent drinking, heart to heart. Zhang Liao, honestly moved, said he missed those days too. And behind him, Yue Jin and Li Dian exchanged a glance and a frown. Because why is the enemy commander reminiscing about drinking with Guan Yu, in front of us? I wasn't done. By rights, I should call you uncle. At the White Gate Tower, when you were ready to die rather than surrender, it was my father who begged Cao Cao to spare you, because he honored your loyalty. Every word true. Every word a knife in the 2 men beside him. And the night before last, when I had you trapped and about to be killed at that ferry, I remembered what my father and my second uncle said about you, and I couldn't bear it. So I deliberately let you live. That last one wasn't true at all. He'd escaped across a shoal I hadn't known about, but there was no way for Zhang Liao to argue it without looking petty, and there was no way for Yue Jin and Li Dian to hear it without a cold little worm of doubt going into their guts. He deliberately let you live? Why would the enemy do you a favor? What exactly is your relationship with Liu Bei's people, old friend? Zhang Liao heard the trap and couldn't disarm it. Arguing only dug the hole deeper. Enough talk, he snapped. On the battlefield, each man serves his lord. 300 rounds and we'll settle the rest. And he charged. We fought, and here I have to admit my glitchy little cheat finally paid its whole debt at once. I'd maxed my spear work with every potential point I owned, and against a temple general it held, I gave ground for 3 passes to find the real fight, and by the 8th, I had the better of him. His blade was weakening. 10 more rounds and I could have put a spear through him. I didn't, because a dead Zhang Liao is worth a corpse, and a suspected Zhang Liao is worth a whole broken command. So I let him break off. He slashed at my horse and wheeled away, and instead of chasing, I called after him, loud enough for both walls to hear. Thank you, General Zhang Liao, which is an insane thing to say to a man who just fled you. Thank him for what? Zhang Liao had no idea, neither did anyone else. And that was the point. One more inexplicable kindness between me and him, dropped in front of the 2 men already wondering whose side he was really on. Then I threw the whole army at his line. And this is where the poison worked, because when I feinted a heavy blow at the western flank, the weak point, defended by Yue Jin and Li Dian, Zhang Liao ordered them to fall back and cover a small town called Shihe, which was the real prize. And Yue Jin, stewing on why aren't Zhang Liao's own troops going first, and remembering the enemy commander thanking his general like a friend, sneered and dug in where he was instead of moving. Li Dian, no fonder of Zhang Liao, did the same. 3 commanders who should have moved as one hand moved as 3, each guarding his own pride, each half suspecting the others, and in the gap between them my real thrust, under Ding Feng, punched clean through the western flank while they argued about who was betraying whom. Ding Feng didn't stop to fight. He drove straight for Shihe, took it, and Shihe sat on the river. The moment it was mine, I opened the floodgates, and the water came down on Hefei. The low ground drowned first, the southern towns, the Cao army's own farmland and garrison camps, roads turning to rivers, thousands of defenders suddenly fighting the water instead of me. Zhang Liao, Yue Jin, and Li Dian came riding back from the field to find their own city half underwater, and it was Liu Feng who'd flooded them, using the town their own quarrel had let me take. Zhang Liao looked at his 2 generals, both of them sick with shame now. General Zhang, it was my disobedience that lost us this, and he didn't rage at them. He knew. This is Liu Feng's scheme to divide us, he said quietly. It's not your fault, which was gracious and true, and far too late. By then, I'd stopped needing schemes. 16 of Hefei's 17 towns had fallen, the flooded south, the western river towns, the main city itself, taken by an army of 10,000 borrowed men, led by a commander who, 3 weeks earlier, had never given a battlefield order in his life. 1 town was left, the northernmost, the strongest, the hardest to reach, the easiest to hold. Zhang Liao had pulled his last 800 men into it and dug in, because he was too good a general to die for a lost city, and too good a general to give up the 1 square of ground that still mattered. I stood outside that last town with 16 behind me, and I did not attack it, because I thought of something better to do with it than take it. Something that would make the Marquis of Wu, who'd sent me here to be used, wish with his whole heart that he'd never tried. I sent word to Sun Quan, 16 towns taken, 1 left, come and finish it. He was overjoyed, then suspicious, then something worse. Because when the battle report reached him, 16 of 17 towns, in under a month, 10,000 men, near total victory. His first feeling was delight. His second was ice, because his brilliant brother-in-law had just done, easily, the thing Sun Quan himself had failed to do with 100,000 men on his last run at Hefei. Delight curdled into that old familiar humiliation. Everyone will say Jiangdong needs an outsider to fight its wars. So he did the small thing. He decided to bring 100,000 troops and personally take the last town, so the histories would record that the Marquis of Wu conquered Hefei. And he sent Lu Su and a general named Jiang Qin ahead with urgent orders. Stall me, make sure I did not take that final town before he arrived to claim it. They needn't have hurried, because I'd already decided to give it away. Lu Su reached my camp braced to talk me out of an assault and found me repairing the flooded ground and clearing the rivers, with no intention of attacking the north town at all. He was baffled. Why not finish it? And I gave him the answer with a completely straight, completely sincere face. Mr. Lu Su, I'm not even a general of Eastern Wu, yet I led your army to take 16 towns of Hefei. Frankly, that's an embarrassment to your generals, and it's no good look for the Marquis of Wu either. We're allies. Why not do a kind thing and leave the last town for him? Then the whole world will say the Marquis of Wu conquered Hefei. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Lu Su stood there with his mouth open, because he'd rehearsed a dozen ways to talk me out of taking the town, and none of them was, "You're right, please, take the credit." Now, understand what I was actually doing, because it was crueler than any assault. If I'd taken all 17 towns, I'd have shamed Sun Quan, but people would have said Liu Feng did it, and eventually, that's a rivalry, and a rivalry has an ending where somebody fights. But by taking 16 and handing him the last with a bow and a smile, I did something he could never repay and never escape. I made his victory a gift. Everyone in both camps now knew the truth. Liu Feng conquered Hefei and let the Marquis of Wu walk in at the end to put his name on it. There is no humiliation on earth quite like being handed your own triumph by the man you tried to use as a weapon. He had to smile and take it, and every time anyone congratulated him, he'd taste it. Jiang Qin, still half hoping, asked me if Zhang Liao was really as fearsome as the legends said. I cupped my hands. Not impressive at all, no better than General Zhang here. which flattered Jiang Qin so thoroughly he stopped being annoyed at me, and which was, I want to be honest, a lie that would cost Eastern Wu very dearly in about 3 days. But I didn't know that yet. I thought the hard part was over. I told Lu Su the state of the board plainly. Zhang Liao had under 1,000 men left in that last town, closer to 800, Ding Feng put it. I'd killed 30,000 of his and lost about 3 of my 10. When Sun Quan arrived with 100,000, wiping 800 exhausted men off one small hill would be a formality. Outside my tent, thousands of Cao prisoners sat roped in the sun, and Eastern Wu banners flew from every captured town, and my soldiers hauled away carts of weapons and cookpots, grinning like it was a festival. It was the greatest thing Jiangdong had done since Red Cliffs, and Liu Feng was handing the last of it away for free. Lu Su didn't fully believe what he was seeing. Given everything he knew about my ambition, it just didn't fit. But he took the offer, because you don't refuse a gift like that, and he wrote to Sun Quan that the way was clear, come take your city. Sun Quan came. 90,000 fresh troops, Gan Ning as vanguard, the whole imposing weight of Jiangdong, marching up to a single hilltop town held by 800 wounded men to plant his name on my war. And I packed up to go home because Sun Quan, worried I'd conquered too much and might attract loyalty from his own generals, and worried Lady Wu missed her new son-in-law, had gently suggested I head back and let him handle the rest. The rest. I keep a lot of things to myself, so let me tell you the one thing I got wrong in this whole campaign, and I got it very wrong. I looked at 800 exhausted men on a hill and 100,000 fresh troops at the bottom of it, and I thought the arithmetic was finished. I had forgotten who the 800 men belonged to. Sun Quan rode up to the last town in golden armor, blue eyes blazing, purple beard streaming, the brand on his cheek somehow imposing in the morning light, and he pointed his sword at the wall and roared his challenge like a hero. He was certain of one thing. 100,000 men at the gate, 800 inside. No general on earth would dare crack that gate open, so he could posture all he liked. Zhang Liao, you brat, come out and fight me to the death. If you're a hero. The gate opened. You should have seen his face. Because now the terrible question was his. If the madman actually comes out to fight you one-on-one, do you fight? Fight, and he might take your head. Don't fight, after all that boasting. And what do your 100,000 men think of their lord? A general named Gan Ning saved him from the trap by pointing out that a commander doesn't brawl in the dirt, and Sun Quan seized the excuse and dressed it up as strategy. I was luring them out, and it almost held together. But it wasn't a duel Zhang Liao had opened the gate for. It was a charge. 2 armored generals came out first, 800 elite cavalry behind them, and at their head a man who cut 3 of Sun Quan's soldiers off their horses with one sweep, hooked a 4th off his saddle, threw him spinning into the air, and split him in half before he landed. Blood fell like rain across his own helmet and beard, until he looked less like a man than a war god scraped up out of the underworld. I am Zhang Liao, he bellowed. Blue-eyed boy, I've come for you. 800 against 100,000, and it was the 100,000 who broke. Because Sun Quan's army had marched a long, hard road and thrown up an overnight camp and hadn't slept, and Sun Quan valued the look of his army over the strength of it, and the moment their morale cracked, numbers stopped mattering. Zhang Liao drove straight through the middle of them toward the golden armor, and anyone who stepped in front of him got swept aside, and his cavalry rode in his wake, catching fire from him. And before long, thousands of Wu soldiers were dead or fleeing, and Zhang Liao was 50 paces from Sun Quan and closing. A general named Chen Wu threw himself in the way. Don't be afraid, my lord. Chen Wu is here, and Sun Quan spurred away. Then he heard Chen Wu scream. He looked back, and Zhang Liao was holding Chen Wu's severed head in one hand and his hooked blade in the other, grinning, coming on. One of the 12 tiger generals of Jiangdong, gone like that. Sun Quan ran, threw down his helmet, threw down his sword to lighten the load, whipped his horse bloody. And still, Zhang Liao gained, in lighter armor, better rider, that awful grin getting closer. When Sun Quan reached Zhaoyao Ford, the bridge was broken, half of it gone, because Yue Jin had circled around and torn it out to cut off exactly this escape. Sun Quan's legs went to water. He actually wondered if it was too late to beg. Someone shouted to back the horse up and jump it, and Sun Quan hauled his mount around, spurred it, and his horse, a fine beast named for its speed, leapt the gap and cleared the broken bridge to the far bank, and Sun Quan sat there in a soaked saddle, shaking, alive. And then a voice came out of the chaos behind him. Marquis of Wu, don't be afraid, Liu Feng is coming, which stopped Zhang Liao cold, because the one name in all of Jiangdong that made Zhang Liao pull his reins was mine. He wheeled, wary, and saw a young general in armor exactly like mine, leading 300 men straight at him, and Zhang Liao squinted and saw it wasn't me at all, and roared, "That's not Liu Feng, kill him," and threw himself at the boy. The boy wasn't me. He was Ling Tong, a young Jiangdong general, brave to the point of stupidity, wearing my armor and shouting my name, because my name was the only thing on that field that could slow Zhang Liao down. He wasn't my equal, and he wasn't Zhang Liao's, and after 7 or 8 rounds, he was covered in wounds. But he fought to the death anyway, and bought Sun Quan the last minutes he needed to get clear, and his 300 were nearly all cut down around him before Ding Feng and Gan Ning fought their way in, and Zhang Liao finally broke off and rode back to his hill. Because Zhang Liao wasn't done. Remember what I'd taught him without meaning to? 2 days later, he took a page out of my own book, captured a village on the eastern flank, found the canal from the lake that fed it, and opened it. And the water came down on Sun Quan's 100,000 exactly the way it had come down on Zhang Liao's 30, splitting the army into drowning islands that couldn't reach or signal each other, herding the survivors toward a single, choked ford where they piled up front to back and trampled each other in the panic. Then Cao Cao's reinforcements arrived, banners going up on the wall, Cao and Xiaoho, and that was the end of any thought of a last town. Sun Quan retreated. He'd marched up with 100,000 men to put his name on my 16 towns. He crawled home with 60 or 70, having lost the 16 too, a tiger general dead, 3 more grievously wounded, and 1 small hill's worth of 800 exhausted men having erased the greatest Jiangdong victory since Red Cliffs. It is genuinely hard to find a defeat that humiliating anywhere in the histories, and the whole time, riding home already, I knew nothing about it. I found out the way everyone found out, from the wreckage and from a letter that made Zhou nearly fall off his horse. But that's the shape of the thing I want you to hold on to. I took Hefei and handed it back as a gift, and the gift got 100,000 men slaughtered, and none of it was a scheme. I just couldn't stop being generous to a man who couldn't survive my generosity. Somewhere in that ruin, though, a debt got made that would change everything, because Ling Tong, the boy who'd worn my armor and nearly died screaming my name to save an ungrateful lord, Ling Tong survived, and he was about to make a decision that told me exactly how rotten the throne of Jiangdong had gotten. There's an epilogue to Hefei, and it's the funniest thing that happened all year, so let me give it to you. Back when Sun Quan still had his 100,000 men and his confidence, he'd made a bet with me. His idea. We'd each march on a city, me on Nan Commandery, him on Hefei, and whoever took his first won. And Sun Quan, wanting to make it sting, upped the stakes himself. If he took Hefei first, I'd withdraw from Jiangxia. If I took my city first, he'd give me the half of Jiangxia that Jiangdong occupied. He wanted to gamble big to wipe out the shame of the oil cauldron. I frowned, made a show of reluctance, and shook on it. Then I took 16 towns of Hefei and handed him the 17th, and he lost his 100,000 men trying to walk through the door I'd left open. So I wrote him a letter. Polite, sweet even. Now that I've taken Nan Commandery, brother, when will you take Hefei? And since you couldn't, shouldn't you return the half of Jiangxia you promised, as we agreed? Sun Quan read it and nearly came out of his skin. Not only had he failed at Hefei, now he owed me half a province over a bet he'd raised himself. He wrote back that the bet didn't count. Taking Nan Commandery was a hostage exchange, not a real conquest, so it was void. Which was pure sophistry, and everyone knew it, because I'd captured Cao Run to get that city, and the whole world knew it. But I let it go. For the sake of the alliance, I sent him a humble, gracious note, thanking him for his wisdom and dropping the matter entirely. And then I had Jiang Wan quietly teach the children of Jiangxia a new rhyme to sing while they played. Learn good things, not bad. Lose your bet, you pay your debt. Don't be like the blue-eyed boy, cheats and welches, ruins the joy. And when they got to the welching part, everyone threw a fist to show fairness, and anyone caught cheating at the game, the children said, would grow up with purple hair and green eyes. Purple beard, green eyes. Sun Quan. Within days it reached him, sung by children in every market, and there was nothing on earth he could do about it. Question them? Deny it? It's a nursery rhyme. You can't behead a playground. And he'd welched on the bet, so he was in the wrong to begin with. He sat on his throne and gathered his strength and said to no one that if Liu Feng weren't destroyed, he'd never eat or sleep in peace again. And Lu Su, honest to the last, had to remind him that the alliance couldn't break, so the Marquis of Wu would have to endure the humiliation and wait. Endure the humiliation and wait. That was the standing condition of being Sun Quan by then. Zhou got the news last, riding home from crushing the mountain tribes, pleased with himself, chatting with his generals about how the Marquis of Wu must surely have taken Hefei by now with 100,000 men. A battle report was put in his hand. He read it again. And the greatest young commander in Jiangdong nearly fell off his horse. An army of 100,000 against 800, and it lost 16 cities. He galloped into the city, letter flapping, found Lu Su, demanded to know if it was a forgery. Lu Su sighed and confirmed it was all true. Zhou stamped his feet and pounded his own chest. Because he'd have taken Hefei in 5 days with 10,000 men. Why wouldn't they send me? And there was nothing to be done. His lord had insisted on grabbing the credit personally, and his lord had gotten 100,000 men slaughtered by a man who then handed him the last city as a present. Zhou had one thing left to say about it, and he said it through his teeth, and it's the truest verdict anyone in Jiangdong ever passed on their own lord. Not even a tenth of what Sun Ce was. I want you to sit with the whole arithmetic of that season, because I never got to say it out loud to anyone. Sun Quan and Zhou built a beauty trap to split me from my father, and I married it and turned it into an alliance. They invited me to be used as a weapon at Hefei, and I took their war, won it, gave it back as a gift, and let the gift bury 100,000 of their men. They locked a city down to keep me from my mother's funeral, and I walked out of it carrying their own mother home. Every single reach they made came back a fresh humiliation, sung by children in the streets. They kept playing the board against me. And they kept losing, and the losing kept making them more desperate, and the more desperate they got, the more careless, until, at last, the smartest men in the South had nothing left but to endure the humiliation and wait. Which is exactly the state I like my enemies in, because a man who's stopped scheming and started waiting is a man who's already lost. He just hasn't heard the news yet. And into that whole humiliated, waiting, off-balance Jiangdong, a death dropped, one that had nothing to do with any of them and that I was about to use to rob them of the one thing they had left. Because word reached me, riding home from the war, that Lady Gan had died. Lady Gan was one of my father's wives, Liu Shan's own mother, and after Changban she'd been kind to me, genuinely kind, in a house where kindness toward the adopted son was rare. So the grief was real, or as real as anything gets for a man who's always half-performing. But grief and I have an understanding. Even while it hurt, some cold clerk in the back of my skull was already turning the death over, looking for the use in it, because there was one. I had a piece of Jiangdong I very much wanted to take home, and my mother's funeral was the crowbar. Her name was Lady Wheel, Sun Quan's own mother, my wife's mother, the matriarch of the whole ruling house. And in the weeks I'd spent playing the model son-in-law, she'd come to dote on me like her own blood, because I coax old women the way I turn old generals. I listen. I remember every small thing. I only say what they want to hear, and I mean about a third of it, which is more than most people manage. If I could get Lady Wu out of Jiangdong and into Jingzhou, I'd hold a hostage worth more than any city, the mother of the Marquis of Wu, sitting under my father's roof. And now I had a reason no one could argue with. A son returns home to mourn his mother. What monster stops that? Sun Quan, as it turned out. He'd seen this coming, seen me getting close to Lady Wu, and he'd locked the whole city of Chaisang under martial law, no one allowed to leave, under the polite fiction of hunting rebel remnants. And he'd put the lockdown in the hands of a young general named Ling Tong. The same Ling Tong who, days from now, would wear my armor and bleed half to death saving Sun Quan at Hefei. Sun Quan had a real talent for handing his most loyal men his ugliest jobs. So I sent Sun Shangshang into the city ahead of me to reach her mother, and then I walked up to the gate and asked Ling Tong to let me pass, because my mother had died and I needed to go home and mourn her. And Ling Tong, torn to pieces, said no. Military orders, no exceptions. Now, I could have argued law with him for a week. Instead, I did the one thing that goes past a soldier's orders and straight into his chest. I knelt. In front of the gate, in front of his hundreds of armored men, the Imperial Uncle's son, the Marquis of Wu's brother-in-law, the man who'd taken 16 towns of Hefei, I got down on one knee, and then both, and I begged him. General Ling, you're a son too. You have a father, a mother. Can you watch my mother die and not let me go home to mourn her? Can you watch her sent into the next world with no son to see her off? Do you know how much this hurts? Do you know how helpless I am? And I put my forehead to the ground. And I kowtowed toward the west, toward the grave I couldn't reach, and I did it again and again, and I kept doing it until blood ran down from my forehead into my eyebrows. I'll let you decide how much of that was real. I've told you I can't always tell anymore. I'll only say that the grief underneath it was true, and the performance on top of it was total, and the terrible thing about me is that both of those are always happening at once. But here's why it worked, and it wasn't the acting. It was that of every man Sun Quan could have put at that gate, he'd picked the one who understood me in his bones. Because Ling Tong's own father had been killed by Gan Ning, the same Gan Ning who now served Sun Quan, who ate at the same table, whom Ling Tong was forbidden to touch. Ling Tong knew exactly what it was to have your grief right in front of you and your hands tied by a lord's order. He'd been living it for years. So when Lady Wu came out on Sun Shangshang's arm and saw her doting son-in-law kneeling in his own blood, forbidden to bury his mother, she went cold with fury, and she didn't ask Ling Tong. She told him, "This is Liu Feng, the Imperial Uncle's son, the Marquise's brother-in-law, my son-in-law, the man who won you Hefei. His mother is dead, and you won't let him go and mourn?" And then she made her decision, the one that handed me everything. I will escort Liu Feng out myself. Ling Tong could have refused her. He didn't. He'd been forced to save an ungrateful lord and forbidden to avenge his own father, and now ordered to block a grieving son from a funeral, and something in him simply reached its end. He bowed, and he said he'd take the blame, and he let us walk out the gate, the son, the sister, and the mother of the Marquis of Wu, sailing west into Jingzhou, out of Sun Quan's reach for good. You cannot force me to leave, Lady Wu had told the guards, and dared them to send her head back to her son. Nobody dared. So I sailed home with the matriarch of Eastern Wu, having turned my mother's funeral into the extraction of the enemy's mother, and having done it so cleanly that everyone involved thought they were doing me a mercy. Even the grief was true. That's the part people never believe about me, and it's the part that should frighten them most. And behind us, Ling Tong stood at the gate he'd just failed to hold, knowing exactly what it would cost him with Sun Quan, and no longer caring, because he'd finally seen his lord clearly, and he did not like what he saw. Back at Nan Commandery, the funeral was long over, Lady Gan already buried, the mourning hall already taken down. I knelt at her grave in white and wept, and I let the whole court see me weep, and inside the grief and the performance did their usual double act. And then I went to find the one person in that house who wasn't performing anything, Liu Shan. He was a little over a year and a half old now, and for days he'd been crying for a mother who wasn't coming back, and no one could make him stop. When my father went looking for me that evening, he noticed something. The crying had gone quiet. He pushed open my door, and there I was, on the floor, sitting on the cold stone, my back against the hard edge of the bed, with Liu Shan asleep in my arms. I'd put one arm under under his neck and wrapped the other around his little body and cupped his feet in my hand, and I was using myself as a mattress so the baby could sleep somewhere soft. My own back was against the bed frame, my legs bent, my arms dead asleep under his weight, and Liu Shan lay there quiet and warm and comfortable, murmuring nonsense in his sleep, out cold. I wasn't asleep. I knew my father was in the doorway, and I knew what it did to him. Because he stood there and saw in that one image his whole future, the 2 sons, the great inheritance, the mountain of everything he'd spent his life building, held up by a loyal older brother who'd sit on cold stone all night so the little one could rest. Tears came down his face. He crossed the room and he lifted us both, carefully, together, and laid us on the bed, and took off his own cloak and covered his 2 sons with it. And I lay there with my eyes shut, feeling the warmth of the cloak and the weight of the baby, and I thought, it worked. It touched him again. Good. And then I fell asleep, and I had the dream. I've had it before. I have it when I'm most sure of myself, which is a joke the universe likes to tell me. In the dream, I'm in a mansion I've never seen, luxurious, and I'm older, 30, a little gray coming in, 3 thin wisps of a beard. And I'm sitting alone at a table, drinking, and there's music playing, and I'm screaming at the musicians to get out, all of you get out. And they run past me carrying their instruments, and they don't see me, because I'm not really there. I'm watching. I walk around the screen and I see the man at the table clearly, and it's me, an older me, and a scout has just come in with the greatest news of his career. The Imperial Uncle has been made King of Hanzhong, every officer promoted, and you, young master, you've been made Deputy General of the Army. And the older me nods and smiles and says easily, without any weight at all, I understand. Liu Shan is Crown Prince. Yes, it must be him, it must be him. And the older me laughs, careless, like it doesn't matter in the slightest. Except I look down, and the chopsticks in his hand have been snapped clean in 2. That's the man I would have been. The loyal one. The one who won every battle, served with his whole heart, and got a title 1 rung below the sun, and swallowed it with a smile while his hands broke things under the table. And you know how his story ends. It ends with a whisper in my father's ear. This one, ultimately, will be hard to control. And my father, my weeping, benevolent, world-loving father, handing his loyal adopted son a 3-foot length of white silk and an order to hang himself with it. People say Zhuge Liang slandered him, but that was Zhuge Liang, the model of a loyal minister, a man with no private greed in his whole body. Men like that don't slander, unless it was true. Unless the loyal Liu Feng really had, without meaning to, without even knowing it, let his true face leak out. The resentment, the venting, the stolen bands, the snapped chopsticks, the small, ungoverned pride of a man who'd been passed over and couldn't quite hide the wound. I woke in the dark, with the baby breathing against my side and my father's cloak over us both, and I looked down at Liu Shan, fat, sleeping, drooling, the little lamb curled up in the wolf's arms, and I understood what the dream keeps coming back to tell me. The finger strop of a broken chopstick is enough. That's all it takes. One flicker of the true face at the wrong moment, in front of the wrong genius, and the white silk comes. My father is kind, bottomlessly kind. To Huang Quan, who betrayed him. To Meng Da's son, after Meng Da rebelled. To Liu Bei, who despised him. His mercy is real, and it is enormous, and it is for other people. It was never once for me. So if I'm going to wear this mask, I told myself, lying there in the dark, then I wear it to the grave. Not a slip, not a sulk, not one snapped chopstick where the wrong man can see. Every kindness perfect, every ambition buried so deep even I have to dig for it. Play the fool so completely that the day the whisper comes, there's nothing for it to land on. My father thinks he's raising a loyal son. Zhuge Liang thinks he's watching a harmless one. And the truth is a thing I can't afford to feel too often. So I only let myself have it in the dark, with the baby asleep, once. Then I put it away. And in the morning, I was Liu Feng again, the lecher, the fool, the good son, and nobody in the whole world had seen the wolf but me. A weary young general rode into Jiangsha one day and sat waiting in my hall, pack still on his back, and it was Ling Tong. He'd left Sun Quan, written him a letter, and slipped away. I worked beside my father's killer and could never avenge him, so I was unfilial. I risked my life for my lord, took a dozen wounds, lost 300 of my own men, so I was loyal to the point of ruin. And now I go to find filial duty and righteousness somewhere I can keep them. Sun Quan had used the boy's loyalty to detain me, then used his body to survive Hefei, then never once let him settle the one debt that mattered to him. There's a limit even to a good man's patience, and Ling Tong had found his. So he came to me. And he was braced for me to hold a grudge, because at that gate in Chaisang he'd knelt and refused to let me pass, and I'd knelt in my own blood in front of him. I didn't hold a grudge, I ran to him. Grabbed his arm before he could get a word out, told him I'd have ridden 50 miles to meet him if I'd known he was coming, and called for the finest wine in Jiangsha, because I meant to drink with this man until we both fell over. He was stunned. What did I ever do to deserve this? And I told him the truth, which happened to also be exactly what he needed to hear. Back in Chaisang, you defied the whole world and your own lord's order and let me go home to bury my mother without setting a single obstacle on the road. I will never forget that kindness. And Ling Tong's eyes went red, because that's the thing about me. I really am petty, and I told him so. Treat me badly, and I get very small about it. Treat me sincerely, and I open my whole chest. He'd expected coldness, and I gave him a brother, and he knelt on one knee and asked for the one thing he'd come for, to follow me, to serve me like a dog or a horse. I hauled him up. I gave him my navy, which made no sense to anyone but me. Wei Yan ran my land forces, Chen Dao ran my guard, and here I was handing a defector my entire fleet on his first day. But Ling Tong had spent years drilling Jiangdong's ships, and Eastern Wu makes sailors the way the North makes horsemen, and my navy was the one weak limb in my whole body. Wei Yan was a genius on land and only fair on water. Under Ling Tong, in weeks, my fleet became a different animal. And the core of it, the thing that mattered more than the ships, was this. I trusted him completely, on day one, in front of everyone. Because I'd learned a long time ago that the fastest way to own a proud man's loyalty forever is to hand him something precious before he's earned it, and then never once check up on him. Ling Tong was mine for life. And I want you to notice what he cost me, because the answer is nothing. Sun Quan trained that talent for years and threw it away over a grudge and a used-up boy's patience. I got him for a cup of wine and one remembered kindness. That's the whole difference between the throne of Jiangdong and me. Sun Quan spends men, and I keep them. I was building something over there in Jiangsha, quietly, while I played the fool. Wei Yan, Chen Dao, Ling Tong, Jiang Wan, Fei Yi, Pang Tong. A general for the land, a general for the guard, a general for the water, 2 ministers to run the country, and the fledgling phoenix himself still chewing on my map. A whole cabinet, assembled under the cover of a man too lazy and too lecherous to be worth watching. Do you understand how carefully you have to fail in public to get away with that in private? But there was one man in the world who never once believed the fool, who'd been quietly collecting reports on me for a year, and who was, at that very moment, in his capital far to the north, deciding it was time to do something about the young man who kept eating his generals and his cities and his allies, Cao Cao. He started the way he always started, by using the emperor like a chess piece. He had memorials sent up naming Zhou Yu the prefect of Nan Commandery, Cheng Pu the prefect of Jiangsha, and Sun Quan the governor of all Jingzhou, titles for land that was ours, meant to make Jiangdong hungry for what my father held. Drive the tiger to devour the wolf, and stand back. It was elegant, and it might have worked, except Sun Quan had just been slaughtered at Hefei and had a brand on his face from the last time he came at me, and had no appetite left for a war with Jingzhou. So Cao Cao tried a scalpel instead of a hammer, and the scalpel had my name on it. He found the one soft place in my whole armor, the one thing that could make me walk, willingly, into his hands. Not power, not a woman, not a city. Family. The letter was from my cousin, Liu Feng. It said my uncle, Liu Mi, was gravely ill in Fancheng, feared he hadn't long, and was asking for me. Please come, cousin, come and see your uncle one last time. Fancheng is Cao Cao's territory. So I knew instantly what it was. It was the Su Shu play, Run Again. Years back, Cao Cao got the strategist Su Shu away from my father by taking his mother hostage and forging a letter. And Su Shu, a man who valued his mother over everything, walked into Cao Cao's camp and never really walked out. Now here was the same move aimed at me. My uncle wasn't dying. Cao Cao had him and had leaned on my cousin to write the words that would draw me into the lion's mouth. Here's the cruelty of it, and I want you to sit with the design because it's Cao Cao at his best. The man who transmigrated into Liu Feng felt nothing for Liu Mi. I'd barely met him. But the original Liu Feng, the boy whose body I wore, had been orphaned young and raised by this uncle. To that boy, Liu Mi was no different from a father, and everyone in the world knew Liu Feng was famous for exactly one virtue above all others, filial duty. So Cao Cao built a trap that used my greatest advertised strength against me. If I go, I walk into a cage. If I don't go, Cao Cao makes sure the whole world hears that the great filial Liu Feng abandoned his dying uncle, and the reputation I'd spent years building evaporates overnight, and I become a hypocrite in every mouth from Jingzhou to Xuchang. Go and get caged, or stay and get destroyed. There's no third door. 99 men out of 100 stay home and eat the slander, because a caged man is worse than a slandered one. I chose the cage, not out of feeling. Let's be honest with each other by now. I chose it because I'd looked at the board and decided the cage had a way out, and the slander didn't. And because a man whose entire product is a spotless mask cannot afford one crack, and abandoning a dying uncle is a crack you never seal. And because, this is the part I'll only admit once, some stubborn ghost of the orphaned boy in this body would not let me leave the old man to be humiliated in Cao Cao's court. So I decided to take the difficult question to the one man it would hurt the most, and let him make the call, because whatever he chose, it bound him to me. I went to my father and I put the letter in his hands, and I watched his head buzz and his face go gray, and for one moment I honestly think he'd rather I'd lost him a province than handed him this. Liu Feng, you clever boy, he said. You know this is Cao Cao's trick. Father, it's my cousin's own hand. If uncle is truly ill, I have to see him. He begged me not to go. He knew what Fancheng was, and I knelt and gave him the speech I knew would break him. My parents died young. Before I ever met you, it was my uncle who raised me. He's no different from a father. I cannot stand by while he suffers and dies. And my father squatted down and held my shoulder and touched my face. A man being asked for the one thing he could not bear to give and could not bear to refuse. Then he waved his sleeve, tears in his eyes, and went into the inner hall to think. And I didn't go to my quarters. I knelt at his gate and refused food and water and would not move, and let the pressure sit entirely on him. He called his strategists, and Pang Tong, my Pang Tong, still wearing his ugly attendant disguise in my house, but a genius nobody could match, laid out 3 strategies. The top one: pretend to fall ill yourself, my lord. Take to your bed, cry Liu Feng's name over and over, and the filial son will never leave a sick father. My father half liked it and then rejected it. That deceives Liu Feng, and I won't. The middle one: tell Liu Feng that if he goes, Cao Cao kills the uncle to spite you, and if he stays, the uncle lives. Flip the fear around. Zhou Liang killed that one fast because it was a lie that could rot in a month. What if the uncle then dies of the illness anyway in Fan Cheng and Liu Feng blames you forever? Cao Cao could arrange a diet of grief as easily as breathing, and there's the wedge, the exact Sushu wound, my father and me poisoned by a death Cao Cao staged. That was the real trap under the trap. Whether I went or stayed, the initiative was Cao Cao's. Which left the worst strategy, and Pang Tong said it plainly. Send the eldest young master, let him go. My father nearly fainted. Does that mean Liu Feng dies at Cao Cao's hands? And Pang Tong shook his head. The eldest young master is quick and cold and does not lose easily. It's not impossible he feigns weakness, gets close to Cao Cao, and takes him hostage to walk himself out. You know his style. And my father, who did know my style, nodded slowly. And then Zhou Liang added the piece that made it survivable. If it comes to it, my lord, trade non-commandery for him. Cao Cao traded us non-commandery for Cao Ren once. We can trade it back for Liu Feng. My father sat very still, because non-commandery is the richest, most vital ground he holds, 4 parts in 10 of everything under his rule. And weighed against that 4/10 of an empire, he did not hesitate for even a breath. Send him, he said, hoarse. And if I must, I'll give the province for him. And I, kneeling at the gate with blood dried on my forehead, heard my father agree to trade the crown jewel of his realm for the life of his adopted son. And I felt something I don't have a good clean name for, because it was almost enough to make me forget the white silk. Almost. Then I got up, thanked him, packed light, and rode north into Cao Cao's country to walk into a cage on purpose, with Sun Quan at my side and a plan I hadn't finished making, and a very old man waiting for me at the end of it. Fan Cheng was a broken place, half the people gone, the rest limping, and the moment I rode in, I could feel disguised eyes tracking me from every doorway. My cover was already blown. Fine, I hadn't come to be subtle. My cousin Liu Fan opened the door, honest and miserable, eyes darting. Brother, you've finally come. Cousin, where's uncle? He sighed, and 2 men walked out of the hall. One was a burly, short-bearded general in a coarse war robe, sword at his hip, a deep, imposing voice. Su Huang, the garrison commander, one of Cao Cao's best. The other was a young man in fine brocade, maybe my age, fair and beardless, elegant and falsely humble. He smiled and told me not to worry. Magistrate Liu was too ill to be treated here, so he'd been taken to Xuchang for the imperial physicians, and he asked after me every day, so they were waiting to escort me to Xuchang together. And who are you? I said, hand on my sword. He cupped his hands. I am Cao Pi, Cao Cao's heir. Right there, in front of me. And Sun Qian, terrified, whispered that this was exactly what our lord had predicted, and outside the walls I could feel the black armor closing in, the whole compound ringed, thick as tar. Cao Pi kept smiling, sure the board was his. Brother, you were going to visit your uncle anyway. Let's go together. Maybe we'll even become friends. I didn't answer him. I walked toward him, not angry, not drawing, just strolling. And I walked right past his shoulder, close, casual, and it put a strange tension into Xu Huang and the 4 armored guards because they couldn't read it. Cao Pi laughed and said something about the fine food and drink on the road, and then I moved. He never dreamed I'd have the nerve, not surrounded by Xu Huang and 4 elite guards. That was exactly why it worked. My left blade knocked Xu Huang's sword back with a crack. My right drove straight for Cao Pi, and the 4 guards came at me all at once, and I let them. I ate the wounds. A blade opened my thigh, another cut my left arm, 2 more came to rest against my neck, and none of it mattered, because by the time all that steel touched me, my sword was already pressed hard against Cao Pi's throat, drawing a bright line of his blood. Xu Huang went white. Liu Feng, release the young master at once. I smiled. I'll count to 3. Put your swords down, or I kill him. 1. And I leaned on the blade, and it bit deeper, and Cao Pi shrieked. Xu Huang panicked. You've cut the young master. How can you expect to live? 2. I leaned again, and the blood ran, and Cao Pi's forehead beaded with sweat, and Xu Huang stood frozen, because right then he could take my head easily, and I could take Cao Pi's just as easily, and Cao Pi was worth more than I was. 3. Put them down, Xu Huang choked. Put them down! Swords hit the floor. Sun Qian scrambled to my side, breathless, thrilled. Young master, take Cao Pi and let's run for non-commandery, which was the sensible play and the wrong one, because I hadn't come north to escape, I'd come for the old man. I patted Cao Pi down and took a command token off him and tossed it to my cousin. Take this to Nan Commandery. Explain everything. My father will handle it. Liu Feng gaped. And you? I'm going to Xuchang to get my uncle. Sun Quan nearly came apart. Young master, no, this is our chance to run. And I laughed, the free, careless laugh, and then let it go hard. Then let Cao Cao harm me, and let the whole world learn that I, Liu Feng, gave my life for filial duty, while Cao Cao, who rules the realm in the name of filial piety, who preaches it, who recruits men on it, murdered a loyal, filial son under a flag of mercy. Sun Quan went still, because he heard it. Cao Cao's entire throne rests on the pose of virtue. If he uses a filial trick to lure and kill the most famously filial young man alive, the whole moral edifice he's built becomes a joke, and every scholar in the land turns against him, and my father's house catches all the sympathy Cao Cao spills. Killing me was the one thing Cao Cao could not afford to do, which meant Xuchang, for me, was the safest cage in the world, a cage the jailer didn't dare close. Sun Qian's blood came up. Then I'm not going back either. I'll die at Xuchang with you. Let him kill me too. They wouldn't kill him, but I didn't say so. Having Sun Qian along was no burden. An honest man who could speak is a useful thing to carry into a den of liars. Thank you, Mr. Sun. Xu Huang, teeth grinding, asked me to release Cao Pi now that I'd agreed to go. And I looked at Cao Cao's heir, still bleeding at the collar, and smiled. I'm afraid I'll be bored on the road, I said, so the young master will keep me company. We'll eat together, sleep in the same carriage, write a little poetry. Maybe we'll even become friends. His own words handed back to him. If you say one more word, I take a finger. 2 words, 2 fingers. 10, and he goes home a hoof, and you explain that to Cao Cao. Xu Huang shut his mouth. So I rode towards Xuchang, the capital of the man who most wanted me dead, wounded in 3 places, holding his son hostage in my own carriage, walking of my own free will into the heart of the enemy's world, with one plan, one honest scholar, and one very old man waiting somewhere at the far end of it. The mask had gotten me half of Jingzhou. Now I'd find out if it could get me back out of Cao Cao's own house alive. In Xuchang, they took Cao Pi back and gave me a mansion, 10 beautiful maids, and a man named Cheng Yu to welcome me. Cheng Yu was one of Cao Cao's 5 great strategists, a scholar general. And Mancho, this is the relevant fact. A man who had once, during a famine, with the army out of grain and about to mutiny, killed civilians, dried their flesh into jerky, and fed it to his soldiers to get them through. It's the kind of thing that follows a man forever, and it should. He came to escort me to a welcome banquet, and I looked at the loaded tables and the beautiful serving girls and said I wasn't hungry. He pressed, "It's noon, how can you not eat? And we can talk business over the meal." And I gave him the line I'd been saving. My young master said he will not sit at the same table as an official of the Cao household, nor with a man who eats human flesh. 2 sentences and his face went dark red. The first cut him for what he was, a general with a made-up title, household registered to the prime minister's own residence, Cao's creature down to the paperwork. The second cut deeper. He knew exactly what I meant, and he chuckled awkwardly and tried to fence with me. What would you do, young master, leading an army with no food? And I told him. On campaign, your supplies arrive before your troops. Surely even you know that, General. What if the supplies are looted or burned? Then what kind of war are you fighting if you can't guard your own grain? Go home and farm. What if there's simply nothing left? Then the commander starves with his men. And even starving to death, he does not steal 1 grain of rice from the people, which turned Cheng Yu's own famine into a mirror, my father's army as a righteous force that would die before it robbed the people, and Cao's as a thing that ate them. He swallowed his rage and told me my words weren't to be believed, and I sat down at the head of a table groaning with food and closed my eyes and refused to touch a bite of it. Rather starve, with you in the room, than eat 1 grain of Cao's rice. And Sun Qian, watching, nodded quietly, because he thought his young master was a righteous man. I sat like that for 2 hours. Cheng Yu got bored and went to complain to Cao Cao, who laughed and said Liu Bei's men were all this stubborn. Wasn't Guan Yu the same, once? And I filed that away too. A man who compares me to Guan Yu is a man planning to keep me the way he once kept Guan Yu. And I remembered how that ended, with Guan Yu riding out, past 5 checkpoints, over 6 dead officers, back to my father. Then Cao Cao made a smarter move. He sent me a different host. I smelled him before I saw him. A faint, clean fragrance in the corridor. A man near 50, bright-eyed, immaculate, beard and hair going white, but not one strand out of place. The bearing of a gentle, dangerous elder. He waved away the cold food and had fresh wine and meat brought, and sat, and smiled at me. Young Master Liu Feng, Minister Xun Yu, welcome to Xuchang. And I stood up fast and bowed, because this was not Cheng Yu. Let me tell you who Xun Yu is, because it's the whole reason I was polite. Set aside the emperor and Cao Cao himself, and Xun Yu was the highest true power in that capital, head of the Yingchuan gentry, the man who'd recommended half of Cao Cao's brain trust, who'd built Cao Cao's policy, who Cao Cao called my Zhangliang. He'd conquered most of the north for Cao Cao from behind a desk. And he was, at that moment, standing at the exact fork in his life that the histories remember. Because Xun Yu was loyal, not to Cao Cao, but to the Han, he'd wanted Cao Cao to be the great regent who saved the dynasty, and he was starting to see, too late, that Cao Cao meant to replace it. That crack between the man and the master was going to end with Xun Yu refusing every honor and finally being sent an empty box and taking his own life rather than watch the Han die. He didn't know that yet, but I did, which meant Xun Yu was the one man in that whole poisoned capital I could actually reach, not to turn tonight, but to plant a seed for a very long winter. So when he raised a cup and, oh so gently, asked what my plans were, I gave him a first-rate performance of a young man who loved the failing emperor. I said my father wept for his majesty daily, made us bow north at every festival, hated Cao Cao only for insulting the throne. I let a tear come and let Sun Qian pull me back, young master, you're drunk, and cupped my hands in apology. And I watched Xun Yu's eyes as the words, the Imperial Uncle still thinks of his majesty went in, and I saw them land somewhere soft. He'd once been the man who advised Cao Cao to kill my father, but he'd done that thinking of a strong Han, not a Cao throne. Times had changed, and a man watching his life's work curdle is a man who hears a stranger's loyalty to the old dynasty and feels something turn over in his chest. We got along beautifully, which was good, because I was going to need him. The moment Cao Cao stopped being subtle and reached for the one weapon in that city I could not simply out-scheme, the emperor. Let me step out of my own head for a moment and show you the other side of the table, because it's the only way to understand how much trouble I was actually in. While I sat in my Suchong mansion, refusing food and praying for my uncle, Cao Cao was holding counsel about me, and the men in that room were not Sun Quan's men. These were the finest minds of the age, and they were talking about how to keep me and how to break me, and it is a sobering thing to be the subject of that conversation. Cao Cao opened it plainly. Liu Feng took 4 commanderies alone, captured my Cao Ren, beat my Zhang Liao. I'd never heard of him a year ago. Who is he? And Zhun Yu laid out my whole pedigree from memory, down to the Ko family's fall and my mother's Han blood, more of my own history than I knew myself. And Cheng Yu, the cannibal, warned him, this one's no ordinary boy, brave as Guan Yu or Zhang Fei, and only 18, and already the bearing of a great general, and famous for filial virtue across Jingxiang. Don't underestimate him. Cao Cao asked the question every warlord asks about a young man too gifted to leave alive and too useful to waste. Does he have a weakness? He does, said Cheng Yu. He's a lecher. And Cao Cao's face changed, and he said the thing that tells you exactly what kind of mind you're up against. What kind of weakness is that? Because Cao Cao knew. A man's lust is not a flaw you can use. It's a flaw that flatters the user into thinking he's found the lever. And Cao Cao had learned the hard way what lust costs. He'd lost Guan Yu once by refusing him a woman he wanted. He'd lost his own eldest son, Cao Ang, and a great general at Wancheng over a moment of his own appetite. He sat in that room, the one man in the world besides me who did not believe my famous weakness was a weakness at all. So they debated how to hold me, and this is where it got dangerous, because Xun Yu, brilliant, loyal, doomed Xun Yu, put his finger on the exact seam in my life. Cao Cao asked why keeping me would work when keeping Guan Yu hadn't. Guan Yu had stayed half a year and still ridden off to find my father. What made me different? And Xun Yu answered, Guan Yu is Liu Bei's sworn brother. The trust between them is total, clean, nothing hidden. There is no crack to work. But Liu Feng is the adopted son. And then Xun Yu said the sentence that made my blood cold when I heard it repeated later. As I understand it, Liu Bei prepared everything for this adopted son. And then, a few years ago, Liu Bei had a son of his own body, Liu Shan. The whole council went quiet, because they all felt it land. There was the crack. There was the wedge Cao Cao had been feeling for. Keep Liu Feng in Xuchang long enough, Xun Yu said, and even if we can't turn him, time itself will do the work. A caged son, useless to Liu Bei, aging in an enemy's capital, while a real heir grows up back home. The rift will open on its own. So don't push. Give him a nominal post by imperial decree. Then he cannot leave without treason, and in time, the wedge does the rest. That was the trap, seen from the outside. And you have to understand, they'd found the truth. The Liu Shan wedge was real. It was the exact fault line I lived on top of every day. The one that ends, in the history I remember, with white silk. Cao Cao's smartest man had looked at me and found, on the first try, the one thing that could actually destroy me. He'd just found it from the wrong direction. He thought the wedge would open between me and my father through neglect and distance. He didn't know I'd already lived that future, and buried the wound so deep that his cage, and his emperor, and his beautiful mature widows were all reaching for a nerve I'd killed on purpose years ago. And then, in the corner, an old man who'd said nothing finally spoke. Jia Su, the quietest and most terrifying mind Cao Cao owned. A man who advised as little as possible because his advice tended to reshape empires. He didn't offer a plan to hold me. He offered a way to poison me at the root. Give the handsome young man gold and a woman, he said, without naming whose daughter she is. Get her with child. And then tell the whole world that Liu Feng is Cao Cao's son-in-law. Even if he escapes home someday, he'll have left a child in Suchang for us to raise, a hostage in his own blood, and a rift between him and Liu Bei that no reconciliation ever fully closes. Even Cao Cao called that one wicked, and then adopted it anyway, and improved it, and sent me his own daughters. So that was the room deciding my fate. The finest strategist of the age, who found my true weakness on the first try. The cannibal, who at least knew a great general when he saw one. And the quiet old devil, who wanted to breed a wedge into my own bloodline. 3 of the sharpest minds under heaven, bent entirely on breaking one caged young man, and every one of them was solving the wrong problem, because they were all trying to split Liu Feng from Liu Bei, and they had no idea that the split they were engineering was the one thing I'd already survived in another life. The one thing I now spent every waking hour making sure would never, ever show. First though, Cao Cao tried to buy me the way you'd think, with women. And here my old running joke came home to roost, because everyone in the world knew Liu Feng the lecher, and now the most powerful man in the north was going to try to unlock me with the key I'd hung on my own front door. He gave me 10 stunning maids. I sent them back. He consulted his advisors, baffled. Isn't he supposed to be a lecher? And old Jia Shu, the quietest and most terrifying mind in that whole court, suggested a nastier version. Give the handsome young man 1,000 pieces of gold and a woman. Don't say whose daughter she is. And once she's pregnant, tell the world Liu Feng is Cao Cao's own son-in-law. Even if I later went home, I'd have left a child in Xuchang for Cao Cao to raise as a hostage. Cao Cao called it a wicked plan, and then improved on it by simply offering me 2 of his own daughters, both come of age, sent to my mansion to serve. I let them make the beds and pour the tea and touched none of it, and just burned incense and prayed for my uncle, day after day, and it drove Cao Cao to distraction. Isn't he a lecher? Are these girls not to his taste? And Jia Zhu, remembering a detail from Guiyang, murmured that in the south, the young master had taken a widowed noblewoman into his house, a mature beauty. And Cao Cao's eyes lit up, because now he thought he understood what I liked. He sent for Diao Chan. Yes, that Diao Chan, the woman who once turned Dong Zhuo and Liu Bu against each other and saved the Han, now a widow past 30 living quietly in Xuzhou, more beautiful than every woman in Cao Cao's harem combined. He had her brought to Xuchang and prepared to hand her to me like a key made specifically for my lock. Through all of it, Sun Qian was losing his mind. Because this became the whole texture of my days in Xuchang, me playing the incorruptible righteous prisoner and my honest scholar hovering at my elbow, seeing a seductress behind every screen. Every time a beautiful woman appeared at Cao's court, 2 words went off in Sun Qian's head: vixen, trap, and he'd plant himself in front of me like a small furious rooster, hissing warnings. Young master, don't be bewitched. Young master, this one's a honey trap. Young master, you must not fall for beauty. He'd survived my whole reputation and now lived in constant terror that the one flaw in Liu Feng was finally about to sink us both. It would have been touching if it hadn't been so loud. And the thing is, he was watching the wrong door. I've told you the truth about my famous lechery. It was a mask I hung out front so no one would look at the wolf. But Cao Cao didn't know that, and neither did Sun Qian, and I could use both of their misunderstandings at once. So when they finally brought Diao Chan out and Cao Cao offered her, this virtuous woman, all alone, why not let her care for you? I did the thing that made Sun Qian nearly faint. I nodded. The Prime Minister's words make sense, and I accepted her and thanked him, while Sun Qian slapped his own thigh in horror, certain the great Liu Feng had finally been undone by a pretty face. He hadn't. It was a stall, and only a stall, a way to make Cao Cao believe he'd finally found the lever, so he'd stop reaching for uglier ones. Let him think he owned me. A man who thinks he's caught you stops setting new traps. That's all it ever was. But the beauty campaign was the soft approach. The hard one came the day Cao Cao finally sat me down himself, and it was the most dangerous conversation I'd have in that whole city. Because Cao Cao doesn't win men the way lesser men do. He wins them the way my father does. He makes it personal. He had my uncle brought out, alive, well, plainly never sick a day, so I could see him, and so I'd know exactly whose hand held the old man's life. And then, over wine, in front of his sons and his court, Cao Cao looked at me for a long moment and began to weep. Real weeping. Not a warlord's performance, a father's. Shaking his head, tapping the table, tears down into his beard. And when Sun Yu gently asked whom the Prime Minister was crying for, Cao Cao pointed at me and said, so alike, it really is. He was crying for Cao Ang, his eldest, his heir, dead young at Wancheng, dead because of a mistake Cao Cao himself made, a wound that had never once closed. And he looked at me, brave, filial, the age his son would have been, and he grieved. Come closer, child, he said, and let this old man look at you. And his son Cao Zhi warned him, Father, no, he'll take you hostage. And Cao Cao waved it off and got up and came to me himself, and took my arm and pulled me right to his desk, defenseless, within a sword's draw. I could have killed him then. One motion. The most wanted man in the world, his hand on my arm, no guard fast enough. I didn't even reach for it. And then Cao Cao leaned to my ear and whispered the thing that told me exactly who I was up against. If I simply announce I'm freeing you, the soldiers won't accept it. If you want to leave, take me hostage. I'll let you. I nearly laughed at the beauty of it, because it was a gift and a cage at once. Anyone else would have wept with gratitude and bowed, but I'd been on the wrong end of my father's warmth too long to trust a powerful man's tears, and I knew that a man who dares to hand you his own throat has a card you haven't seen yet. So I stayed calm, and I called him Prime Minister to keep the cold distance in it, and I did not take the hostage he offered, because think it through. I grabbed Cao Cao, I march for the gate, and halfway there an imperial edict arrives ordering me to stay. An edict I cannot defy without becoming a traitor to the very Han my father claims to serve. And there I am, trapped between the Emperor's command and my own escape, a hostage in my arms and no legal way to move. That was the card, and Cao Cao played it the next morning, in the throne room in front of the puppet emperor and the whole court, and it was the finest trap anyone had ever built for me, because it was made entirely out of the one thing I could never fight, loyalty to the Han. They summoned me to court, and I met the Son of Heaven for the first time. Emperor Xian sat the throne like a man renting it, uneasy, with a eunuch at each elbow, and Cao Cao in a great chair beside the dragon table, the real weight in the room. I bowed to the emperor and pointedly ignored Cao Cao, and the emperor brightened at the sight of a young man from the loyal south and asked after my father, and Cao Cao coughed twice, and the emperor stopped mid-sentence. And there, in one small silence, you could see the whole tragedy of the Han. The emperor praised my deeds, 4 commanderies, brave as the old Marquis of Champion, and every praise darkened Cao Cao's face, because those were Cao Cao's cities I'd taken, and this puppet emperor was using my record as a tiny deniable jab at the man who owned him. And then Cao Cao, cold, turned the emperor's admiration into the trap. So young, so accomplished, why doesn't your majesty reward him richly? And the emperor, sweating, asked how. And Cao Cao bowed and said, make Liu Feng the king of Yidu. A king. The whole room reeled. Sun Qian's mouth fell open. Even Xun Yu blinked, because it was a gift with 3 knives in it. First, my father was still only a marquis, and here was his son being made a king, an insult designed to poison the 2 of us. Second, a king must stay in his fief, and Yidu sat in the north, on Cao Cao's own ground. The title was a golden collar that would lock me in his territory forever. Third, no man of a foreign surname had ever been made a king. It broke the ancestral law of the Han, and if Liu Feng took the crown and broke it first, then when Cao Cao later made himself a duke and then a king, who could point at the law? I'd be the crack that let him through the wall. I refused it before the emperor could even finish being confused, loudly, on the Han's own sacred ground. Your Majesty, no. The White Horse Oath says no man without merit may be a marquis, and no man but a Liu may be a king. My surname is Ko. My merit is small. I am not fit to be a marquis, let alone a king. And my father, Liu Bei, still lives. If anyone is to be raised, raise the father before the son. You must not break the ancestral law of the Han. Watertight, resounding. I'd taken the Han's own law and held it over my head like a shield, and turned Cao Cao's gift into a public defense of the dynasty. The emperor said, well said, and glanced at Cao Cao, and Cao Cao fell silent, because to insist now would be to argue against the ancestral law himself, in open court, which was the one thing he wasn't ready to do yet. So he came down a rung. Fine, then commander of the Feathered Forest Guard, in charge of the Imperial Army, the Palace Guard. Which sounded like power, and was another cage, a purely nominal post that would keep me in the capital, close to the emperor I could never actually help, a bird in a gilded room right beside the biggest bird. I refused that one too, with a lie so shameless it wrapped back around to sincere. My late mother, I said, once read a poem about a feathered forest guardsman who abused a virtuous woman, and it made her weep, and now that she's gone, I cannot bear to take a post that once broke her heart. You cannot dig up a dead woman to check. Cao Cao didn't care what I did, so long as I stayed in Suchong, so he turned to Xun Yu, any openings in the secretariat, and Xun Yu, my new friend, offered exactly the post I'd been steering toward without either of us saying so. Minister of the Northern Office of Foreign Affairs, a small rank, a real one, and, this is the whole point, an office whose entire job is dealing with the Xiongnu and the border tribes, which meant it could send its minister out of the capital, on official business, with the Prime Minister's own blessing. Every other title Cao Cao offered was a wall. This one had a door in it. And Xun Yu, who understood everything and said nothing, put it on the table for me, because a man loyal to the Han does not, in the end, want to see a loyal young Han official caged for life. I took it, and the moment I did, the emperor issued the edict that snapped the trap shut, because now I was a Han official by imperial decree, which meant if I left the capital without leave, I wasn't escaping. I was defying the Son of Heaven, the highest treason there is. Cao Cao didn't need to chain me. He'd change me with the one loyalty my father built our whole house on. I could disobey any man in that city except the emperor, and the emperor did whatever Cao Cao whispered. Sun Qian, out in the corridor, wanted to weep. We really can't leave this time. Why didn't you refuse at all? And I asked him if he'd understood what he'd just watched. Cao Cao offered me a king's crown, and I refused. He offered me the palace guard, and I refused. But there is no refusing the emperor's decree. So instead of refusing, I chose the one post shaped like a way out. And now I look for the seam in it. The Feathered Forest Guard rots in the capital forever. The Foreign Office rides to the border on business. One of those cages has a door. Sun Chen stared and then stroked his beard and slowly began to understand that his lecherous, doomed young master had just walked into an inescapable trap and immediately started measuring it for an exit. So I took the post and I settled in and I waited, because measuring a trap and getting out of one are different things, and Cao Cao is not Sun Quan. The days in Xuchang settled into a strange, quiet siege, and I want to show you a few of them because the whole war I was fighting there had no swords in it. Every day I burned incense in my mansion and prayed aloud for my uncle and cried out now and then for anyone listening. Every day Cao Cao sent something to soften me, gold, silk, women, and every day I returned all of it except the 2 daughters he'd planted, whom I kept only for show and touched none. And every day Cheng Yu's spies reported back the same maddening thing. Liu Feng sits in his house, asks after Liu Mi, burns incense, prays, and does nothing else. It drove Cao Cao half out of his mind, because a man he could not bribe, could not seduce, could not frighten, and could not read is the one kind of man a schemer cannot file away. He asked Zhou whether the women simply weren't to my taste. He turned the problem over and over, and he never once landed on the truth that the lecher was the disguise and the wolf underneath had no appetite for anything Cao Cao owned. But here's the part that shows you why I was winning even locked in his capital, because the report that reached Cao Cao wasn't only that I refused his gifts, it was who I was, spreading down from Jingzhou ahead of me the stories of how I ran Jiangsha. They told him about the porridge, how in a famine I'd fed a whole province and thrown a handful of dirt in every relief pot so the rich wouldn't crowd out the poor, and how not one soul under my rule had frozen that winter. And Cao Cao, who understood good governance better than any man alive, heard that and did the one thing that made him more dangerous than all his armies. He praised me. He gathered his sons and told them, "This is a loyal and filial man. Learn from him." And the sons bowed and agreed, and the moment he was gone, sneered. Cao Ji, the poet, wondered aloud what there was to learn. Composing verses? Chasing women? Cao Jiang, the warrior, clenched his fist and said he'd like to test himself against me sometime. Only Cao Pi, the eldest, the careful one, said nothing at all and smiled a small smile, and I made a note of that smile, because a young man who stays silent while his brothers show their hands is a young man to watch. History would prove me right about that particular silence. And in the corner of all this, Cao Cao meditated on lust the way a burned man meditates on fire. He'd wanted to take Guan Yu's woman once, and refused Guan Yu the woman Guan Yu wanted, and lost Guan Yu forever. He'd indulged his own appetite at Wancheng, and it had cost him his eldest son and his best guard, and nearly his own life. 2 mistakes, both from the same poison. And here he sat, dangling women at a young man he wanted, terrified of making the third. It's a strange thing to watch the most feared man in the world tiptoe around the exact weakness you invented, specifically so he'd tiptoe. So the siege went on, and it looked, from the outside, like Cao Cao was slowly winning, the caged sun settling in, softening, growing roots in the enemy's capital. Xun Yu believed the wedge was doing its work. Cao Cao believed time was on his side. Even Sun Qian, watching me pray and refuse and wait, sometimes worried I'd given up. None of them could see the thing I was actually doing, because it looked exactly like doing nothing. I was letting them all be certain. A certain enemy stops improvising. Cao Cao thought he'd found my lever and pulled it, so he stopped inventing new ones. Xun Yu thought time would open the wedge, so he counseled patience instead of a lock. Every soul in that capital was quietly settling into the comfortable belief that Liu Feng was contained, which was precisely the state I needed them in, because a contained man they don't watch closely. And I had one very specific thing I needed no one watching closely for. I needed a reason to leave the capital, and I needed to already be a foreign office minister when it came. The audience with the emperor gave me the second, and a lunatic screaming at my gate had just given me a plan for the first. The man at my gate was howling. "Liu Feng, you stole my wife. You promised me 800 coins, and now you deny it? Come out, everyone come and see this Liu Feng, all righteous words and stealing other men's wives, this lecher." A crowd was gathering in the street, delighted, and when my servants opened the gate, the wailing madman flipped the hair out of his filthy face and turned around, and it was Pang Tong. Fledgling Phoenix. In my prison-turned-study back in Jiangsha, now standing in the streets of Xuchang shrieking that I'd cuckolded him. And I understood the genius of it in half a second, which is the only speed anything Pang Tong does can be understood at. A man who sneaks quietly toward the captive Liu Feng gets caught and interrogated by Cao Cao's spies within the hour. But a raving cuckold making a public scandal? That fits Liu Feng's reputation perfectly. Cao Cao wanted to smear me with women anyway. A wronged husband screaming about my lechery in the square was exactly the kind of thing Cao Cao would let run. So I played my part, pointed at the madman, called for him to seized, dragged inside for personal interrogation. Sun Qian, no fool, cleared the household under the excuse of protecting my reputation, and once we were alone, I pulled the gag out of Pang Tong's mouth, and he coughed and demanded water, and drank it in one long pull, and glared at me. If we don't curse loud enough, everyone guesses we're on the same side. I asked if he wasn't afraid of being recognized, the famous fledgling phoenix, wandering Cao Cao's capital. He scoffed. Who knows what fledgling phoenix looks like? I'm a country bumpkin, a lazy nobody. I could stand in the market and shout, "I'm fledgling phoenix," and not one soul would believe me. And even Shu Shu, the one man in this city who'd know my face, knows and cannot say. Which was, infuriatingly, true, and delivered with the exact smug expression that made me want to hand him another impossible math problem. Then he turned serious and lowered his voice. My father had sent him. Because Zhuge Liang and Pang Tong had both known I'd fall into Cao Cao's hands the moment that letter arrived, and my father had been unable to eat or sleep for worry, afraid my temper would get me killed. So Pang Tong had come, through a city on lockdown, disguised as a lunatic, to deliver a plan, and 8 words from my father. Conceal your nature, temporarily submit to Cao, which was, word for word, the exact thing I'd been telling myself about my father for 2 years. Hide the wolf, play the harmless thing. Wait, it gave me an odd feeling to hear it come back the other way. My father counseling me to wear a mask, never dreaming the mask I wore most carefully was the one I wore for him. And there was a thing under the message that I sat with for a long time after Pang Tong stopped talking. My father had every reason to write me off. A caged son in Cao Cao's capital is a liability, a hostage that hobbles everything he does. The cold move is to mourn me and cut me loose. Instead, he'd sent his best strategist through enemy lines with a rescue plan and a promise, back in Jingzhou in under 3 months. He was going to spend a province to buy me back and a genius to keep me alive in the meantime. I shook my head to clear it. He values my abilities, I told myself, not me. If I were still the plain original Liu Feng, he'd never have bothered. It's a business. It's only ever been a business. I almost believed it. Pang Tong, meanwhile, had made himself comfortable and had no intention of leaving, since a spy who came all this way and then vanished would be hunted. But a spy who simply stayed at my side, in the open, Cao Cao couldn't easily touch. And when the report reached Cao Cao that a lunatic named Long Guang was in fact Liu Feng's man, Cao Cao ordered every stranger who approached me seized and questioned, but left the ugly attendant already inside my house alone, because dealing with a man at Liu Feng's own side was inconvenient, and because he was trying to guess what message the fellow had come to deliver. Cheng Yu guessed it exactly. He won't tell us the message, he told Cao Cao, but watch, soon he'll make an unusual move. Whatever the move is, that's the purpose he came for. He was right, of course. There was a move coming. It was just going to look, from the outside, like the last thing in the world a man plotting an escape would do, because I was about to volunteer, cheerfully, to ride even deeper away from home, into the grasslands of the Xiongnu, and I had a very specific reason for wanting to go. Cao Cao gave me my first assignment as Minister of the Northern Office, and it was a door disguised as an errand. The Xiongnu were raiding the border. He wanted a treaty, stop the raids, renew the old brotherhood, trade cloth and salt for horses and cattle, no more invasions. And there was one more thing, said quietly, the way Cao Cao says the things that matter most. Years ago, a dear friend of mine died and left a daughter, a woman of rare talent, and she ended up carried off into the household of the Xiongnu left-wise king. Bring her back, no matter the gold, no matter the cost. Sai Jiaoji, Sai Yan, I want you to understand that I said yes to nearly everything Cao Cao asked with a knife behind my teeth, but not to this, because I knew who she was. The most gifted woman of the age, a poet and a musician, the daughter of a great scholar, carried off across the desert and held among a foreign tribe for 12 years. Of all the beautiful women of that whole bloody era, she was the one I actually ached for, not to possess, but because a mind like that, caged in the grass for 12 years, is the kind of waste that should make anyone furious. Cao Cao offered me an errand to lure me deeper from home, and hidden inside it was the one job I'd have volunteered for on my own. And it was the door. The Xiongnu sit to the northwest, and from their grasslands a man could ride west past Xiliang, south from there to Tianshui, down to Hanzhong, and from Hanzhong all the way home to Nan Commandery and my father. A journey nearly as long as the old pilgrimage to fetch the scriptures, but a road home that ran clean around every wall Cao Cao had. So I said yes to the mission that took me farthest from Jingzhou, precisely because it was the only one pointed, in the long way around, back toward it. Cao Cao sent me with Xiahou Yuan to command, and his own son Cao Zhang along for seasoning. Cao Zhang was my age, all muscle and yellow beard and open contempt. He'd made no name yet, while I'd taken 4 commanderies, and it ate at him. He wanted to fight me from the first morning. I gave him nothing to fight. Arrived exactly on time so he couldn't punish me for lateness, kept my head down on the march, slept in my tent, and by the time we neared the grasslands, he'd grudgingly stopped hating me, mostly because I kept praising his courage to his uncle and never once took his bait. Everyone has a lever. His was being told he mattered. We came up onto the steppe, and it opened green to the horizon, tents with Han banners flying to welcome the envoys, rows of bare-chested tribesmen singing and dancing with sides of butchered cattle, mare's milk wine in wooden cups. The left-wise king came out to meet us in a long robe and a felt hat, a curved sword at his hip, and greeted us in stiff but fluent Chinese. The Xiongnu nobility had married Han princesses for generations, and half of them had gone soft and literate on Han culture. And this one had Cai Yan herself in his tent, teaching a foreign court to love a dynasty it kept raiding. They led us into the great tent, 2 rows of tribal chiefs on the left, the Han envoys on the right, 2 seats in the center. The left-wise king sat Xiahou Yuan beside him, and everyone smiled, and the wine went round, and the whole grand, harmonious piece of it hummed in the air. And I sat down at the very edge of the known world, a foreign office minister who was really a fugitive, an envoy who was really a wolf, a man 3 provinces and a desert from the only home he had, and I did what I always do. I looked past the smiles and started counting the knives under the table. Because peace, I've learned, is only ever a truce between 2 forces of equal strength, and the moment the balance tips, one side gets greedy and the other gets buried. There was greed in that tent, on both sides, under the singing, and somewhere behind a curtain was a woman I'd come to carry back into the light, and somewhere at my back, a whole road home was waiting to be walked, west and south and around, past Xiliang and Tianshui and Hanzhong, all the way to Jingzhou. Let me tell you the truth I only take out in the dark, since we're at the edge of the world with nobody listening. I'd started as the adopted son, foreign surname, bottom of the family, a nobody riding into a massacre. And in 2 years, I'd taken half of Jingzhou, humiliated Zhou Yu and Sun Quan both, extracted the mother of Eastern Wu, walked into Cao Cao's own capital and out the far side of it. And I was about to slip Cao Cao's leash across a desert while carrying home the lost daughter of the Han. I'd out-schemed Zhou Yu, out-crazied Sun Quan, outweighted Cao Cao. I had a general for the land and one for the water, and the fledgling phoenix in my pocket, and a father who'd trade a province for me without a breath. And none of it, not one city, not one general, not one clever escape, was the fight I was actually in. Because the real enemy was never Zhou Yu, who I could rattle with a cup, never Sun Quan, who I could break with a laugh, never even Cao Cao, who I respected too much to hate. The man who ends me, in the history I remember, isn't any of them. It's the one who weeps at my grave. The kind, benevolent, bottomlessly merciful man whose mercy was always, only, for other people, who raised a loyal son and then handed him a 3-foot length of white silk when a whisper said the loyal son had grown too hard to control. That's the last boss, my own father. And the white silk is always in the room, folded, waiting, no matter how far across the desert I ride. So I'll bring Cheyenne home. I'll slip the leash, I'll take the long road back to the man who loves me and would kill me in the same afternoon, and mean both. And I'll wear the mask every mile of it, the lecher, the fool, the good son. Because the day the whisper comes, there has to be nothing for it to land on. They'd all been playing the board against me. Sun Quan, Zhou Yu, Cao Cao, moving cities and armies and brides, and losing, every time, to a man they thought was a joke. None of them ever understood that I wasn't playing the board. I was playing for the one thing none of them could give me, and only one of them could take, a way to be great, and beloved, and alive, all at once, in a house that had only ever had room for 2 of the 3. That game isn't over, not by a very long road. But that, the desert crossing, the lost daughter of the Han, and the long quiet war between a wolf and the father who'll never know he's raising one, is where the story goes from here.